Chapter 47, Post-Gap Arc, Here Comes the Thunder. Naruto. Drifting. Here comes the thunder. 6 months later. In a distant part of the continent, far out of the way of the 5 great nations, a very sinister experiment was currently underway. Nestled deep within the newly repaired and fully armored, mobile fortress that was the Land of Sky, in a dome-shaped chamber centralized around an enormous, circular platform, a short man in a white, high-collar trench coat, with white hair and pale white skin, could be seen staring up towards the skylight above. His gaze transfixed upon the elegant glass ceiling of the room, complete with geometric shapes and patterns mathematically molded into the panes, giving it an almost seal-like appearance. The man then turned his attention back to the sides of the room. Eyes cutting through the shadow sitting just beyond the ray of light beaming down on him, the leader of the village and head of the shadowy organization raised a hand and directed it towards his crew. The sound of rushing footsteps indicated groups of foot soldiers moving about in the darkness, attending to the tasks they'd been assigned and promptly following the orders of their superior. Once he was certain everything was in place, the village leader once again turned his attention to the control panel, where he saw his partner in crime Shino standing by and waiting. The old man in the medical robes was obviously looking forward to this. "Preparations are complete, sir," the medical genius responded, pad in hand and eyes set firmly on the center of the stage. Face covered in bandages, the white-haired Hirako gave his partner a beaming smile before nodding in his direction. "Very well then." His gaze then snapped towards the exit, bring in the subject. The moment he uttered his command, the doors to the enormous chamber opened up. The light from outside pouring into the midst of the hub marked the arrival of 3 other figures to the scene, one of which was being dragged across the room by her captors. Several seconds of waiting later and hearing the sounds of struggling bouncing off of the walls, Hirako watched as his 2 subordinates brought their prisoner up to his level and forced her to kneel before him. Brought to submission, the leader instructed the 2 to release the girl, which they did, and approached the winded individual with a delightful gleam in his eyes. Her lithe, curvaceous body adorned in a 2-piece, black and yellow jumpsuit consisting of short shorts, a zipped-up, figure-hugging jacket, and her long, wild, blonde hair growing down to her waist and fanning all around her, the prisoner revealed herself to be none other than Kyoko. The Kirigakure Kunoichi, covered in various bruises and obviously suffering from several hours of torment, panted heavily as she kneeled before the ruler of the Sky Village. When she slowly looked up to face him, she revealed a face covered in bruises, with one eye nearly swollen over. As soon as her beautiful blue eyes met his, the man reached out and gently cupped her cheek. Just as I suspected. You've grown into a fine young woman." Upon inspecting her state and attire, moving her by the chin from side to side a couple of times, Hirako then clicked his tongue and leaned away. "While not in mint condition, you're still an extremely valuable commodity to our village, a vision of loveliness that only one such as myself can truly appreciate." Spitting to the side and ignoring her glaring injuries, the now 17-year-old teen, with her arms bound tightly behind her, grinned up at the individual and responded to his compliments in kind. "Flattery won't get you anywhere with me, shorty. Unlike some of the other floozies I'm sure you're used to flirting with, I'm not that easy." Hirako's immediate response was to chuckle. "That much is obvious. After what you did to the first team I sent after you, I knew it would take a lot more than a few dozen of my grunts to convince you to come along." His eyes twinkled with excitement. "You have a strong spirit, Kyoko-chan. I respect that." Smirking, the girl continued to leer at her host while he continued to regard her with a sense of admiration and longing. "So what happens now? I assume you didn't drag me all the way up here just so we could have this little chat." "Oh, no. No. Of course not," Hirako replied while taking a big step forward. "The reason I brought you here is a little more complicated than that. You see, you're not just here as a guest of honor." He then leaned in so that his face hovered directly beside her ear. "You're here because you're about to become part of something beautiful." This earned the villain a frown from his Kunoichi prisoner and, the moment Kyoko saw the man lean away, a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Well, I hope you don't disappoint me with it. You see, I have a very busy schedule today and I don't want to be kept waiting." A childish giggle from the man followed her gutsy retort. "I assure you my dear, I won't." Standing up to full height, Hirako began to march backwards at a labored pace. "You show great talent as a Kunoichi, and I pride myself on having an eye for that kind of talent. Your Kekkai Genkai is also quite fearsome, even amongst the strongest shinobi Kirigakure has to offer. Not to mention one of a kind. Steel release." Feigning a gasp, the man clapped a hand over his chest and clenched his trench coat as if he were suffering from a sudden case of heartache. "What an amazing ability. How I wish I had something like that in my possession." Smile vanishing, Kyoko narrowed her eyes on the pale-skinned individual, whom she suddenly saw jerk upright and bring his hand around, which he used to convey a sense of surprise. "Oh, wait. What am I thinking? Of course I have something like that in my possession." Leering dangerously, Hirako then used that same hand to gesture toward the girl, whom he saw tense at the illumined look he gave her next. "You, my dear." The young woman snarled. "What are you getting at? In just a few moments, underneath the midday sun, your body will be broken down into a writhing, living mass of fluids and cells, one that will carry with it all of your signature traits and characteristics. Then, once your form has completely reverted into a tangible, gelatinous river of malleable energy, it will be assimilated into my body, where it will combine with my cells and imprint onto me all of your precious physical capabilities and jutsu," Hirako stated, causing the girl's eyes to widen in shock. Then, with his menacing grin still in play, he pointed between them, before lowering his arm to his side and straightening his back. "You and I will become a single, perfect entity, and together, the two of us will accomplish wonders." Stunned at this revelation, Kyoko stared across at the shinobi as if he were insane. But then, once realization of her fate settled in, her expression scrunched up into one of anger and she regarded the man with nothing but contempt and disgust. "You're a sick, twisted, evil bastard." Hirako giggled, guilty, and bowed to her. "I look forward to working with you in the future, Kyoko-chan." Enthusiasm noted, he then turned and nodded towards Shino. "You may begin the procedure." Once his instruction was given and received, the good doctor wasted no time in activating the machine, a loud humming sound ringing out as power began flooding into the dark chamber. Glaring across at the pale-skinned leader as he went about commencing the operation that would soon combine her body with his, Kyoko was cut off from her stewing when one of the two guards that had escorted her up to the podium walked forward. When the girl looked up, she saw a tall, impressive man adorned in a brown, high-collar jacket, with sandal boots, bandages wrapped around parts of his face and over one of his eyes, and an enormous, steel gauntlet with holes on its protective side bolted to his right arm. Noticing the man had a bit of a slumped posture, when the kunoichi size trailed up to his face, Kyoko saw a rugged young male with a scar across his cheek and a thin jaw glaring down at her, his one eye burning with scorn. After a moment of silence and staring back at one another, a smile slowly formed on the guard's face and he nodded down to his master's captive. "You don't know how happy it makes me to finally see you like this. After 3 years of blood, sweat and tears, I'll consider this whole thing a reward for all of my hard work and patience." Blinking as she looked the figure over, the blonde-haired girl then balked in surprise and squinted to get a better bearing on the imposing shinobi. "You're that boy from the Chunin exams, from the Otogekyo team." "Dosu," the man responded in a gravelly voice. Name given, he then brought up his left fist and punched her across the face, sending blood splattering across the floor. Shaking his knuckles out and watching the girl slump and cough, the man with the enormous, mechanical arm smirked and stepped away. "That's for humiliating me." Once he saw the girl look back at him with an unpleasant scowl, he slipped his one hand into his pocket and marched off of the stage, showing the girl his back while a smug smile framed his face. "Hope you enjoy hell, bitch. Sayonara." He then vanished into the shadows. Staring after the man's shoulders, a now thoroughly awake Kyoko shook her head and looked ahead of her again. When she did, she heard the loud humming of machinery die down to a continuous tone, which signaled the end of the machine's power-up. Gaze fixing upon the white-haired man in the coat, she saw him turn towards her and smile, an expression which was then followed by a cheerful remark. "It's time for the ceremony." Kyoko, remaining as steadfast as before even in the wake of the brutal hammering, then gave the man a cocky smirk. "You won't win." Her words causing the leader to frown, the blonde gestured to him impishly. "Whatever plan you have for the shinobi nations, it will fail. Because no matter how much power you gain or how high your empire will rise, in the end, all of it will come crashing down on top of you." She then gave an amused chortle. "You can ignore me if you want, but know this, the day you think you've won everything, the day you think the world has become yours, you're going to die screaming, and I'm going to be there every step of the way, watching you and laughing." Though it sounded like a desperate threat, it was the only thing the girl could say at a time like this in an effort to try and instill a small amount of fear within the prick. Despite how dangerous the man came across and how vast and far-reaching his power seemed, this girl was adamant in getting a last word in. After all, she wasn't beaten. Not yet. Not while she still had breath in her body and a hope that soared above even the darkest planes of existence. She had friends out there who were out looking for her. Though she was certain they would find this place and cause this guy all kinds of grief, there was one other person out there she believed that could beat this scumbag. He was one of her closest friends and one of the strongest people she knew. Not to mention he was the first person to ever beat her in a straight-up fight. That was more than enough for her to believe in him. Scowling back at the kunoichi smirking confidently in his direction, Hirako regarded her spirited proclamation with an annoyed grunt, before bringing his hands together and forming a hand seal. "I'll take that under advisement." Flipping through 2 more, he then executed his technique. In the blink of an eye, the leader's body emitted from it a pulpous mass of deep blue, viscous fluid that splattered across the floor around him. As soon as it hit the concrete, it began to bubble and boil, growing in size and quantity, and then, with lightning speed, zipped towards the kunoichi and wrapped around her. At that exact moment, the sunlight beating down from above was suddenly eclipsed when the enormous machine that was the room whirring around them suddenly shifted a gigantic lens directly over the panes, magnifying the light to a single point. Once the light was amplified by the chakra-enhanced glass, the rest of Hirako's transformation began. The ground on which we are standing on is a slab of carved stone taken from Mount Shumasen itself, representing the element of earth. The skylight above with the simulated eclipse embodies the element of heaven. And your flesh that is to be sacrificed, Kyoko-chan, fulfills the part of the equation that is human. These are the 3 main components necessary to fulfill the conditions for this stage of the Chimera technique, and the very step that will inevitably complete my transformation, Hirako spoke, seeing the kunoichi writhe and struggle against the liquid binding her. Feeling the light's heat blazing down on top of her, the teen eventually ceased struggling and glared up. When she heard the man cackle and saw his eyes fix upon her with a devilish shadow, the kunoichi from Kiri allowed one last huff from her lungs before a sad grin reappeared on her bruised face. "Kick this guy's ass. Naruto-kun." Last thought spoken, Kyoko closed her eyes to mask her tears before, without hesitation, she accepted her fate. As soon as she did, the viscous liquid surrounding her enveloped her completely, her body breaking down in a heartbeat to become one with the fluid. The second she disappeared into the substance, the mask quickly returned to its host and reunited with Hirako's body, slapping itself against his form and sinking back into his skin. In mere moments, the slime was gone, leaving the caster the last thing standing in the center of the platform. It was done. Taking that as a sign that the process was complete, Shino shut off the machine, removing the lens from above and watching as the village leader lowered his arms and breathed a sigh of relief. When silence reigned, the medical ninja approached the stage. Stepping up onto the stone ring, he walked up to his shorter counterpart and looked down at him in concern. Well? Did it work? Jerking back into life, the white-haired village leader glanced across at the old man behind him and narrowed his eyes. Did it work? Turning around and looking down at his hands thoughtfully, Hirako tested the weight and feel of his limbs for a moment before facing the darkness ahead of him. It was then, while Shino was waiting patiently for an answer, he watched the man suddenly pull a kunai out of nowhere and stab himself in the chest. However, the instant his blade made contact, instead of impaling the villain's flesh like it would anybody else, it shattered like glass, an event that had the doctor smirk in success. A laugh of triumph escaping his lips, Hirako tossed the knife away, before spinning around and revealing to his partner that all of his skin was covered in a shiny, black coating of metal. You tell me, the obsessive leader asked in a metallic tone of voice, which echoed off of every wall in the chamber. An amused chuckle leaving him at the sight of his boss's new form, Shino placed his hands upon his hips and nodded affirmatively. I'll take that as a yes. Oh. Meanwhile, many miles elsewhere? A loud clatter of a small glass rang out when Itachi inadvertently ended up knocking over his cup of tea, spilling its contents all over the table. The act, while causing a momentary stir in the restaurant he and his partner were eating at, earned a slightly startled glance from the young man himself. His teammate on the other hand, lowering his drink, stared across at the raven-haired shinobi from under the shade of his straw hat while at the same time regarding the mess with a serious glance. Something wrong? Kisame asked, giving his partner a strange look before staring down at the spillage more intently, which was now being attended to by the store's waitress. It's not like you to have an accident like that? Remaining quiet at first, Itachi wordlessly asked for another one, which the waitress gladly obliged and went back to the serving desk. When she returned moments later, the young Akatsuki member was once again able to engage in conversation. It's nothing. Just a feeling. Yeah. Whatever the heck that was, it was almost akin to a cold chill. However, unlike most others, this one was stronger and more ominous. As a battle-hardened shinobi and former captain in the ANBU Black Ops, he was a lot more unwavering in the face of superstitious nonsense and was able to confront such scenarios with a clear head. But for some reason when he tipped that glass, the sensation he felt beforehand had caused his body to falter for the briefest of moments. For someone like him, it was unsettling, and Kisame knew this. Nevertheless, deciding to play it off as just a harmless accident, the shark-faced man smirked and returned to his meal. Poking his chopsticks into his yakisoba, he continued eating away at a leisurely pace. After slurping up another batch of noodles, he then pointed back at his partner. You know, it's bad luck to spill a cup of freshly brewed tea before the start of a mission. It's kind of like breaking a sandal strap or meeting a black cat along the road. Maybe your Mangekyo stigma is finally starting to catch up to you? Remaining still and calm as always, the ever-stoic Uchiha then glanced at his partner over the rim of his collar. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Kisame snickered. Come on. I've been with you for how long and you think I wouldn't notice your failing eyesight? The blue-skinned man shook his head and brought his tea to his lips, at the same time his partner gripped the base of his cup. Once he'd taken a swig, the swordsman then gave a toothy grin. Even though you're seriously good at hiding it, you can't keep stuff like this a secret. Sooner or later, something's bound to give you away. Like the manner in which he walked and the length of his pauses. Though they were only off by a millisecond, Itachi still had a case of a blind man's stumble. True to form though, the man didn't let something like encroaching darkness throw him off his game. The man was a stone-cold killer. Remorseless. Straight to the point. And though he was relaxed and often sought to resolve conflicts as quickly as possible and without violence, he could also be an incredible force to be reckoned with. It's why Kisame liked the guy so much. He was a professional, through and through. And this doesn't bother you one bit? The swordsman cocked his head. If it doesn't bother you, then it doesn't bother me. Besides, from what I can see, you're doing just fine on your own. Looking up, Kisame shared with his fellow rogue a respectful toast. I'm sure you'll let me know when your perspective on the world starts to decrease in quality, so until then, I'll continue working with you as per the norm. Rewarding the man with a blink, Itachi also turned back to his dish of noodles and proceeded to eat. Sitting across from one another, the two Akatsuki members blended seamlessly with their environment out here in the islands of the Land of Water. Though they were quite a ways out from the hidden village, they made extra certain to keep as low a profile as possible, so as to avoid drawing attention to themselves from the local authorities. Thanks to their past experiences as members of their respective Black Ops divisions, this was not a difficult task to accomplish. Still, they were keeping an extra eye out for anyone watching them from a distance. Whether it was the guy directly behind them or a person in a building 2 blocks away, they made sure they were ready to move at a moment's notice. While nudging his sword Samahata in the side and making sure his primary weapon was still there with him, the blue-skinned warrior then looked up and smirked. Since Sasori and Deidara have just captured the Rokubi, I'm guessing Leader Sama will be calling us in to start the sealing process soon. Finishing up his plate of noodles and pushing it aside, Itachi responded promptly with a nod of agreement. Transferring a Biju into that statue will take a lot of time and effort. Even though we have a total of 9 members, it's still going to take us 3 whole days to complete the ceremony, so we'd better make sure we're both well rested for it. Seeing the Uchiha grab his cup encouraged Kisame to do so as well. Once it's done and dusted, the two of us will be able to take it easy for a while, maybe even go on a vacation or something. Sensing something amiss about his teammate's odd remark, Itachi looked up at his partner silently. The second he did so, the young rogue saw the unmistakable look of excitement burning in the tall shinobi's eyes, which quickly drew a raised eyebrow from the Uchiha. Once the Rokubi has been taken care of, it'll be our turn to go hunting. When all he got from the raven-haired boy was a hard stare, the swordsman responded by holding his cup up to him. That's my idea of a relaxing vacation. Itachi blinked. I see. So which one do you think it'll be? The Sanbai, the Yanbi, or the Gobi? Kisame asked, at the same time taking a sip from his drink. The Uchiha shrugged, not sure. Your best guess is as good as mine. My money is on the Sanbai, the swordsman answered with a slight tilt to his head. Word on the street is that there are several other interested parties out there wanting to get their hands on the turtle, including our former colleague Orochimaru and that group of weirdos running around causing trouble. Considering how important these things are, Leader Sama isn't going to want one of his most valued assets falling into the hands of another organization. Odds are he's going to be sending us two to find the three tails. There were a lot of other factors that led Kisame to this conclusion as well. Looking at what they already knew and the current status of the Biju across the 5 great nations, the Nibi and Hachibi were safely holed up inside Kumogakure territory, the Yanbi and Gobi were being sent on missions outside of Iwagakure regularly, the Ichibi was reportedly always surrounded by groups of Sunegakure's strongest shinobi, the Sanbai was wandering aimlessly through the oceans, the location of the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki was currently unknown, and the Nanabi had, for some strange reason, suddenly vanished off the face of the earth. In the group's last meeting, the leader addressed the issue of the missing Nanabi and its host with the rest of the organization, inquiring his subordinates as to her possible whereabouts. But after hours of debate, in which the two-man teams could only give expired rumors as to when and where she was last spotted, not a single trace of the Biju or its container could be found. This baffled the group somewhat, but the issue was quickly dismissed as all of them had other important matters to deal with, namely the Biju they could hunt down. From what Kisame gathered, the Jinchuriki that were going to prove the most difficult for them to capture were the Ichibi, the Kyuubi, the Hachibi, and the Nibi. Not only were the first 3 incredibly powerful individuals without their Biju, with Kakuzu and Mizora giving a spine-chillingly terrifying description as to what the Kyuubi's host was now capable of, but as long as the host of the 2-tailed monster cat was in close proximity of the 8-tailed giant ox, there was no way any of the group's teams would be able to get close to them without fighting a costly battle in the process. And of course there were the strange habits of the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki. 3 years ago, the organization had become aware of the fact that Naruto had left the Hidden Leaf on a training excursion to another country with the legendary Jiraiya of the Sannin, in preparation for the foes that were set to come after him. Even though the group had split and called off all pursuits until the 3 years were up, the leader still felt it best to keep an eye on him. However, when they tried to find out where the boy had gone and what kind of special training he was undertaking, the blonde simply disappeared from the limelight. For the next 3 years the group would hear stories of the blonde popping up in several different places across the continent and even far outside of it, way out of reach of any of their operatives. They'd even heard he'd been involved with a number of films alongside the famous Yuki Fujikase, with some of the members even having had the pleasure of seeing his pictures in the theaters. As it turns out, these were merely part-time projects of the Jonins and didn't reveal anything remotely related to his progress. What's more, they also discovered he never stayed in the same place twice or for long periods of time, always moving and changing locations to throw them off his scent. Though he obviously had a place he returned to frequently, he was so far off the grid and out of the way that they hadn't been able to keep track of him. Hell, even Zetsu and Kisame couldn't locate the brat. Much like them, he'd somehow found a way to suppress his presence and his chakra, as well as his bijus, preventing others from sensing him even when he was nearby. This meant that for the past 3 years he'd taken on the mantle of a ghost. For the Akatsuki, it was like a game of cat and mouse, only the mouse they were after was invisible. It was frustrating, yes, but there was little they could do about it. Naruto's appearance 6 months prior had been the only contact any of them had made with him, and the boy had practically been standing right next to 2 of their members. Granted they were fighting against an Armageddon-level threat, which had nearly resulted in the permanent end of their world and universe, he'd still been that close. Now he was gone. I still can't stop laughing at how badly Kakuzu and Mizora got their asses kicked, Kisame remarked when he and Itachi finally left the restaurant and town following their delightful lunch. Deciding to venture further into the island, where they planned on finding transport back to the mainland later down the line, the pair sauntered on through the wilderness with their heads covered and eyes trained forward. That must have been one hell of a party. Let's just be grateful that the 4 of them were able to defeat Moryu in the end. If it hadn't been for their timely arrival on the battlefield, then neither one of us would be standing here right now, the Uchiha replied with an unflinching stare, the wind whipping at his cloak and causing the bell hanging from his straw hat to chime hauntingly. Yeah. We're all still breathing thanks to those 2. Even so, when the pair of heroes finally made their triumphant return from the hospital with the full story, I swear I had to bite my tongue to keep myself from dropping out of the meeting. The swordsman had been snickering so badly he'd almost lost the signal the group had been communicating with at the time of their last report. Kisame could only thank the fact that the hologram reception that his faction used during their conferences was bad and didn't permit the other teams to see one another's facial expressions. That would have been embarrassing if they could. Deidara lost it. It would have been gold if you did as well. Not that I'm expecting you to anyway, the swordsman chuckled, tugging on his collar and making sure Samahata was still safely strapped to his back. Murmuring a chipper tone as he raised his head a little higher to look up at the sun, the blue-skinned shinobi then gave a low snicker and rolled his shoulder. What with everything that's been going on across the shinobi nations lately, it looks like things are going to get pretty hectic around here, wouldn't you agree, Itachi? Yeah, the Uchiha nodded, his Sharingan eyes suddenly glancing over his shoulder, at the same time his partner's eyes did as well. Though they continued walking unimpeded, following the dirt road further into the island and onward for their next destination, the pair proceeded on with a slightly more cautious step. Reason for this was obvious, but something they didn't respond to beyond the occasional blink. They were being followed. Having sensed two sets of eyes on them back in the village, the two Akatsuki members made it seem as though they were unaware of the fact that they were being hunted. Knowing that whoever was shadowing them wouldn't attack while they were in a public place, the pair had taken their time in paying for their respective meals before setting out for the countryside. It was only until they got further enough away from the village and out of reach of any prying eyes did the creeping feeling of a pair of stalkers finally settle over them. From that point onwards they decided to wait until their would-be pursuers decided to make the first move. When Itachi and Kisame eventually happened upon a point along the road where the path came dangerously close to a cliff overlooking the ocean itself, where dozens of islands could be seen dotting the stretch of blue along the horizon, the shadows tailing after the pair finally, and without warning, pounced. A flash of blue light followed by a concussive explosion seemingly engulfed both Akatsuki members in what seemed like a quick and painless death. When black smoke and embers began gushing into the air from the enormous crater punched into the ground, both rogues rematerialized out of thin air several yards away, looking back at the spot they'd previously been standing and carelessly shrugging off the surprise of the rather violent attack. Woo! That was a close one, Kisame exclaimed, obviously amused at the attempted assassination as he removed the straw hat from his head and tossed it onto the wind. Sharingan eyes narrowing, the Uchiha also removed his hat and threw it away, allowing him a better view of his surroundings. Be careful. This could be trouble. Warnings given, the two cult members then watched silently as the smoke from the explosion started to lift from the strike zone, revealing two unidentifiable silhouettes. Moments later, the wall eventually parted, and the Akatsuki pair soon found themselves facing down two incredibly attractive-looking kunoichi. One of them, who neither of the pair could recall seeing before, was a tall, elegant young woman with ivory-white skin and a fair face, with long black hair growing down to her waist. With only bandages covering her well-endowed chest, showing off a lot of her cleavage, including the underside of her breasts, she was also wearing a flowery kimono, the top of which she'd shed and had hanging around her waist with the rest of it by her obi. With her top half pretty much exposed to the sun, she could also be seen carrying an enormous sword on her back, a mammoth blade which Kisame immediately recognized as Zabuza's head-slicing cleaver, Kubikira Bocho. Showing a bit of leg from underneath her kimono, the fetching, raven-haired teen was also joined by another equally fetching girl. Standing at the exact same height as her teammate, clad in a pair of tight, low-rider jeans that exposed some of her hips, a revealing green bikini halter top, with a white, yellow trim kimono robe draped over her shoulders and two pouches strapped to her back, the figure appeared to be none other than Tsubaki. Her long orange hair now growing down her lower back and her body having taken on a few extra curves, though her chest wasn't as impressive as her partner's, she appeared on the scene with an expression of intensity fixed upon the two Akatsuki henchmen standing across the way. With both sides facing each other down and eyes glued squarely on the opposition, silence fell over the region, and when the smoke eventually cleared from the air, the two girls, gazes narrowed and stances set, began sizing up their foes one after the other. The two men did so as well, with Kisame finishing up first when he quickly recognized the one with the orange mane. Well, 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 isn't this a pleasant surprise, the swordsman chuckled, reaching up and gripping the handle of his sword. Long time no see, Tsubaki-chan. Kisame-sensei, the kunoichi replied with an aggravated hiss. What brings you all the way out here? Do you have to ask? At that inquisition, a spark of electricity shot off of the girl's head and struck the ground, causing her teacher to flinch when her chakra spiked. No, I suppose I don't. Frowning momentarily, the man lightened up once again and gave the girl his characteristic, toothy grin. In any case, it's good to see you again, Gaki. Acknowledging his student's state of being as well as the changes she'd undergone in the past 3 years, the swordsman's eyes then trained over to the raven-haired girl beside his student. Upon giving her an appreciative look, which took a little bit longer than the first scan, he turned back to Tsubaki curiously, and who's your well-endowed friend? This question had the lightning user's eye twitch irritably. What's it to you? Blinking when he looked between the two kunoichi, the swordsman then pursed his lips inquisitively and looked across at the attractive newcomer. She's pretty cute for Zabuza's replacement. What's her cup size? This offbeat question had Itachi look at his partner strangely. Whether he was just trying to irritate his pupil or whatever was beyond the Uchiha. Regardless, it was obvious the swordsman had never heard of the word tact before. Though this question had Tsubaki bristle in outrage, Haku merely tilted her head in confusion and, with the honest inquiry still out in the open, decided to speak up on behalf of her friend. Gee. Don't answer him, the orange-haired kunoichi screeched with a red face. Annoyed sparks flying from her head as her teammate glanced coyly in her direction, Tsubaki allowed her anger to boil down some before giving her partner's half-dressed appearance and partly naked upper body a disapproving look. Though her daring manner of dress was one thing, the kunoichi was mostly uncomfortable with the fact that the ice user's bust size was significantly larger than hers. Why do you dress like that anyway, Haku? Are you trying to catch a man's eye with that getup or something? Haku blinked, yes. How did you know? Not really expecting that answer to come from her friend, the lightning user gave her a suspicious look. Whose? Remaining silent for a moment, the ice user then looked away with red in her cheeks and swayed on the spot bashfully. Naruto's, she mumbled, but only loud enough for her friend to hear. Slapping a hand over her cranium and running her fingers down her face, Tsubaki shook her head and breathed an exasperated sigh. When she eventually remembered they were currently standing against two incredibly dangerous shinobi, one of which was still looking at the other one strangely, the lightning user shook herself out of her daze and set her form back into a proper standing position. I'm going to have a long chat with him once this is all over. But for now, we have a couple of bigger fish to fry. Literally. With that understanding established, the voluptuous, raven-haired Kunoichi decided to butt into the conversation and stepped forward. With the enormous cleaver now propped against her shoulder, Haku raised her head a little and looked from one Akatsuki member to the next. A sense of equal intensity burning within her irises, even though her expression said otherwise, Haku then spoke up in response to the current issue at hand. It seems that our attempt to ambush these two on the road has failed, even though I was hoping for a more favorable outcome. The ice user then glanced towards her partner. What do you propose we do now, Tsubaki-chan? Simple. We take them out. Obviously still fuming in the presence of her former master and his audacity, the Kunoichi took another step into the spotlight and fixed the pair with a more menacing glare. At the same time, she made sure to blast their adversaries with as much killing intent as she could muster, but before that, we're going to get them to talk. Kisame smirked. That, I think, you'll find to be a little bit above your pay grade, my dear. Cut the crap, Tsubaki snapped, her attention turning towards Itachi. Following the observational advice from her teammate concerning the Uchiha, she made sure to keep her eyes fixated on his feet. What have you done with Utakata-kun and Kyoko-chan? Itachi arched an eyebrow. Kyoko? The Jinchuriki he knew, but the other one. Where have you taken them? The orange-haired girl barked, at the same time backing up her question with a discharge of lightning. There's no sense in playing dumb with us. Our village knows all about your little organization and what your ragtag team of super ninja is after. The fact that you're here in the land of water is proof of that. Esul spilit. Another loud crack rang out, but this time it didn't come from Tsubaki. The two Kunoichi looked to their right to see that Kisame had buried the tip of his sword into the ground and kicked up a cloud of dust. Having drawn it with a ridiculous level of speed, the man made sure he had the pair's attention before smirking in their direction. Now that's just rude, Tsubaki-chan. I could have sworn I taught you better manners than this, Kisame spoke, tilting his head towards the orange-haired girl to see bolts of electricity start to course over her in an irritated manner. Perhaps I should give you a refresher course on how to properly address your elders. It was this that earned yet another scowl from the young woman. You have nothing left to teach me, sensei. Oh, I highly doubt that, the swordsman replied, sparing the girl one last condescending smirk before addressing his partner. Shall we? Well, it's quite clear that we're not going anywhere without a fight. Let's just try to wrap this thing up quickly and get off this island before reinforcements arrive, Itachi replied without a hint of hesitance in his voice. It was obvious by this point that the man was far from backing down. Kisame chuckled, easier said than done. Bringing his sword back up and propping it against his shoulder, the man nodded. I'll take care of my former pupil. You can handle Zabuzakuin's muse and prodigy. Very well, Itachi answered, acknowledging his teammate's request and allowing him free rein over this battle. To the Uchiha, this was undoubtedly a personal spat between his counterpart and the swordsman's former student. Being the understanding type of guy that he was and not one to waste time and energy arguing, the former ANBU captain was willing to let Kisame take the lead in this one and choose whichever target he wanted to face. Considering there was two of them and that both were apparently really powerful Kunoichi, the man knew that they were in for one hell of a confrontation. Eyes landing on the raven-haired girl when he saw her take a step forward, Itachi fixated upon the Kunoichi while the sword wielder focused her attention back on him. My name is Haku, Jonin of Kirigakure, personal bodyguard to the Mizukage and member of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. Bringing her sword, spinning it, and slamming the blade into the floor, Haku nodded to her opponent and took a wide stance. It's nice to make your acquaintance, Itachi Uchiha. Likewise, the man few words replied in a similar tone of voice. Once all pleasantries had been made and both sides had prepped and readied themselves for battle, silence once again fell over the area. A long gust of wind dragged across the coastline and ruffled the clothing of the 4 individuals standing at the precipice. With a cloud of dust and debris being picked up by the slipstream and sent bellowing across the plains, the clouds were also joined by the discarded hat lying at Kisame's feet, which was also lifted up and sent on its merry way. The straw headwear rolled and bounced across the pitch, blowing between the two parties and away from its owner. When the piece eventually rolled to a crawl and ended up standing on its rim several yards away, the second it fell and hit the ground, the 4 ninja launched themselves into battle. A clap of thunder ringing out, Tsubaki drew her hand from her pocket and, in the blink of an eye, fired a beam of compressed lightning straight towards her former master. The swordsman had only a split second to tilt his head to the side and avoid the attack, which barely grazed his ear before striking the region further inland. A square kilometer of rocky outcrop was literally nuked into oblivion when a fiery mushroom cloud filled the sky half a mile away from their position. The second the explosion rocked the region, all 4 ninja vanished in a shunshin, scattering themselves across the area and taking the fight to the next level. While a heavy mist fell over the part of the coast where Itachi and Haku took off in, Kisame and Tsubaki retreated to another, a trail of fiery explosions marking the direction that their battle followed. For the next few minutes after the opening shot was launched, the two Kirigakure ninja sprinted across the isle's terrain at an almost untraceable speed, with one taking the form of a shadow and the other taking the form of a bolt of lightning. While the former individual stayed as far ahead of his pursuer as he could, the latter spent the better half of that engagement pursuing her quarry, firing off round after round of high-powered energy bolts in an attempt to take out her deceptively quick target. Their game of tag rocked the island from its highest cliffs to its lowest shores, riddling the region with smoking craters before the fight eventually moved further in, where the two then found themselves exchanging blows across the rocky flats of the coastline's largest valley. With a shout of effort, Tsubaki cocked her right foot up and threw a side kick, launching a beam of lightning straight towards her target when he finally decided to go head-to-head with her. Kisame, noting the incoming blast, grinned excitedly and cocked his sword back. Once it was loaded, he thrust it forward with a grunt of effort and intercepted the beam with ease. The attacks collided with one another with a clap of thunder, with the swordsman's blade absorbing the beam's chakra and splitting it, causing excess bolts to shoot off in random directions to bombard the surrounding landscape. After peppering the field, the Akatsuki member pulled back his weapon and let out a roar, before charging forward at full speed to cut his opponent down. When Tsubaki landed and saw her opponent flying at her with his sword pulled back, the girl brought both hands in front, one over the other, and formed a sphere of electricity, the glow of which enveloped her in a sheath. Once her body was lit up, she took off. Raitun, Yata no Kagami. Lightning release, 8 Yata mirrors. In a flash of dazzling light, the girl's form broke apart into countless electrons of energy, which scattered and shot up into the sky, a split second before Kisame slashed at her with his enormous blade. The man ended up missing his opponent completely, prompting him to hit the brakes and skid to a stop. When he did, he spun around and glared towards the sky in annoyance, where he then saw the kunoichi reform from the particles and, the second she became solid, chucked another kick straight down at him. Catch! Raitun, Reijiki no Yari. Lightning release, spear of lightning. Another beam of electricity was fired from her foot, which struck the ground directly in front of the Akatsuki member and prompted him to shield himself with his sword. When the attack impacted the earth, the ground was lit up with an enormous, dome-shaped explosion, like a small Biju bomb had been set off at point-blank range with its target. The blast punched a massive crater into the island's landscape and engulfed the swordsman in a raging inferno. Once the flames dispersed, all that remained of the attack was smoke bellowing into the air. Cutting through the cloud and out of the blast radius, a slightly scolded Kisame emerged from the heart of the cataclysm and gave an amused chuckle. Sprinting across the valley at full speed and putting some space between him and his foe, the man then looked to his left in time to see a series of blue photons appear alongside him, before Tsubaki's form materialized out of them. The kunoichi, with her hands in her pockets and also sprinting across the field, glared heatedly across at her master, who returned the sentiment with equal vigor. The two of you aren't here by coincidence. Why don't you just tell me where you've taken Utakata-kun and save me the trouble of having to electrocute the truth out of you? Tsubaki spoke, her voice now notably calmer and level than before. Kisame snickered with delight. Tsubaki-chan, how many times have I warned you never to rely on your Kekkei Genkai? Use it too much and you expose all of your weaknesses to your enemy. As long as I'm aware of those weaknesses I can avoid being hit by them, Tsubaki shot back, smirking when she then changed directions and lunged at the swordsman. When she threw a kick at him, Kisame threw up his sword and blocked the blow, allowing the nimble girl to push off of it and flip backwards through the air. Upon landing several yards away, she then leapt high into the sky and held both hands forward. You're as coarse as ever, just like I remember you. Lightning shooting off of her palms when she sailed away, Tsubaki then began summoning enormous quantities of iron sand from the ground, which started to bellow around her like a tornado. Hurricane winds touching down on the entire valley had Kisame look up seriously, before the kunoichi unleashed the iron sand upon him in a series of lightning-fast, spear-shaped clouds. Raitun, Sadatswarashi. Lightning release, iron sandstorm. The wall of vibrating death particles flew towards the swordsman at an unbelievable speed. Responding in kind, Kisame swung his sword out and smacked the first cloud onto the wind, before springing away and beginning to dodge one wave after the other. The lances of iron haze shredded the ground with every strike and converged upon the retreating rogue. When he eventually touched down seconds later, the former hidden mist assassin began wiping out the attacks with wide sweeps of his shark skin blade, taking out the surrounding clouds and keeping them away. While fending off the iron sand converging on his position, Kisame then noticed a flash of blue light circling him from behind the walls, seconds before he was forced to wrap Samahata's entire blade protectively around him and block a simultaneous barrage of energy bolts. The attacks, which came in from all sides, were immediately absorbed by the sword, which jittered excitedly as the black mass of iron cloud dispersed across the field. When it did, Tsubaki rematerialized out of the air several yards away, glaring across at her opponent, shielding his entire form with his weapon. When Samahata removed itself from around the shark-faced man, the girl clicked her tongue irritably. You could learn a thing or two about not having to rely on a special ability, sensei, the girl spoke, mirroring the man's condescending tone of voice. Heh. I see you've adopted more than just my teachings in combat etiquette, Tsubaki-chan. That's good, Kisame spoke, before a frown stretched across his lips. But, if I'm being completely honest, it's really starting to get on my nerves. Bringing his sword around, the man cocked it back and watched his opponent bring her hand in front of her. Lightning shooting across the ground, the kunoichi began collecting up the same iron sand particles at an alarming rate, all of which converged in front of her and stretched across the air to form the enormous blade of a claymore. Upon gathering enough powder, Tsubaki then began melting it down with her lightning to form a perfect, steel-hard blade, which flashed brightly underneath the sun. Raitun, Seitsuken. Lightning release, iron sand sword. As soon as she'd created her weapon, she took it into a two-handed grip and held it over her shoulder like a baseball bat. Well, tough luck. Until one or both of us are dead, I'm afraid you're going to have to deal with it a little while longer. With a roar from both combatants echoing out, the two lunged at one another with their respective swords and struck. The moment their blades collided, a shockwave rang out that split the earth beneath the pair, causing the two ninja to slide back under the force. When the tremors faded, the master and student then started hammering away at one another with their respective weapons, their blades slamming against the others with concussive force, shaking the island with every strike. After battering their opponent with attacks that would have easily carved through a mountainside, the two warriors then pulled back, took aim with their swords, and thrust towards their opposite with a yell of effort. The second they struck, they passed each other, causing an invisible, thunderous blast to ring out, one that ripped the ground apart like it were made of paper. Spinning their respective swords in their grips, the pair spun around to face each other, with Kisame grinning all the while. Don't get cocky. Just because you're recognized as one of the strongest in Kirigakure now, doesn't mean you should be letting your guard down against me. Leaping back, Tsubaki held her sword out and brought her free hand forward, a frown framing her face. This may come as a shock to you, but I didn't come all the way out here to be reminded of the past. Electricity shooting off of her arm, the kunoichi held her finger forward and began gathering iron sand particles at the tip. When she managed to compress it into a tiny marble, she fired it. Raitun, Jodenjaho. Lightning release, super electromagnetic cannon, a powerful beam then shot from her finger and across the field, breaking the sound barrier several times before reaching its intended target. Alarmed at the sight of the blast, Kisame threw his sword up to deflect it. His sword took the force of the railgun, which forced him back along the ground while his sword absorbed the lightning-style chakra. The attack screeching as bolts scattered across the open ground, the attack eventually faded, allowing the swordsman a moment of reprieve before he teleported forward. The man's sudden dash across the field prompted Tsubaki to look on in slight surprise when she saw her charging teacher rear his sword back for a strike. Responding quickly, she brought her long sword up to defend, reacting in time to block the titanic blow from Samahata crashing into her. However, the instant Kisame's sword struck hers, the bandages along its top half exploded off and the gaping mouth of the shark skin blade appeared. With a roar, the sword sprouted two chakra vents from its fins, a split second before the blade unleashed a flash of blinding light right in the kunoichi's face, engulfing her in a blast of raw chakra. The explosion sent rubble flying through the air and knocked the stunned Tsubaki off her feet, sending her sword spiraling away while the young woman was literally blown to pieces. Kisame watched in satisfaction as his former student's body parts scattered through the air, but that smile slowly vanished when he saw the kunoichi's remains glow blue before dispelling into countless photons of energy. Pulling his sword back, the swordsman drew a deep breath at the effort he was exerting trying to fight the ludicrously fast kunoichi. Since she had a clear speed advantage over him, it was taking everything Kisame had just to keep in step with her. However, knowing that speed wasn't exactly his area of profession, the best he could do was hold his ground and intercept Tsubaki's attacks wherever she came from. As strong as he was, even he had his limits when it came to stopping something that could move at the exact same speed as a bolt of lightning. Eyes cutting across the field, the swordsman searched out his foe for the next several seconds, before a flash of electricity behind him drew the swordsman's attention around. Reacting instinctively, Kisame threw Samahata up, moving just in time to block the lightning-covered sword that crashed down on top of him from above. The impact was marked by another loud thunderclap, and after managing to absorb the chakra from the large blade, the powerful rogue held his ground while Tsubaki pressed down on him, electricity shooting off of her body like a Tesla coil. The kunoichi frowned. "You won't be able to match my speed with that heavy sword of yours. As good as your reflexes are, defending can only take you so far." Feeling the man push back with his superior strength, edging her along the ground at a staggering pace, all Tsubaki could do was seethe and grit her teeth while her opponent started to gain the upper hand in their grappling match. "Just tell me what you've done with Utakata and Kyoko and I'll let you go. You know, many years ago," Kisame said as another grin pulled across his face, "you and I never did get along very well, did we?" With a shout, the man threw the kunoichi off, before lunging in with a slash of his sword. Reacting quickly, the girl vanished in a flash of lightning. When the swordsman passed the spot she'd been standing in, Tsubaki reappeared several yards behind with the same frown in play. Upon seeing her opponent straighten up from his lunge, the girl snarled, "I'm done playing around. Tell me where my teammates are, or I'm going to make your life a living hell." Kisame chuckled, his back still turned to his former student. It's that same determined tone of voice. "You know, you really should learn to speak more kindly to adults, especially to the one who taught you everything you know about being a shinobi." Grinning, the Akatsuki member spun around and, upon sheathing Samahata onto his back, threw the kunoichi a toothy grin. "You may be strong, but you still have much to learn." With a shout of effort, the man back flipped through the air, where he then landed atop a rocky tor many yards away. Baffled by the man's maneuver, Tsubaki crouched down and readied herself for another charge. However, before she could begin building up for an attack, she was stumped when she suddenly saw her opponent fly through hand seals in the blink of an eye before forming a snake seal. The moment he did that, his chakra level skyrocketed. Here's a little demonstration. Suetun, Gobo Shokusame. Water release, 5 gluttonous sharks. With a yell of effort, the man conjured a ridiculous amount of water to the battlefield, which exploded out of the ground around him and began flooding towards the kunoichi in the form of a tsunami carrying 5 water sharks with it. Eyes widening in bewilderment when she realized exactly what that jutsu was, Tsubaki acted quickly and took flight. Her body flashing blue momentarily, the kunoichi then broke apart into countless photons of energy, all of which shot into the sky in the form of a lightning bolt. However, in spite of her instantaneous teleportation, Kisame knew exactly where she was going and responded in kind. Grinning maniacally, the blue-skinned man slammed his hand into the floor and summoned the colossal waves of his attack towards him. The lake's worth of water twisted around his position like a maelstrom, singling him out and building in size before converging upon the swordsman and scooping him up. With Kisame mounted upon the crests of the waves, the man was then rocketed into the sky when his self-made vortex immediately transformed into a monstrous spout, which blasted him in pursuit of his opponent. Just as Tsubaki was reforming dozens of stories above the island, Kisame, having predicted her flight path to the last second, stopped at the exact same altitude as her and took aim. Upon suspending himself in place with his makeshift elevator, the man slammed his hands together and countered, predictable as ever. Blurring through seals, the swordsman stopped at the snake sign and conjured a ring of water around him. Suetun, Daikoden no Jutsu. Water release, great shark bullet technique. He then thrust both hands forward. The instant he did so, the water arcing over his head blasted forward and, upon growing to a ridiculous size in the blink of an eye, transformed into an enormous shark made entirely out of the element. Giving a terrifying roar, the translucent sea creature opened its mouth and charged towards its target like an arrow in flight, only thousands of times larger. The instant she reformed out of the scattered electrons, Tsubaki got the shock of her life when she saw the titanic man-eater bearing down on her. Gritting her teeth, the kunoichi responded by crossing her arms and throwing them out, unleashing a torrent of thousands upon thousands of blue energy spheres that flew towards the approaching entity in a hail. However, the instant the bolts began bombarding the water shark, all they did was get absorbed by the jutsu's mass, increasing its size 10 times over. What? Tsubaki barely had enough time to look stunned before she was suddenly swallowed up by the creature, which barreled her back down towards the island at breakneck speed. When the gargantuan shark inevitably struck the coast of the landmass many stories below, it hit the valley with a combination of a tsunami and a typhoon all at once. Not only was a substantial chunk of the isle blasted to smithereens, but when the giant sea creature collided with the ocean and started plowing through it, it created a swell 20 stories high that rippled towards another distant island, which it then crashed into and leveled the entire forest growing on top of it. Once the tsunami's waves ebbed away and the waterlogged island unveiled itself from underneath the ocean a minute later, showing an utterly ruined and drenched piece of land, silence fell. In the time the isle took to surface, Kisame managed to land safely back onto solid ground, his water spout depositing him at the edge of the destroyed cliff, where he then straightened up and surveyed his handiwork. A grin appearing across his mug, the swordsman chuckled darkly. "We'll meet again? Tsubaki-chan." Oh. With Itachi. While Kisame was having it out with his opponent over on his end of the island, the Uchiha on the other hand was having troubles of his own. As it turns out, the duo from Kirigakure that both he and his partner had found themselves up against were two of the fastest ninja from that village. It was a theory that the raven-haired young man had played on when he recognized the orange-haired girl from the Chunin exams 3 years ago and was able to catch a glimpse of what she was capable of. And now, not only did she appear to be faster than before and was confronting her master of yesteryear, but the young man was now having the pleasure of going toe-to-toe with her teammate. Normally he wouldn't have had a problem with this if it was an ordinary shinobi and he'd be able to defeat them in no time flat. But as he was now finding out the hard way, the kunoichi, who was once a prodigy under Kisame's old associate Zabuza Momochi, was also ridiculously quick. Sliding backwards along the ground after blocking a very vicious assault from his opponent, Itachi managed to stop himself when he slammed his palm into the floor and applied the brakes. Kunai in hand, the shinobi then looked up through the cloud of dust and snowflakes hanging in the air to see his opponent standing several yards away with her enormous cleaver held out and unwavering gaze locked firmly onto him. Even though it looked like an incredibly heavy weapon and one that would be difficult to wield with any kind of proficiency, the young woman appeared to have no problems with swinging it whatsoever, showing just how strong she actually was. His expression tightening, Itachi rose up from the ground and took a defensive stance. When he did, he saw the jonin in front of him spin her sword and prop it against her shoulder. Just as he was preparing to throw himself back into the fray and take her head on, the Uchiha then blinked in surprise when he saw Haku begin flying through signs. It was a sight that had him stop in midstride. She's weaving seals with one hand? I've never seen that before. Once she'd finished the combination, Haku brought her hand up and focused. Hayaton, Tsurara Tsubame. Ice release, icicle swallow. Upon accumulating the right amount of chakra, the temperature around the teen dropped like a stone, after which countless ice needles formed in the air around her. As soon as the Senbon had fully materialized, the kunoichi wasted no time in hurling them towards her opponent, forming an inescapable wall of death. Having been unable to break down her hand seals due to their unique nature and execution, Itachi had no choice but to counter the attack with one of his own. Drawing 4 kunai in each hand, the young male threw them forward with blinding speed. The second the 8 knives collided with the approaching Senbon, the paper bombs attached to them detonated with concussive force, filling the air with simultaneous, fiery explosions. The attacks were effective in taking out much of the first wave of needles. But they did nothing to stop the second and third waves from flying through. Itachi had only a split second to cross his arms over to protect his face before his body was absolutely riddled with Senbon. While the rest peppered the valley around him, Haku was able to watch with a satisfied gleam in her eye as the Uchiha was thrown backwards through the air. When he eventually touched down and stumbled to a painful stop, the pincushion form of the rogue then collapsed to his knee and his body slumped forward, leaving him wide open. "It's over," the raven-haired girl stated. Taking up her mammoth sword, Haku sprinted forward and sprang into the air. Her shadow falling over her fallen foe, the assassin held her blade overhead and swung it straight down at him. It seemed like an easy kill. But then, the exact moment the weapon made contact with its quarry, Itachi's form suddenly broke apart into dozens of crows, which scattered through the snow-filled air and away from the kunoichi. Her attack ending up hitting nothing, Haku straightened up and brought her sword around, propping it against her shoulder at rest. Eyes glaring ahead of her and watching the noisy crows flutter about the area in circles, Haku lowered her head and frowned. "I stand corrected." With her gaze fixed ahead of her, she didn't seem to notice the murder converging behind her and forming into the shape of a person. But, sharp as always, Haku picked up the waves of killing intent falling upon her and spun on the spot. When she did, she swung out with her sword and slammed it into the side of Itachi Uchiha, who'd managed to bring a kunai up in time to block her blow. With an ear-splitting clang, the girl sent the shinobi flying across the field. Managing to course correct, Itachi back-flipped and landed firmly on the ground. When his feet touched down, he shot forward and swung in, aiming to impale his target. Haku countered with her sword, sparks flying when their blades crossed and were knocked back. Blow deflected, the Uchiha spun on the spot and threw a side kick into the raven-haired girl, only for her to catch it with the flat side of her sword, before both pulled back their respective weapons and slashed at each other once again. Their blades collided in another ear-splitting shower of sparks and both adversaries began glaring one another down heatedly. During their grappling match, Haku's eyes met Itachi's, the pair's expressions unwavering even at the sight of the other's gaze and the sparks flashing between their blades. For the next minute they held their ground, snow cascading all around them and clouding the air as they attempted to overpower the other. It was only after the face-off reached its breaking point that the Uchiha immediately realized something was off about this picture and narrowed his glare upon his foe. "This snow is distorting the light around us," Itachi said, taking note of the shimmer between him and his opponent. "That's why my genjutsu isn't working on you." "Very perceptive," Haku replied in the same cool tone of voice. "Jujutsu like yours can be a real problem for other shinobi, which is why I trained myself to counteract such an anomaly." She wasn't just producing the snow to create an appropriate backdrop for their fight, oh no. The real reason was a lot more discreet than that. By producing snow, Haku was establishing the ideal battleground for her to fight in, not only to produce her jutsu at a more accelerated rate, but to also render the Uchiha's Sharingan null and void. The way she was utilizing her snow as a masking agent functioned in a similar manner to her former master's hiding in the mist technique, not just changing the visual quality of the atmosphere but also distorting the light to prevent optical genjutsu from reaching its intended target by fracturing it. The way she was doing this required very little chakra, which was ideal for someone like her. Realizing this method of attacking was getting him nowhere, Itachi disengaged prematurely, backflipping across the valley and unleashing a hail of shuriken towards the kunoichi. The projectiles cut towards her all at once and caught her in the barrage. However, when the first shuriken that slicked into the girl took a chunk of ice off of her face and scattered it across the floor, the Uchiha realized right then and there that he was facing a clone. When the rest of the projectiles struck the Kori Bunshin, ice clone, the entire body collapsed to the ground, forming a pile of useless snow. Unable to find his opponent anywhere in sight, Itachi disappeared in a shunshin and began darting across the uncharted wilderness. His body taking the form of a shadowy blur, the man leapt from tor to plateau over their part of the island, where his body then reappeared half a mile away on top of a hill's crest, glaring back in the direction he'd come. Expecting to see his opponent in hot pursuit, the Uchiha continued to scan the horizon, even when the explosions of Kisame and Tsubaki's attacks echoed away in the distance, making listening for his foe's approach incredibly challenging. The young warrior was in fact so focused on the area in front of him that he failed to notice the ice mirror materializing from the mist over his shoulder, and Haku's form appear from its reflection. It was only when the girl produced a series of Senbon from out of thin air that Itachi realized she was directly behind him. Spinning around at the last second, the raven-haired warrior received 2 Senbon to the shoulder while at the same time dodging the rest she threw his way. Quickly reciprocating the action, the Uchiha tossed a kunai with an explosive tag at her and had the privilege of watching it explode on impact. When the fire and smoke died out, Itachi saw that his opponent and her mirror was gone, but could still feel her presence somewhere in the area. Eyes widening as his Sharingan cut left, the man ducked right down, avoiding the swing of Haku's massive blade when the kunoichi rematerialized out of thin air via snowflakes. Having used a Kori Shunshin, ice body flicker, maneuver to try and get the drop on the man, Haku ended up missing and seeing the Uchiha fly through lightning-fast hand seals while avoiding her attack. Springing back as soon as she saw him look up at her, the kunoichi retreated across the plain as fast as she could before Itachi's cheeks puffed up and he launched his counterattack. Katan, Gokakyu no Jutsu. Fire release, great fireball technique. The moment he was charged, the raven-haired shinobi unleashed a jet of fire from his lips, which spewed across the valley like a flamethrower. Managing to back up several more yards, Haku stopped to face the wall of flames blasting towards her and tearing up the valley. As soon as she was upright, the girl flipped through a quick combination of seals and threw a hand forward. When she did, 3 mirrors of ice shot out of the ground to surround her, which formed a protective wall that effortlessly deflected the fire attack. The entire valley lit up in a raging inferno, but once Itachi ceased feeding chakra into his attack, the flames extinguished and a fine mist fell over the battlefield once more. Seeing his opponent standing behind her barrier of ice without a scratch on her and her eyes locked onto his position caused the Uchiha to frown. After giving his opponent another look over and assessing the battle that had taken place so far, the rogue then realized he wasn't going to go anywhere with this bout unless he took it up another level. This Kunoichi was powerful. So in order to contest with her properly, he was going to have to fight with her on her level. Putting all the chakra he could spare on the table, the man flew through more seals. In response, Haku leapt away from the small barricade of mirrors she'd formed and also formed several seals. Recognizing the attack her opponent was loading as another fire release technique, and a big one at that, the raven-haired Kunoichi made sure to get some distance before finishing her countermeasures. Even though fire-style techniques had no effect on her ice-style jutsu, she needed to be extra careful with this one. After all, Itachi Uchiha wasn't an opponent to take lightly. Hayatan, Makio Hyohiki. Ice release, demonic mirroring ice wall. Upon making contact with the ground, an enormous wall of ice crystallized out of the snowflakes hanging in the air, forming a towering barrier between her and her foe. The moment the mirror formed in front of her, creating a secondary buffer against her opponent, Itachi had finished needing chakra. Cheeks inflating, Itachi cocked his upper body back and, upon taking aim, threw himself forward, unleashing his attack. Katan, Genkyu. Fire release, Great Blaze Ball. With a deafening crack of a shockwave, Itachi exhaled a ball of roaring flames straight from his lips, which instantly grew to a ludicrous size before shooting across the field like a rocket. The speed at which the meteor-sized sphere traveled ripped the ground to shreds, overwhelming Haku's first shield of mirrors and moving on to the secondary wall behind that. When the attack struck the barrier seconds later, instead of melting it on contact, the powerful attack shattered the monolith and kept right on going. The comet of fire had Haku's eyes widen in disbelief, prompting the girl to flip through seals and form an ice mirror behind her. As soon as it appeared, she leapt into it for cover. A split second later, the fireball crashed into her mirror and blasted it across the island at breakneck speed. With the ball grinding into the solid block of ice like a drill, it not only carried it across the entire valley, tearing a wide trench in its wake, it also carried it across the ocean and towards another distant island. When it eventually hit the shore of the deserted landmass, it detonated with catastrophic force. A dome-shaped explosion wiped the entire island off of the face of the map, sending shockwaves rippling back towards the island the Uchiha was standing on. Watching his attack impact the isle from a distance, Itachi noticed the ground surrounding him break apart as hot, gale-force winds blew into him like a hurricane. But in spite of the heat, the brightness of the explosion and the tremors reverberating through the earth, the raven-haired warrior remained completely unfazed. When the explosion eventually settled down moments later, the raven-haired young man found himself staring at a large mushroom cloud, which had formed in the wake of the massive explosion. Adjusting his cloak, Itachi breathed a sigh of relief and turned, where he then saw his partner land directly beside him with his sword strapped to his back. "Well, that was fun," the blue-skinned man said with a pleased grin. "How did you do?" Itachi stared back at him silently for a moment. After which he closed his eyes and deactivated his Sharingan. "I got a little bit carried away." He hadn't had to use that much chakra in a long time. Even though it had gotten the job done, he doubted his opponent would have been taken out so easily. Her ice-style form of ninjutsu hadn't been an easy element to circumvent, even for him, so he was certain the Kunoichi was still alive. "What about your opponent?" Stranded on an island nursing some serious whiplash, Kisame replied with a chuckle, "She's a tough little speck, I'll give her that." "A byproduct of being a former student of yours, I assume," Itachi replied without a single inflection of surprise in his voice. "Consider my teachings blessed," the swordsman shrugged. "In any case, I doubt we'll be seeing her anytime soon. Not after an attack like that." Wordlessly plucking the two Isenban out of his shoulder once the two of them had confirmed they'd managed to ditch their opponents, the Uchiha remained quiet for several seconds before fixing his attention back onto his teammate. "We should get moving." Those blasts could be seen for miles, and if Itachi knew anything about anything, it's that the authorities in this region would not be letting something like this sit quietly. Smirking when he heard his partner's response, Kisame gave a nod of understanding before quickly falling in step with him when the young man started to move. "That's the first time I ever saw you take a hit from someone. Are you alright?" "I'll live," Itachi replied, completely shrugging off being hit by the Senbon. Even though his arm was a little bit numb from having his muscles punctured, it was nothing to get excited over. Rolling his shoulder, Kisame looked ahead of him again and chuckled. "I think it would be best that we avoid getting into another fight for a little while." As fun as that was, even someone as stubborn as me can get a little winded from playing tag with a bolt of lightning. Trying to compete with the fastest Kunoichi in the world was not an easy task, even if the teen's sole intention for fighting him had only been to acquire information. Hearing this loud and clear from a man he knew never to tire easily from a battle drew a nod of agreement from Itachi. When the pair eventually stepped back onto the still miraculously intact highway moving across the island, they continued on their way, trying to act as though the fight never happened. Agreed. Just like his partner, the Uchiha too managed to hide the bead of sweat that had appeared on his temple. Meanwhile, on the shores of the neighboring island, which had been swamped from end to end by Kisame's great shark bullet technique, a lone figure could be seen floundering in the shallows. Clambering over the sands and rocks on her hands and knees, a slightly battered and completely drenched Tsubaki managed to pull herself out of the ocean and back onto dry land, in a manner of speaking. After coughing and sputtering out whatever seawater she'd managed to swallow in her brush encounter with the giant man-eater, the girl banged her fist into the soggy beach she was lying in and gritted her teeth in frustration. There was no other way for her to describe it. That battle had been one big cock-up on her part. Damn him. Damn that man, the orange-haired Kunoichi cursed furiously. I held back too much and got blindsided by him. She was getting annoyed at being beaten and talked down to by that shark-faced freak, even more so than having to haul her ass out of the ocean after a ridiculous fight. This time, she didn't care how much effort it was going to take, she was going to make sure she kicked that man into unconsciousness and took him on at full speed. That was it. No more restraints. Even though she was worried about killing him before questioning him about the whereabouts of her teammates, she was positive the man could take it. Not to mention she was now worried about Haku. Shit. She'd left her back on that island against Itachi Uchiha, of all people. Was she okay? She had to get to her. After clutching sand in her fist and catching her breath, the girl yanked the seaweed off of her and prepared to go after her teammate. However, just as she was in the process of recovering, a foot landing in front of her had the girl stop in her tracks and look up. When she did, she found herself staring up at a tall man with orange, spiky hair, blue eyes, and decked out in a blue shirt, pants and white coat. He also had a pair of oddly crafted stone gauntlets on his arms, both of which he had held at his sides. For several seconds the pair stared silently at one another, one looking surprised while the other was grinning smugly from ear to ear. A minute later, when Tsubaki eventually realized she was facing down a man with a foul grin fixed squarely onto her, the Kunoichi responded with a snarl and a current of electricity, which shot off of her body at the same time her hand curled into a fist. What a Y-dash, before she could even respond, the newcomer in front of her cocked his hand back and slammed a punch across her face, smashing her into the ground. After burying Tsubaki's face in the sand, Ishidate stood back up to full height and nudged her in the shoulder with his foot. Making sure the orange-haired girl was out cold, the mercenary then looked over his shoulder and towards a nearby hill, where he saw the armor-clad form of an older Temujin standing there, with an unconscious Haku and her executioner's blade slung over his shoulder. The Kunoichi, noticeably banged up after being smacked about by Itachi's powerful fire release technique, had apparently been recovered from the ocean by the night and brought safely to shore. Considering who he was, the fact that he was still carrying her, and that the girl had a very noticeable bruise on her face from being knocked out by the man, it was obvious the dashing warrior's intent wasn't just to save her. These two agents had other plans for their quarry. Is she alive? Ishidate asked the young man conceitedly, a question that the armored soldier responded to with an affirmative nod. Good. It had been an easy capture, much easier than they'd anticipated. If these two girls hadn't just fought against Itachi and Kisame and let their guards down after recovering from those big attacks, then both men would have had to fight the pair themselves to bring them down. That would have been an unnecessary drag on their parts. Bonus points to Akatsuki for that. What now, sir? Temujin asked, shouldering the raven-haired beauty up a little higher and eliciting a groan from her unconscious form. With his silver armor glinting underneath the sun, the blonde faced his superior with an inquisitive look and watched as a small smile appeared across his lips. Now, we take them back to the fort and toss them into the brig with the others, Ishidate responded positively. The boss has just completed another transfer. Since his body will need time to adjust to the new additions, it'll be another few months before he can add any more Kekkai Genkai to his collection. In that time, I think he'll be sending us out on another hunt while he continues his excavation project to the south. On that note, the man threw a courteous nod toward the young man and pointed in his direction. Good job on catching the 7 tails, by the way. That was some mighty fine work. The White Knight bowed at the compliment. If it means bringing about our utopia, then I will gladly put my life on the line for our master. Eyes falling back on Tsubaki's unmoving and lithe form, Ishidate then gave the sight of her a wicked grin while his eyes shimmered with notable excitement. It's time to get this show on the road. Chapter 48, Post-Gap Arc, Homecoming. Naruto. Drifting. Homecoming. Flashback. Many centuries ago? Twitching as he sat comfortably on top of a fallen tree log, the raven-haired Muramasa could be seen glaring at what could only be described as a mountain range. On the contrary, it wasn't a mountain range at all. A mountain range or mountain belt was defined as a geographic area containing numerous geological-related edifices. They were usually segmented by highlands, passes or valleys, and consisted of a mixture of different orogenic expressions and terrains. Considering what was known about these land formations and what little harm they presented, it seemed unreasonable to think why the man would be staring in contempt at the folds of rock. There was just one thing that was bugging him about this particular collection of blocks and sheets. Mountains didn't have scales. Nor did they move. Draped over the snow-topped peaks, its tail stretching toward one vanishing point and its head blocking out the other and nestled comfortably in the gap between two of the mountains, an enormous lizard, very dinosaur-like in appearance, with rough, bumpy, charcoal-colored scales, and leaf-shaped scuts of the same color running up and down its back, could be seen using the collection of massive rocks as its bed. With its enormous jaws closed and golden eyes piercing the cloud cover rolling over it, the entity was nothing short of imposing. Seeing as how it was even bigger than the mountain ranges its body was currently wrapped around, there was no doubt that it was an incredibly impressive sight. Hell, even terrifying. Muramasa however was neither impressed nor terrified. In fact, he was quite the opposite. While drumming his fingers against his knee, the purple-robed man was just getting into his staring contest with the beast when an amused chuckle and a shadow interrupted his state of brooding. "You keep staring at him like that and he might just take a snap at you," the voice of Goro Masamune exclaimed when he stepped onto the same precipice his friend was sitting on. Stopping beside the log, the famed, blonde swordsmith beamed down at the raven-haired one who spared a momentary nod toward him before glaring back at the entity many kilometers away. "What are you doing all the way up here? What does it look like?" Sengo asked while motioning his hand across the horizon. "I needed some inspiration for the sword I'll be making to compete against you, so I decided to come out here and take in the sights." A low murmur escaped the cheerful man's throat. "I see," Goro nodded, at the same time directing a smile at his friend. "Only problem is, this lazy son of a bitch decided to sit his ass right down in front of my pristine landscape," Muramasa continued, narrowing his eyes on the titan of a dinosaur, whose breathing could be heard echoing all around like a giant bellow, amplified by a howling of the wind. It was like the very planet itself was speaking, when in fact it was the giant lizard breathing at an even pace. "He's ruining a perfectly good countryside." After a moment of staring the gargantuan reptile down, a creature that was even bigger than any full-grown Shinju they'd ever seen, Muramasa eventually became fed up of waiting. Giving a loud snarl, the sword maker rose to his feet, stomped forward, and shouted at the top of his lungs. "Oi! Get out of here, you!" the man roared, waving his hands at the lizard and seeing the creature tilt its head. "Your fat hide is blocking the scenery. Go on. Shoo!" His voice echoing across the valleys and easily reaching the mountains, Muramasa waited for a response from the dinosaur. For the next minute the two men remained silent, watching from their spot as birds circled the creature and their cries echoed back towards them. Then, once all the ambient noise had come and gone, and the swordsman's threat had been established, all the reptile did was yawn, stretch, and roll over, turning its back to the insignificant speck shouting at him. The mere movement of the creature caused a 6.0 magnitude earthquake to reverberate across the country. Needless to say, Muramasa was pissed. Hair bristling, the man began waving his arms about hysterically, despite seeing the dinosaur cause one of the mountains next to him to crumble to the ground like a sandcastle on the beach. "Hey! Are you listening to me, you stupid lizard? Move your ass. Don't scream at it, Sengo," Masamune laughed, reaching out and gently patting the man on the shoulder to calm him down. "You'll only wear out your voice box." Slumping forward and sighing in defeat, Muramasa backed away from the cliff and collapsed back on top of his log. He then dropped his face into his hands and shook his head. "Ugh. I give up. It's not happening. Look at him." Holding a hand out to the region-sized lizard, the two men saw its back rise and fall over and over as it continued to snore away. "Lazy, good-for-nothing, kaiju. Hey, now be nice," the blonde man said, slapping his friend in the shoulder and planting himself right next to him on the space available. Once he got his fellow sword maker's attention, Masamune then directed his gaze back toward the antagonist in question. "This is his world just as much as it is ours. In fact, you could even say he's the guardian of this world and the previous one." At that, Sengo sulked. Well, couldn't he serve his role as guardian someplace else?" Finding amusement in his companion's misery, Masamune breathed out and sat up straighter, choosing to admire the countryside just as his friend had been prior to discovering the beast. Since they were still stuck on the topic of course, the part-time gardener decided to use the entity as the topic's starting point. "It's been a while since I last saw the Hakai no Kami, god of destruction, in broad daylight. After more than a decade of silence, he's finally decided to show his face again." "Yeah. But where has he been hiding this entire time?" Muramasa asked with a smile tugging at his lips. "Surely he hasn't been sleeping inside of canyons and mountain ranges for the past 10 or so years. These ones don't even come close to concealing him." Considering his body was as big as the tallest peaks backed up the man's analysis. In all honesty, it was a question he really wanted to have answered. Goro chuckled while glancing across at his friend. His kind once inhabited this world millions of years ago, way before the time the first humans ever set foot on this planet. Back then the air was unbreathable and the entire land was completely irradiated, a world where humans and modern-day gods would never be able to survive. I'm sure after centuries of roaming the plains and hunting on its home turf, he and his kind have had plenty of time to develop their sneaking skills. That thought alone was pretty hilarious, considering they were talking about the dinosaur. Even so, not a single chuckle came from either of the men. But now, just like many other creatures like it, they all died out when the natural surface of the planet changed. For all we know, he's now the very last of that bygone era. Especially in days like these. Spirits could no longer be seen walking amongst the living, dimensions to other worlds were closing up, plants and animals that would have been considered sacred to the benevolent entities of the planet were disappearing, the Shinju were dying out, and even more creatures of the ancient world were now practically non-existent. "A remnant of the prehistoric world," Muramasa murmured, his eyes scanning the back of the reptile. "Now there's something to think about. Just like the Shinju, he is a force of nature, an alpha predator and one of the last of the true gods, an honest-to-goodness, capricious entity. You could even say he keeps the balance of power on this plane, always ready to step in should the world suddenly fall into chaos and disarray," Masamune informed with a smile. "I'm willing to bet his kind once used to feed on Shinju by the branchful when there were more of them around. Now he just lazes around all day absorbing the energy from the sun, sky and ground. PFT, lazy bum. He can't even be bothered to open his own mouth to eat," Muramasa remarked while continuing to rest his chin on his hand, a god of his time, one that no human deity could ever hope to compare to. "Still, I wonder what this place was really like before the first humans ever set foot on it. It was probably much different than what this world is today, I'm sure, Masamune chuckled, reaching over and patting the swordsman on the shoulder. Time's constantly shifting, always moving forward, and with every era that passes us by, a new world is created in its stead. The age of the gods is quickly coming to an end, and very soon, it will be humanity's turn to take charge. They're both part of an ever-changing system that neither you nor I could ever hope to control. It is beyond anyone's understanding. At this, Sango looked across at his friend with a wry smile. You know, when you talk all philosophical like that, you really do cause the mood to oscillate, somewhat. Oh? Really? Laughing nervously while scratching his head, the blonde-haired swordsmith looked ahead of him again and grinned. Heh. Guess I'm still a bit of a hopeless romantic, huh? Seeing his friend react in this manner brought a snicker from the dark-haired swordsman next to him, the craziest one I know. Nudging him in the side and getting the blonde to calm down, the pair shared one last look before turning back to the mountains ahead. As they sat, peace settled in. Oh, have you heard? High Priestess Miroku and High Priest Moryu have volunteered to judge our sword competition coming up in the next month. They're also bringing little Princess Kagaya Otsutsuki along with them. Really? Sango chuckled. They're still babysitting that little ankle-biter? Well, she is 15, and an adventurous little tyke at that. She dreams of becoming a great ruler someday. You can say that again. Muramasa then grinned. I guess we should give her a good show then, eh? Of course. From their spots, the pair continued to admire the landscape, sitting in tranquil silence while the enormous lizard, the primordial god of the old world, continued to snore away, its form draped across the horizon. What a wonderful world they lived in. End flashback. Oh, present. The very next morning? Rolling over when he felt the sun gnawing at his eyes, the shinobi nation's most obscure hero and adventurer gave a low, tired groan as he slowly awoke to the confines of his sleeping chambers. Vision hazy, the boy lying underneath the covers pursed his lips before squinting his eyes thoughtfully. Another vision, huh? He'd been getting quite a lot of those lately, visions of a past that predated shinobi by hundreds of years to the earliest known days of the samurai. It must be a byproduct of Crow's sword being unsealed in his battle with Moryu. Weird. He could have sworn he heard that demon's name mentioned again in his dream. Must be an old relative or something? The chorus of birds outside his window rousing him from his reverie, Naruto allowed himself a moment to adjust to the light bathing his room and stretched. Arching his back ever so slightly, he then decided to get a few more minutes of downtime and turned over, only for his hand to suddenly land against something plush and smooth. The sensation of his fingers resting on the strange surface gave the Jinchuriki a moment of pause, which then prompted him to look across to see what it was and give a testing squeeze. A moan being elicited from the surface, Naruto was then jump-started from his confused state when he realized his hand had landed on Koyuki's chest. The raven-haired movie star, draped by the covers of his bed and wearing red-laced, transparent lingerie that left little to the imagination, could be seen sleeping peacefully by his side with the cutest, most serene expression on her face. Quickly moving out of reach when he realized who it was he'd been groping, the blonde froze in place and fixed his gaze upon the snoozing princess, whom had once again somehow managed to sneak into his room in the middle of the night. Entranced by her radiance, Naruto slowly brought his hand back down and used his finger to gently brush some stray hairs out of her face. His gesture causing her to mew in delight, the young jonin smiled and, after sitting up and looking over to see if he could adjust his position, spotted yet another familiar face lying next to him. Her arms draped over him and her silky blonde hair fanned out across her pillow, the angelic form of Shion, the ruler of Oni no Kuni, could be seen lying in the exact same proximity of the Jinchuriki as Koyuki was. Also completely covered by sheets and wearing a similar, risque lingerie, but with pink lace as opposed to red, the girl was sound asleep and curled up against the warmth of the jonin in an almost possessive manner. Blinking as his mind slowly processed the situation, Naruto glanced between the two young women quietly, at the same time brushing the stray hairs out of the priestess's face. Smiling gently when he drank in the sight of the two beautiful young women curled up on either side of him, the blonde then came to the realization that a hasty retreat was in order and slowly started to crawl out from between the girls. But before he could even get a few feet away, his wrists were unexpectedly grabbed from both sides and he was pulled back down into his bed, which he hit with a light oof. Oh, no you don't, the amused voice of Koyuki spoke up. You're not going anywhere, Naruto-kun, Shion also whispered, her voice carrying the same sensuous tone as her compatriots. Laughing a little when he felt the young women place their hands on top of his chest and anchor him to the spot, the Jinchuriki shook his head. Now girls, we talked about this. I said that this was going to be my last night here in Haru no Kuni working under Koyuki-chan and as per the terms of our agreement, I'll be returning to my village to continue working as a shinobi of Konohagakure. Murmuring disappointedly as she huddled up to the boy and pressed her ample chest into his arm, Koyuki ran a delicate finger up his pectorals before dragging it down to rest on his abs. What if I don't want you to leave? Unfortunately, I can't help that, Naruto said while grinning across at his partner of 3 years. Nor can I help the 100 other times you've snuck into my room to sleep with me. Giggling as she stared at the dashing young man, the movie star then began massaging his muscles. You know, you could stay. I can send a memo to your Hokage and ask him to extend your contract, make you a permanent resident of my kingdom. You'd still be able to operate under the banner of your village, so you won't have to run the risk of becoming a missing ninja, but you'll be able to remain here in the country. When she said this, Shion also shimmied closer to the jonin and crawled on top of him. Smiling sadly back at the actress/daimyo, the Jinchuriki shook his head. I would love to, Koyuki-chan. but I've still got a lot of things I need to take care of back home. This answer drawing a shimmer from the princess's gorgeous eyes, Naruto turned to glance at Cheyenne, who he saw also had the same look of forlorn reflected in her gaze. Upon acknowledging them, he looked back at his partner in cinema. Plus, I made a promise. The ruler of the land of spring smiled, I know. Sharing an intimate moment with the movie star, Naruto then turned to Cheyenne, whom he could see was beaming right back at him. When his eyes landed on her, the girl blushed slightly, and leaned in to rest her head against his chest. Listening to his heartbeat, the priestess sighed, you will come back, won't you? The Jinchuriki nodded, I promise. Cross your heart? Cheyenne whispered. And hope to die, Naruto finished, backing up his words with the signature gesture to coincide with his statement. And to the girls, when the Jonin made a promise to them, he kept it. His words were more than enough for him to convince them, which prompted Koyuki to rest her head in the crook of his neck and Cheyenne to press her cheek into his chest. From there, the trio remained motionless, enjoying the warmth of each other's bodies and at the same time inching in closer to one another. While Naruto couldn't do much but remained sandwiched between the two princesses grabbed whatever they could of the young man and kept him in station, not wanting to let him go and at the same time not wanting him to leave so easily. After yet another hour of just lying there and enjoying the peace and serenity of their room, the Jinchuriki decided it was time to move. After getting feeling back into his legs, the girls made sure to shift so as to allow him the space he needed to clamber out of bed and onto the hardwood floor. Observing with interest as the young man stood, clad in a pair of tight black trunks that accentuated every delicious curve of his lower body, the princesses then watched while discreetly licking their lips as he strolled across his bedroom space. As he was the princess's bodyguard and her most trusted advisor, his room was directly opposite to Koyuki's and bore similar furnishings and royalty features that the ruler had in her domain. His chamber, though wide and decorated with the luxuries belonging to a man of high standing, was practically a deluxe 5-star suite, complete with a balcony and king-sized bed, the latter of which had allowed the girls easy access to their favorite hero. Arriving at his bathroom door and cranking it open, Naruto was about to step in to take a much-needed shower. But then, sensing something off in the air, the blonde then stopped and stared ahead of him for several seconds. After which, he then looked across at the girls sitting on his bed, whom he could see were staring hungrily back at him. Was one of you grabbing my ass while I was sleeping? Having the common courtesy to look sheepish, Koyuki looked away, maybe. When Naruto looked at Cheyenne, he saw a similar look of mischief cross her expression, one that was topped by a sudden shade of red in her cheeks. Shaking his head at the pair, the Jinchuriki eventually entered his bathroom and started the shower while at the same time leaving the door wide open behind him. Taking that as a sort of invite, Koyuki and Cheyenne tiptoed over to try and sneak a peek at the hunk of a shinobi, but were disappointed when, after a minute of being hidden behind a cloud of steam, stepped out of the large cubicle with a towel wrapped tightly around his waist. Though they were given a fantastic view of his bare upper body, the pair had obviously seen plenty of that already and wanted more from him. Unfortunately, Naruto was inclined to keep that bit a surprise. As honest as it was, it still irked the girls somewhat, even when they watched him leave the bathroom and begin dressing. After throwing on his new, trademark orange uniform and headband, leaving his jacket unzipped and his chest exposed to the air, Naruto saw Cheyenne looking across at him from his bed while Koyuki stood beside it with her arms folded. Noting the smirk on the nation ruler's face and the pout on the priestess's, he then saw the latter smile and lay herself out further over his disheveled covers. Even though I'm just visiting this country, I always enjoy the time I get to spend with you here, Naruto-kun, Cheyenne chirped, her face expressing a sense of longing and fondness for the Jonin now slipping his sandals on. Same here, Koyuki also spoke, voicing her attachment to the Jinchuriki with a similar look of affection in play. Yeah, Naruto nodded, at the same time gazing intently at the young women, who were now adorned in loosely fitted sleeping kimonos. I'm really going to miss you too. I'll be sure to stop by whenever I can and send you letters to let you know how I'm doing. You'd better, Cheyenne said firmly. It'll get really boring around the castle without you sneaking about the hallways. The Jinchuriki chuckled, you think I'd ever forget about you too? Not a chance in hell. Smile practically glowing at this point, Cheyenne sat up on the bed and gave the boy her brightest visage yet. You'll come visit me when you're ready, right, Naruto-kun? I don't believe that you're the kind of person who would make empty assurances to the people you care about. The look in her eyes ensured that the Jonin understood everything she was asking of him, which elicited a grin from the spiky-haired male now decked out and ready for his return trip home. I promised you that I would, and I intend to live up to that promise, Naruto said, walking across the floor to his bed and gently cupping the ruler's face. Count on it. Feeling her respond to it in kind, the Jonin exchanged a long, quiet stare with the priestess, before suddenly straightening up and walking over to the exit of his room. When the two women saw him stand beside the door and stare at the handle for a moment or two, they then saw him open it, revealing an intently listening Jiraiya behind it. Having arrived much earlier that morning, the Sannin had spent the better part of the past hour listening to the trio's conversation. Pushing his ear flat up against the door's surface, the man had continued to eavesdrop on them to the point the door was suddenly opened. When his support swung away, the white-haired shinobi fell over, hitting the ground with a hilarious thud. This drew an amused grin from his student, who then shook his head at the legendary ninja. What are you doing, Ero Sennin? Naruto asked. Face planted on the floor, the Sannin pursed his lips. What does it look like I'm doing, Gaki? Spying, or peeping, one of the above, the Jinchuriki responded while placing his hands on his hips. I mean, seriously. Trying to scrounge new material for your book from a 16-year-old? That's pretty lame for somebody of your stature, don't you think? Letting out a hearty laugh, the big man sat up on the floor and smirked at his still young and lively prodigy. I'm just looking out for my #1 student, is all. Making sure that he's fit, healthy, and socially active is one of the many responsibilities of a master and teacher. There's no harm in checking in on you every once in a while, is there? Not unless you start intruding on his private life, the boy said with a deadpan look. This had Jiraiya wave at him dismissively. Privacy is overrated. Says the man who treats the hot springs like an open bar. Seeing his student roll his eyes had Jiraiya chuckle before his gaze was then shifted over to Koyuki and Cheyenne. When his gaze fell upon the young women adorned in only kimonos and looking mighty fine in the early morning light, a mischievous grin then formed on the Sanin's face. The giggle he gave next had the two nation rulers cross their arms and legs, prompting the two of them to make sure that their robes covered everything before the man started to scan them from head to toe. Why, hello there, the white-haired ninja spoke, only to then have the top of his head grabbed and forcefully turned back to his student. Once the hermit's eyes panned up, Naruto gave his teacher his most menacing scowl yet and tightened his grip on the elder's cranium. Don't even think about Ero Sennin. Hearing the warning tone in the young Jonin's voice and feeling the increasing pressure on his skull caused the Sannin to pout childishly. But I want to see a pretty girl. Not here, the Jinchuriki hissed while nodding to the princesses, these two are off limits. Sulking under the blonde's glare, Jiraiya folded his arms and turned to look out the open door, party pooper. Even though it was just friendly banter, seeing the blonde manhandle his master of 3 years counting brought warm smiles to the faces of the young women watching him from the sidelines. They were grateful he was there to lay down the law when it was needed most, and after dealing with the antics of the perverted hermit, the Jonin then went about the task of packing for his long trip home. Without a moment to spare, the blonde started rummaging through his closets for his things and began stuffing them all inside of his travel bag. Since he'd taken the liberty of sorting through and storing all of his heavier and more noticeable items inside of scrolls months prior, it made the chore of loading up his backpack less troublesome. Not to mention it was convenient since he had a lot of treasures and souvenirs to take with him. He also had many other things of importance stashed away, the locations of which would remain enclosed with him until further notice. Upon packing all he needed, Naruto then joined Koyuki and Cheyenne for breakfast, with Jiraiya escorting them down to the hall but making sure to keep his distance. Since he was aware that this would be the last time they'd be seeing each other for some time, he respectfully gave his student and the princesses all the space that they needed in order to enjoy one another's company. Needless to say, thanks to this considerate move, the meals for that morning were a great joy for all those involved. But like they say, all good things must come to an end, and they did. In the next couple of hours, Naruto soon found himself standing outside the palace gates bidding farewell to all those people he'd come to know in his stay at the palace. Not only were the director and DOP, Akira and Hideo, there to see him off, but so were the girls. Jiraiya stood by the side of the road and watched on with a proud smile as Naruto bade farewell to Cheyenne, embracing her and giving her a searing kiss. When the pair eventually separated after several breathtaking moments, the priestess, now fully dressed in her signature, shrine maiden robes, reached up with a hand and gently placed it against his cheek. The Jinchuriki responded to this familiar gesture of affection willingly, and placed his hand over hers. I'll be seeing you soon, Cheyenne whispered to him. Answering in kind, Naruto nodded, yeah, count on it. Fond goodbye shared, the Jonin then moved over to Koyuki. Standing beside the priestess and looking on dotingly, the movie star and country ruler gave the young man whom she'd known for all these years a beaming smile. It was an expression that was enthusiastically shared by the Jinchuriki. Eyes shimmering and cheeks warm, the princess reached up and gently ran her fingers over his whiskers. Her actions eliciting a chuckle from her boyfriend, Koyuki exhaled contentedly. My champion. The actress whispered to him, at the same time expressing her most heartfelt fondness for the spiky-haired shinobi. Naruto smiled, princess. Eyes sparkling, Koyuki leaned up and kissed him tenderly. To them it was short and sweet, but their kiss lasted just as long as the one the Jonin shared with the priestess before him, and when they parted, the nation ruler's cheeks were glowing. Running her hand one last time down to the man's chin, she stepped away and nodded. Don't be a stranger now, Naruto-kun. The Jinchuriki chuckled, I'll be back before you know it. Shifting his pack further up his shoulder and resting a hand over the handle of his katana, his most loyal partner, the shinobi stepped away. Until then, hold the fort. Koyuki snickered at his request, before then giving the young man a wave as he bade goodbye to her, Cheyenne, and the crew standing behind them. When he backed up to where Jiraiya was waiting for him on the road leading out of the palace, the two turned in sync and began to march. The Jinchuriki made sure to wave one last time before the two princesses and the castle shrank away into the distance. Once it did, he and his master focused their attention on the road ahead and continued on walking, leaving the village sometime later via its main highway. Looking forward to seeing home, kid? Jiraiya asked as he moved in step with his student, who'd grown enough to match the pace of any adult he knew. After all this time hanging out in Haru no Kuni and everywhere else, you must be pretty stoked. You bet I am, the Jinchuriki answered with his characteristic smile. It's been 3 years since I last saw the village. I just hope not much has changed while I was gone. Oh, I'm sure you'll be surprised, the Sannin said, chuckling at the young man's tone and words. It was funny. Even though the kid had grown a lot on the outside, there was still a lot of things that he hadn't grown out of on the inside, namely his enthusiasm. 1,000 years could go by and Jiraiya was willing to bet that that aspect about the young man would never change. I'm sure your friends have missed you a lot, the legendary ninja added with a momentary glance, your roommates especially. Naruto perked up at that and whistled inwardly, yeah. Damn. I wonder how much everyone has grown in the last 3 years. He'd seen how much Temari and Samui had grown since the last time they'd seen each other. The way they'd remodeled their appearances had come as a really pleasant surprise to him. After 3 years of being away from the Hidden Leaf, he was certain everyone he knew, including his friends and teammates, had all gone through a whole lot of changes. And not just on the outside either. Tayuya-chan, Sakura-chan, Sasuke, Isaribi-chan, Kin-chan. I bet they've all been training their asses off and gone on tons of missions together, Naruto said while slipping his hands into his jacket pockets. Man, I can't wait. Looking down at his shorter counterpart, the white-haired traveler sprouted a grin and shrugged. Hey, you've been training quite a bit as well, you know. I didn't spend the last 3 years working on your skills to bring you back no different than when you left. From what I've been able to see, you're on the exact same level of strength and skill as your team leader, Kakashi, maybe even more. That remains to be seen, Naruto remarked while clenching his fists tightly. I plan on collecting on that spar Kakashi-sensei promised me before I left for Yuki no Kuni. Hopefully when we end up throwing down on one of the training grounds the landscape will remain intact this time. He then gave his master a smirk. Hey, maybe I can ask the other guys for a spar as well. You know, just for fun. Well, we've got a 2 to 3 day journey ahead of us, so I'm sure you'll have plenty of time to mentally prepare yourself for your return to the limelight, Jiraiya answered with an amused look in play. Just make sure you don't go overboard. Hey, no problem. I know what I have to do. I just need to be cool, calm, yet daring at the same time. Right, sensei? Naruto asked, seeing his teacher nod affirmatively at his inquiry. Coaching himself and rolling his shoulders, the blonde then sucked it in and slapped both sides of his face to wake his brain. Upon which he took the straps of his bag and began moving along at a more accelerated pace. Okay. I'm all set. Let's do this. Hey, brat, slow down. Jiraiya laughed when he saw the young man take off, increasing the distance between them and prompting the larger man to pick up speed as well. We've still got over 100 miles to cover. You'll burn yourself out before we even get within 2 clicks of Konoha. Though the Sannin highly doubted that his student would tire out so easily, he was more or less concerned about keeling over himself. All he was really doing was trying to save face. After all, he had a reputation as a legendary ninja to maintain. The last thing he wanted to do was fall out in a stamina match against his student. XXX. 3 days later. Konohagakure? They should be here soon, Tsunade said while gazing across at her former teacher earnestly. The old goat said he would be popping back into town with the brat sometime today, so I expect we should be seeing them in the next couple of hours, depending on whether or not they've decided to make a pit stop along the road. Hiruzen, staring out the window with pipe in hand and his hat placed comfortably atop his head, gave a cheerful chortle while at the same time breathing out a puff of smoke. They'll be here. Unlike myself, I can always count on Jiraiya to make it to the rendezvous point on time. The blonde-haired woman chuckled in amusement. Really? You have that much faith in him? Give or take a few minutes, the village leader responded while waving his hand dismissively, but that doesn't change the fact that he's reliable. I expect him and his apprentice to be back within these walls before the day is done. If you say so, Tsunade sighed, moving over to the man's desk and boldly planting her posterior on the edge. The Hokage didn't seem to pay her actions any mind as the woman wordlessly reached over and gathered up one of the files lying in the sorted pile. Flipping it open and skimming through it, the blonde cracked another grin and glanced over at him. You certainly do go through a lot day in and day out, sensei. How's your wrist? I wouldn't crack jokes about my position right now if I were you. Peeking from underneath the rim of his hat, Hiruzen then pointed in her direction with the tip of his pipe. If you haven't forgotten, I'm not a young man anymore. Any day now the daimyo and his council will be calling on me to find a new successor. Since Jiraiya has repeatedly turned down the position and Kakashi is still a little iffy about the responsibility, the next candidate in line for the post is you, my dear Tsunade. The medic smirked and straightened up where she was sitting, at the same time regarding her grandfather's desk by slapping the closed file on top of it. And what if I said no, too? Then I will convince you to take up the mantle, the third answered with a smile, by any means necessary. Well, leave a memo with my secretary and I'll get on it as soon as possible, Tsunade said in reference to her loyal apprentice Shizun, while at the same time folding her arms underneath her ample bust and glancing towards the row of Hokage portraits hanging on the wall behind her. Taking them in, her gaze eventually fell upon the firsts. Even if everybody else says you're getting too old for the big seat, I don't think it'll be that much of a problem if you stayed on for another term. I mean, Iwagakure still has Inoki hogging the funny hat and you're no older than he is, so what's the big deal? Laughing a little at the woman's mentioning of his gnome, rock-sitting counterpart, the leader of the Hidden Leaf popped the pipe back between his lips and turned in his seat. Setting his sights on the distant horizon, the man gave another contemplative sigh and laced his fingers on his lap comfortably. You make a valid point, Tsunade. Still, it would be of great comfort to me to know that I not only have somebody waiting in the wings, but somebody who is worthy of taking on the title of Hokage. Smiling wryly at the elder's wishful words prompted the blonde medic to look out the window as well. Perhaps when that kid finally walks in through those front gates, you might actually have another candidate to refer to. The idea had Hiruzen purse his lips. We'll see. Oh. Meanwhile, up in Konohagakure's hospital in one of its many offices, a familiar, pink-haired Kunoichi could be seen digging through some paperwork. Standing by her desk with a clipboard in hand, dressed in a white, short-sleeved kimono blouse with black trim and pink, cherry blossom patterns on it, with a red obi wrapped around her waist that formed a skirt out of the lower half, and clad in a pair of black, figure-hugging spandex shorts, black sandals, black arm guards, a large pouch on her back and bandages wrapped around her legs. The figure revealed herself to be none other than Sakura Haruno. Her outfit complementing the curves of a more womanly figure that she'd grown and developed in the past years, the kunoichi was currently hard at work, intent on finishing the work her master wished for her to have sorted before the end of the week. Skimming over the file she currently had opened in front of her with her pen, the girl absently tucked some bangs behind her ear, causing her fingers to brush against her headband. After making sure all of the information was in order, she closed up the documents and stored them away inside the filing cabinet at her feet. Upon which she then moved down to the other end of her desk and checked it off of her list of things to do. Work, 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 Sakura sung to herself. A fond smile framed her face as she once again picked up another batch of sheets and skimmed through them. Let's see if I can get ahead on the paperwork this time. Unfortunately, before she could get any further into her material, the kunoichi was interrupted by a knock on the door. Responding to the rap, the pink-haired apprentice turned to see who it was and received a pleasant surprise in the form of a familiar, reddish-brown-haired girl, with a fair face that had a mole under her left eye, wearing a similar, cream-colored kimono-style tunic, a cyan-blue undershirt and dark arm bands. It took only a moment for Sakura to recognize the tomboyish girl at her door. Ah, Amaru. What are you doing here? Hey Sakura. The youngster, beaming happily in the direction of the kunoichi, stepped into her office gleefully. Tsunade-sama sent me down here to relieve you. She said that you can take the rest of the day off. Really? Sakura asked, appearing a bit surprised. When she saw the spirited nod from the girl, who'd obviously taken a shine to her, the older kunoichi sprouted a smile of her own before setting aside the paperwork she had in hand. Man, that's a relief. And I thought I was going to be stuck doing another batch of these for another few hours. Her master tended to give her and Shizun a lot of stuff to do as their benevolent teacher. This certainly was an interesting change of pace. After watching her role model set her work down and start towards her, Amaru couldn't help but burst out with another question. Is it true that you're being reassigned? Yes, Sakura answered, stopping before her young counterpart and placing her hands on her hips. My teammate is returning from his 3-year training excursion, so the Hokage will be bringing back Squad 7 to tackle the overflow of missions the village has been receiving over the last couple of months. Oh. Okay, Amaru chirped, before bringing her hands in front of her and swaying anxiously on the spot. This is only a temporary move, yeah? I'm honestly not sure, Sakura answered with a slight shrug, but even if it's only a temporary move, it's common practice for members of the same genin squad to go on missions together, even after they're promoted. Since they were their first team and all, it makes sense that shinobi are normally assigned to groups with one or both of their original squad members on it, as they've already had a lot of time to develop a strong chemistry with one another. It goes hand in hand with our village's ideals. Ah, I see, Amaru responded with an understanding nod and a beaming smile. Do you think I'll be able to meet your other teammate when he comes back? Sensing the eagerness in her fellow apprentice's voice and seeing the look in her eyes, the pink-haired kunoichi gave a light chuckle and nodded back to her. Yeah, of course you can. He's always happy to meet new faces. They still had to wait for him to get back though. Kami knows how long that would be. Nevertheless, Sakura had a feeling that it was going to be sometime soon. Ever since they learned he would be strolling in any day now, the entire village had been seemingly waiting for him with bated breath. Man, talk about suspense. Oh. Amaguriyama? Finishing up the last of her dumplings, the 17-year-old girl with long, pinkish red hair and fair face took the kebab sticks she'd used and promptly discarded them. Tossing them into the nearby trash can, the young woman in question stood up from the bench she was sitting on outside of the shop and stretched. Pushing her chest out when she extended her arms overhead, she then gave a sigh and waved to the woman she'd been sitting and eating with. Well, I've gotta get going now, Enko-sensei, the redhead chirped, at the same time giving a smile to the kunoichi with the signature purple hair and trench coat sitting on the other side of the table with her legs kicked up. We'll catch up again later. Blinking in surprise with dabs of syrup smeared across her lips, the older woman swallowed and pointed back at her former apprentice with a smile. Are you sure you're okay with this, Meijo-chan, Enchantress? Leaving the ANBU division after only 3 years of service? The kunoichi, wearing a very daring outfit consisting of an open, tan jacket with tight black spandex shorts exposing some of her hips, bandages wrapped around her generous chest, with 2 pouches and a holster on the back of her beltline, a holster on her right leg and black sandals, gave her coat-wearing counterpart a smile in return and shook her head. I think I've had my fill of the dark side of the shinobi world for the time being. Sure, all of that cloak and dagger stuff was really cool at the start, after a while it starts to become a bit of a chore. It's the same dull breakfast every morning from Monday to Friday, a sponge cake with no flavor. Heh. And after all we've been through together. Snickering at her students pretty much summing up her entire ANBU experience, Mitarashi Enko gave a nod of understanding and saluted her. Though I am disappointed that you're leaving us, I'm in no position to hold you back, nor is it my place to try and stop you. I'm going to miss you, brat. You make it sound like this is goodbye forever, sensei, Tayuya snorted, grinning at the look her old master was giving her. Enko responded by placing her hand over her heart. It is in here. Throwing the girl a fake puppy dog look, which the redhead responded to with an unsatisfied expression of her own, the hard-nosed, trench coat-wearing kunoichi eventually gave up and waved her away. Ah. Whatever. I'm just being petty. Get out of here, you stubborn brat. When she saw Tayuya roll her eyes and turn away, the snake mistress held a dango stick up to her in a characteristic farewell. If there's anything you need or if there's anything I can do for you, just let me know, okay? Tayuya-chan? Sure thing, the musician replied with a grin. With one last wave and a courteous nod, the two parted ways. The flute player left the amigurumi behind and headed on a tour of the village. Having nothing scheduled for today and with no meetings to attend, Tayuya felt like going for a walkabout not just to see what's changed in neighborhoods she hadn't visited for a while, but everything else while she'd been playing the part of somebody else. After all, for the past couple of years she'd adorned the persona of an ANBU operative, somebody who was tasked with the dirty jobs and assignments that other Konoha shinobi were unable to do. It had been one hell of an experience and something that the redhead wouldn't have had any problems in continuing. But all that Black Ops work she did meant that she missed out on a lot of things she would have been able to do as Tayuya. There were group meetings she wasn't able to attend, and in all her time as an ANBU member, the only people she'd ever had the pleasure of hanging out with were hard cases in masks. Hell, there weren't even that many girls in the corp, just a bunch of statuesque dudes. And even the girls she did end up hanging around with seemed like lost causes. It came as an apocalyptic relief when she finally put in an application to the Hokage to be transferred back into the regular services and was able to hang out with the girls at her apartment like a normal person once again. While Hiruzen was pleased to have her back and wearing the regular Konoha vest, in a manner of speaking, and congratulated her for a stellar service, she was beside herself. Needless to say, if she hadn't been missing Naruto before, then she sure as hell was now. She wanted her boyfriend back. Desperately. Having been informed that the blonde-haired wonder was going to be showing up sometime this week, Tayuya was feeling all restless and clammy. While part of her was excited at finally seeing her man after all this time, another part of her was nervous. What happened to him after all this time? How much had he changed in the past 3 years? Sure, she'd seen him acting as another character in the Princess Gale movies since his eyes and whiskers never changed, but he'd used an older, hinged version of himself that gave him red hair as opposed to blonde along with all the other cinematic additions at the request of the directors. In every single one of Yuki Fujike's projects, Naruto had been buttered up and dressed for every one of his roles. They weren't authentic, nor were they accurate in their representation of him, as with all other media items. Had he gotten stronger in the time he'd been working with the princess? If so, then how much stronger? Would she even be able to recognize him? Would he be able to recognize her and everybody else? These were the sort of questions that ran rampant through the young woman's mind the moment she heard about his impending return to the village and something that had been keeping her up for Kami knows how many hours. You'd better get back here soon, shithead, or so help me, I'll fucking go up there to the land of spring, snow, or whatever the fuck that place is called now and drag you back here myself, Tayuya thought with an excited smile in play. She'd had 3 years to mold herself into the woman she was now, stellar service record, kick-ass ninjutsu skills, tight shorts, and all the rest. Seriously, the suspense was killing her. The kunoichi couldn't wait for the blonde to see how she looked now and she couldn't wait to see how he looked either. Feeling anxious, Tayuya went for a nice march down the main highway, checking out the stalls and shops left and right, while at the same time getting her fill of fresh air. But while she was busy drinking in the sights, a series of footsteps and a child's voice coasted her to an abrupt stop. Tayuya-nichan. Glancing over her shoulder, the redhead didn't even blink when she saw 3 familiar faces skid to a stop in front of her. The leader of the pack was a boy with brown spiky hair wearing a green jacket, a long green scarf, brown pants, and sandals. The second was a girl with long orange hair tied up into 2 large pigtails, wearing a sleeveless purple vest over a violet t-shirt and a layered skirt with thigh boots. The third was a boy with brown hair in a bowl cut, wearing a dark jacket, light blue shorts, and spectacles. Not only did all 3 look to be around the same age, but they were all wearing Konohagakure headbands as well. But this didn't hold the girl's attention for long as she focused on their beaming faces with a smile. Hey, runt, Tayuya chuckled while placing her hands on her hips, what's up? Konohamaru grinned up at the jonin, where are you heading to? Oh, nowhere in particular. Just decided to go for a walk. Figured I'd shoot the breeze a little, the young kunoichi replied with a smile. Do you mind if we tag along with you? Moegi asked with an admiring gaze fixated upon the beautiful girl standing before her. Chuckling at the enthusiasm the trio was showing, the redhead nodded, sure. I could use some company. Allowing them to form up alongside her, the musician continued on marching, at the same time engaging them in conversation. She asked the troublesome group how their day had been so far, in which Konohamaru, Moegi and Udon began regaling her in their epic chase of the local menace Tora, and how she'd managed to escape from her master once again. It turned out to be one hell of a story on their part, one that took them further into the village as opposed to further out into the woods. Tayuya mused at how she'd had to go on a mission like that as well and that all of the Rookie 9 at one stage of their careers as genin had had the pleasure of trying to catch that little rat. She thoroughly enjoyed the small telling as she and the team under Ebisu continued on down the street. By the way, have you heard anything from Naruto Naiken yet? Konohamaru asked the girl. Is it true that he'll be coming home soon? Udon also asked, genuinely curious as to the current whereabouts of the legendary blonde. Tayuya shook her head, aside from his last message, nothing. It's a long damn way from here to Yuki no Kuni, so he's probably still traveling across the country. A smile then crossed her lips as she gazed fondly at the ground. It shouldn't be too long before he comes strolling through those front gates. Excited, the redhead then decided to head towards the main entrance to see if she could maybe catch the blonde's return. If she was lucky, perhaps she could surprise him. Focusing on a straight and narrow path, she, Konohamaru, Moegi and Udon began strolling for the exit. They were in fact so invested in their march and so engaged in conversation that, when they reached a crossroad where they could see clearly down the other roads, they completely missed the sight of a familiar, spiky-haired blonde dressed in orange and his imposing, white-haired master, walking down the road in the opposite direction a block down to their left. Several minutes later, the kunoichi and her escort for the day arrived at the main gate. Tayuya stopped dead center of the road and, hands on her hips, faced the world beyond the walls down like an obstacle needing to be overcome. A determined look shining in her eyes, she glanced to her right to see the three genin accompanying her do the same and stand at arm's length from each other in a single row. Obviously they were just as stoked for their boss's return just as much as the flute player. "Alright, shithead. Where are you?" Tayuya asked out loud with a smirk on her face. If there was any time she was ready to see her favorite blonde, it was now. "Oh, Tayuya. Good morning." Attention being pulled to their right, the kunoichi and Team Ebisu looked to see the smiling faces of Kotetsu and Izumo beaming across at them. Seeing the familiar Chunin gate guards wave them over from the check-in station, the four walked over to see what was up. While the kids parted, Tayuya approached the service desk and grinned at the two males lounging about behind the counter. "Hey, fellas. What's shakin'?" the kunoichi asked with an earnest grin. "Not much," Izumo promptly replied. Same old," Kotetsu also answered with a wave of his hand. The redhead chuckled, "Any weirdos happen to drop by while you were on duty?" Looking at each other, the pair of Chunin grinned before looking back at the girl and her team of tagalongs. When they saw the confused stare she sent their way in response to their shared expressions of secrecy, they eventually revealed to her the reason for their current attitudes by answering her in riddle form. After all, she'd been waiting for 3 years to hear this news. "They're back," the man with the bandana said. Seeing the kunoichi blink encouraged Kotetsu to point down the highway and towards the village. "Go take a look around town for something tall, blonde and orange. You're in for one hell of a surprise," Izumo warned with a smile. "A surprise?" Moegi murmured, scratching her head. While the three kids looked around at one another inquisitively, Tayuya's eyes widened when she eventually caught onto what Kotetsu and Izumo were saying to her and spun around. Her eyes fixing upon the buildings making up the entirety of Konohagakure, her irises shimmered for the briefest of moments before a grin formed on her face. Her response elicited chuckles from the men in the booth. "Son of a bitch. Oh. Further inside the Hidden Leaf, after passing over the bridge crossing the main river and following the road for several more blocks, the blonde-haired Jonin decided to take a breather. Too excited to sit still yet too fed up to keep walking for any longer, Naruto figured he'd check out how much his playground had changed. Dropping his backpack to the ground, the blonde vanished in an orange flash, his lightning-fast movement being followed by his master to the top of the telephone pole. Needless to say, his student's sudden flight brought a smile to the Sanin's face, rambunctious as always. Reappearing at the top of the pole with his hands in his pockets, the Jinchuriki took in a deep breath as the wind whipped through his hair. Jacket ruffling on the breeze in a liberated manner, the young male enthusiastically opened his arms to the sunlight and drank it all in. From corner to corner, he saw the whole of Konohagakure in its daytime splendor, with the Hokage Tower sitting directly in his line of sight and the monument directly behind that. Hell, after years of living in this village and after 3 years of being away from it, on the surface it seemed like nothing had changed. But there was still an air about it that told him that there had in fact been many changes, all of which had taken place in his absence. It was a feeling that brought much joy to his heart. "Man, this takes me back," the blonde exclaimed, throwing his arms out in a stretch. "Oh Konoha, how I've missed you." Beaming across the rooftops from one end of town to the next, Naruto spent the next few minutes taking it all in. The sun beating down from above and lighting up all of the great landmarks and buildings reminded the blonde of all the times he'd spent traversing this amazing landscape. When he was a kid, this was his field. His jungle. It served as the primary backdrop for the days he lived as a scrappy young shinobi in training, pulling pranks on unsuspecting targets and playing tag with Swift across the skies of the Hidden Leaf. While these memories had certainly endured with him to this day, molding him into the man he was now, he had long outgrown all of those fun games that often brought trouble to the rest of the world. Today, his eyes were set on other, more important things. Nevertheless, there was still a small part of him somewhere in the depths of his psyche that desired to cause mischief. Though it was no longer a dominating factor of his personality, it was still a loud enough voice to be heard. He still had the need to explore and he still felt the need to forage. This was his wild side speaking to him. "That reminds me. I have to go visit the outer areas and see how the animals are doing," Naruto thought to himself cheerfully. "Oh, I bet the forest has missed me." Upon making a mental note to drop by the other companions from his earlier years and admiring the horizon for a little while longer, the blonde then felt a tap on his shoulder and looked across to see the familiar, tiny form of Swift perch herself upon his collar. Ruffling her feathers and chirping happily when she found herself in familiar space, a smile gently tugged on the Jinchuriki's face. After which, the blonde reached up and gently petted his friend with the knuckle of his finger. "We're back, girl," the Jonin whispered, earning a whistle from the pocket-sized avian. When they both turned to admire the scenery once again, with Naruto acknowledging how there hadn't been any additions made to the monument, he then became aware of a familiar feeling falling over him. This wasn't a bad feeling by any stretch of the imagination. Quite the opposite actually. But the moment his senses perked to the sensation brushing past him like a feather caught on the wind, he then heard a familiar voice call out his name. It wasn't like he could miss it. After all, there was only one person who called him this name. Shithead. Both his and Swift's eyes panning down towards the ground, Naruto received his biggest surprise for that morning in the form of a familiar, pinkish-reddish-haired girl looking up at him, hands on her hips and a wicked grin on her face. Even from this height, his eagle-like eyes could see the emotion burning in her brown irises as she stared right back at him. His heart skipped a beat. Having stopped at the base of the pole a few feet from Jiraiya and Team Ebisu scattered behind her, when she saw the blonde's gaze fall upon her, Tayuya's expression lit up. "Thought you could sneak past me, huh? When the hell did you get in?" Smiling when he fully recognized the person staring up at him, Naruto turned to face the kunoichi properly. "Oh, just now." Noting the look in her friend's expression, Swift quickly took flight. The moment she did, the Jinchuriki vanished in a shunshin and reappeared directly in front of Tayuya. His sudden teleportation meant everyone lost sight of him for a moment, but when they all eventually spotted him a few seconds later, not only did Konohamaru and his friends jump in shock, but the redhead blinked in surprise. This look though was quickly replaced by a smile. "Whoa," the musician gasped. "Damn," Naruto exclaimed, his eyes looking the girl from head to toe. After 3 years of absence and being away from who he regarded as the most precious person in his life, needless to say, he was stunned. "It's so good to see you." Clearly impressed, the redhead then began pacing around the blonde as he stood in the middle of the road. While Konohamaru, Moegi and Udon admired him from a distance, Tayuya made her appraisal up close, and after walking a few laps around him, nodded her head in approval. My, look who decided to get taller." While Tayuya was quite tall for her age, about a centimeter higher than Ino, her roommate now stood half a head higher than her. From what she could see, he looked to be the exact same height as Sasuke. That was certainly an accomplishment. But not only was it apparent that he'd grown over the last 3 years, his style of dress had changed to an orange leather jacket with a darker tone, he had a powerful air about him that only shinobi of serious experience had, and he'd put on some muscle. Quite a bit of muscle actually, a sight that Tayuya licked her lips at when she stopped in front of the boy and glanced at his exposed chest and stomach. He'd shaped up quite well. Shaking her head, the kunoichi stepped towards the Jinchuriki and threw her arms around his neck, catching him in a hug which he returned gleefully. "Kami. It's so good to see you again." Feeling him chuckle against her, Tayuya slowly relinquished the man and grinned at the good-looking Jonin. "I saw your films. You changed your hair for them." "Ah. Yeah," the Jinchuriki laughed while looking up and absently picking at his yellow bangs, among a few other things. "At least I didn't have to worry about makeup. You can thank the Henge no Jutsu, transformation technique, for that." Tayuya gave a nod of understanding. "Well, you look nothing like you did in those Princess Gale films." A smirk formed on her face. "This version of you is way better." Another chuckle came from the blonde. "I thought you'd say that." Waving her hair out of her face, Tayuya gave the Jinchuriki another look over before getting an idea. Stepping back, she struck a rather alluring pose for him and grinned mischievously in his direction. "And, what about me, shithead? Do you think I look different now?" Seeing the girl stick her chest out a little and accentuate her finer points immediately drew a balk and a blush from the Jonin. While at first Naruto had been able to keep it together in front of his roommate for most of their reunion thus far, it was when she finally pointed her new look out to him that the Jinchuriki fully registered to the fact that his girlfriend had, in a few words, grown up. It wasn't just the aura she was emitting that had changed, but her physical appearance had also matured. With her new hairstyle, stunning face, flawless skin, long legs, her chest, damn. When the hell did she get those? She looked absolutely breathtaking. Jiraiya actually chuckled when he saw his normally confident student stammer in front of the redhead. Clearly, after 3 years of not seeing her and all the changes she had to go through, it had come as a massive shock to him to see her now. His mind just wasn't ready for it. While his mind was screaming at him all sorts of ways in which to respond, Naruto, trying to keep as cool and as calm as possible, cleared his throat, scratched his cheek bashfully and looked up at the smirking girl once again. "You look great." Taking a deep breath, he faced her completely. "You look really great. Damn. I can't believe how much you've grown up." Beaming at his appraisal, the redhead straightened up and sauntered up to him, making sure to emphasize the sway of her hips for the blonde's benefit. "Perhaps I'll be willing to show you how much, if you're interested." When she stopped just an inch from his chest, reached up and tiptoed her fingers up his stomach and sternum to the base of his neck, Naruto stiffened. "And I'm not just talking about jutsu here." Responding to the seductive look Tayuya was now giving him, the blonde shook himself back into character and gave her his signature, confident smirk. "Well, that all depends on how persuasive you can be." Oh, he wasn't going to be that guy in this situation. There was no way he was going to show his girlfriend, the one person he knew the most in his life, he'd grown soft. It was all a matter of principle. When the two faced each other down determinedly, eyes fixed upon the other and smirks worn on both their faces, a moment of silence fell over the area. Then, just when it seemed like the confrontation would boil down to a fist fight between them, the kunoichi eventually got bored with the theatrics and, with a huff of frustration, leapt up to her man and smashed her lips against his in a searing kiss. Naruto responded at the exact same time, wrapping his arms around her waist while her leg wrapped around his, quickly turning their playful reunion into one hell of a public display. While Jiraiya was at first surprised at the sudden attack by the pair, an amused grin formed on his face shortly afterwards as he then proceeded to watch them make out. Giving a sign of approval at his student's reciprocation to his girlfriend's personal greeting, he then pulled out his notebook and began jotting down lines, whereas Konohamaru and his friends blushed to the roots of their hair and gawked. At the same time, the duo's affections became more adult, in a manner of speaking. Soon enough, almost the entire street was now watching the young couple make up for lost time, both of whom simply brushed off the multiple sets of eyes glued onto them and just enjoyed one another's company. When they eventually separated, breaths of heated air left their lips as they held one another close. Once his brain eventually came about and processed all of the feelings that had flooded through him in that moment, Naruto chuckled, "Man. It's been a while, huh?" "No shit," Tayuya giggled. "Hey, Naruto-nichan." Both turning around when they heard the unmistakable voice of Konohamaru cut in, the pair were suddenly blinded by a cloud of white smoke exploding in front of their faces. When it cleared seconds later, it revealed a completely nude, hot young woman with a curvaceous body and long brown hair fanning out around her, stuck in a perfect centerfold shot. It was a sight that not only bewildered his friend Udon and elicited a sour glare from Moegi, it also had Jiraiya breathe a very bull-like huff and shout a manly exclamation, and had Tayuya raise an eyebrow in surprise. When the transformed Konohamaru saw the pair look at him in confusion, he accentuated his pose and winked devilishly in their direction. "Well? Watcha think, boss?" the boy asked in a girl's tone, before another puff of smoke filled the air and the genin hopped out of it looking all excited. "Pretty sexy, huh?" At first perplexed by the sudden display, Naruto then smiled and shook his head at the young man, while at the same time keeping an arm wrapped around Tayuya's waist. "I see you've grown quite a bit as well, Konohamaru. Good on you." His response earning a blink from the young man, the jonin then gave him a nod. "You're not a child anymore. That stuff was fun 3 years ago, but things are different now. I'll meet up with you a little bit later and show you something really cool. Alright?" This answer causing the youngster to slump forward slightly, the prospect of being shown something awesome still brought a grin to the genin's face. Konohamaru brightened up and nodded enthusiastically, before being clapped over the head by a punch from Moegi. "You idiot. Don't ever do that in front of me again," the orange-haired girl snarled. Whimpering while crouching low to the floor and nursing a throbbing bruise, the leader of the trio looked up at his kunoichi counterpart. "Ah, but Moegi. No buts. Honestly. Don't you have any common sense?" the girl asked him with a twitching eye. Laughing when he watched the orange-haired girl grill her teammate, Naruto once again had his attention pulled away by yet another presence. A gasp filling the air, both he and Tayuya turned to see Sakura Haruno standing off to the side and looking across at them like she'd just seen a ghost. Eyes reflecting her amazement, the kunoichi gulped and pointed at the Jinchuriki. "And Naruto? Is that you?" Also expressing a sense of surprise, the Jinchuriki smiled when he saw the girl in the kimono tunic and nodded toward her. "Hey, Sakura-chan." Blinking away her amazement, the female member of Team 7 and apprentice under Tsunade, approached the young man and his girlfriend for a closer look. Stopping a few feet away with a bewildered look on her face, the teen spent the next minute looking the jonin over in silence and seeing just how much he'd changed, even going so far as to poke him. Taking note of his height, the growth in his body and the mature air she felt coming off of him, the pink-haired girl could only say one thing. "Wow." Her eyes panning back to his face, Sakura took a deep breath, walked up to him and wrapped her arms around him in a hug. Though her action did surprise the Jinchuriki, Naruto returned it likewise, and when the pair separated, the teen could be seen smiling. "Welcome home." "Thanks," Naruto replied, grin on his face as he took a moment to look his teammate over. "What's going on with everyone, Sakura-chan? I can barely recognize any of you guys. Even you." Brushing her hair back, the pink-haired girl blushed slightly and smiled at the taller boy. "You think so?" "Aha," the jonin said with an enthusiastic head dip. "I can tell you've gotten a lot stronger too, and not just physically. I'd really like to take you on and see what kind of tricks you've learned while I was away." His comment earning a beaming look from the kunoichi, he then rested his arm across his sword and looked between the two girls and Team Ebisu. After acknowledging everyone that was standing around him, he glanced back at the kunoichi in front of him and gestured to them. "Well, it's been 3 years and I've seen a lot of what the world has to offer. I think it's high time I get filled in on what's been happening around here." He had a lot to catch up on, and what better way to get informed than by speaking with the two people he considered his girlfriend and best friend respectively. "Oh, Hokage's office? It's been a long time, you too," Hiruzen spoke, smiling as he stared across at two of the most famous men in this village, both of whom had taken a long leave of absence from their village. With one standing taller than the rest, with his apprentice, his girlfriend and his teammate lined up alongside him, you could almost paint a picture of how much they'd changed. "I trust your training has produced some good results." "Some?" Jiraiya snorted before grinning across at his student, whom could be seen standing right next to him grinning from ear to ear with his hands in his pockets. "You think I would have traveled all that way and worked my butt off just to come back the same as I was before I left?" Naruto asked, rolling a shoulder and causing a few audible clicks to ring out. "Have a little more faith in your subordinates, Hokage Jiji." The elder chuckled. "Well, if that's the case, then I'm certain you've got plenty of new and interesting new material to show us." The third then glanced off to the side, where he saw Tsunade standing near the wall with her arms folded and listening in to the friendly banter. "What do you think?" After giving her own silent appraisal of the young man as he stood beside his teacher and friends, the famed medical nin smirked and stepped forward. Stopping by the desk, she leaned against it while at the same time regarding the troublesome Jinchuriki with a more considerate stare. "I think the runt has made some progress. But, just to be sure, I think we should give the Gaki and his companions a little test run?" "My thoughts exactly," Hiruzen nodded, turning his gaze toward the three youngsters in their midst, where he saw the trio give each other curious glances. "Even though all of you have been promoted, I'm positive that everyone here is eager to find out how far you guys have come. So why don't we have a little contest?" Quickly catching on to what the village leader was suggesting, Tayuya chuckled and puffed her chest out. Sounds good to me. Naruto grinned, and here I wasn't expecting a welcome home party. His eyes flashed with excitement. This is going to be fun. Hearing this from her teammate earned a giggle from Sakura, who then looked across at the young man in amusement. One thing's for certain, aside from a few extra additions to your character, your personality hasn't changed one bit. You think so? The Jinchuriki asked, a nervous laugh escaping his lips as he scratched the top of his head. Bright, exuberant, loud and brash, Sakura counted on her fingers. Exactly how I remember you, though considering your track record, I wouldn't count that as a bad thing. The blonde shrugged with a wry grin. Well, I suppose some things can't be remodeled, no matter how much time passes. The redhead standing alongside him wasted no time in elbowing her boyfriend in the side. That all depends on what parts you're talking about. She then looked up at the top of his head and prodded his skull, like your haircut for example. Oh yeah? Naruto laughed, looking up and pulling on a bang. This style is fixed to my scalp, no matter what I do to it. My hair is in a constant state of gravity-defying spikiness, just like Erosenin's. This comment actually earned a round of laughs from Tsunade, Sakura and Hiruzen, all of whom watched the white-haired man in question pout childishly. Though I think we're both mild cases compared to a few others we may know. Considering the amount of people I've met, yeah, Sakura said, able to come up with a few names from their village whose styles never altered. A familiar masked man and his bushy-browed rival were two of the first people to come to mind. Seeing the trio giggle drew a smile from the Hokage. Having lived this long and seen a lot in his time, Hiruzen had learned to appreciate all the little things in life, most notably the camaraderie shared between friends and allies. It always brought a warm glow to his heart seeing his villagers reveling in the bonds of friendship and spending the time that they had together happily. In any case, I have the perfect opponent lined up for you, Naruto-kun. You too, Sakura, the Hokage spoke up once again, drawing the group's gaze back over. He's someone I'm sure you're both quite familiar with. I've had him on standby for several days in preparation for your arrival, so you don't have to worry about him coming off of a mission spent or exhausted. In fact, he was the one who requested that I set him aside for this very occasion. That's cool, the Jinchuriki replied with a serious look and smile coming into play. I may have just gotten back after a 3-day march, but I'm game for a spar. Me too, Tayuya cut in, at the same time grinning up at her boyfriend. I've been itching for a good fight for a while now. Since you're back in town, I think it's time I collect on that quality time debt you owe me, shithead. Exchanging smirks with her and then across at Sakura, who showed him her game face, the Jinchuriki looked back at his superior. So who's this would-be opponent of mine going to be? Kami, he hoped it was someone good. Sasuke, Niji, Tenten, Lee, Asuma, Kurenai, Kiba, Shino, Hinata. Damn. He really wanted to go find those guys. Immediately after walking through those massive wooden gates at the front, there was suddenly so much to see and do around this village. Clearly this was a side effect of having been traveling the world for upward of 3 years. And here he thought getting back after a couple of weeks from a mission was bad for the biological navigation. Hearing his eagerness to tackle his next challenge brought positive looks to Tsunade, Jiraiya and Hiruzen's faces, as the young Jonin's excitement seemed to filter out over the other two standing alongside him. While one of the three had been his trainer for most of the time they'd been out of town, the other two had heard rumors of the blonde's exploits. From the collaborative mission reports that came in from Yukigekure to the recent war with Moryu and his ghost army, honestly, there had seemed to be no end to the amount of chatter that had been coming in about their resident Jinchuriki. Though neither of them had been able to see the full extent of his power just yet, they were certain it was of a substantially high level. After all, by this point in time, the boy had practically made himself into a legend. A savior of nations and the world. It took a special kind of shinobi to achieve that kind of status. This new generation of youth never ceases to amaze me, the third Hokage thought while sharing a smile with his two former students in the room. It won't be long now before Naruto and his friends take our place in this world, and when they do, they're going to accomplish wonders. From the looks on Naruto, Sakura and Tayuya's faces, the village leader was guaranteed for one hell of a show. Determined to see firsthand exactly how much stronger his resident troublemaker had become, the old man brought his hand up, adjusted his hat, and looked the Jinchuriki square in the eyes. We'll all have plenty of time to become reacquainted. But for now, I think it's time we introduce you to the man who will be testing you, Hiruzen said. The moment the elder uttered these words, the door to the office opened. Chapter 49, Post-Gap Arc, New Tricks. Naruto. Drifting. New Tricks. Looking towards the door of the office when they heard it open, Hiruzen, Tsunade, Naruto, and every other person in the room saw 3 more figures stroll into their midst. Hey! On first glance none of them were able to recognize the team of newcomers. But after a careful moment of studying, names began appearing alongside the faces. Even though one of them had grown quite a bit since he'd last saw him, his appearance didn't surprise Naruto in the least. The Jonin simply cracked a smile when his brain eventually registered to the charcoal eyes and raven black hairstyle cut to resemble the rear end of a chicken. Hey yourself, Sasuke, Naruto responded with a grin. The face was a perfect match. Wearing the same eye patch and drab expression, the Uchiha had not only aged in the last 3 years, he was also taller, about the same height as the Jinchuriki, was wearing a black, high-collar trench coat with white trim that was open at the front, a white obi wrapped around his stomach and waist, which held up a pair of standard blue shinobi trousers, with a pair of blue sandals worn on his feet. Furthermore, he also had a chikudo strapped to his side that not only had a white handle and matching scabbard, but was also emblazoned with his clan's emblem. The boy was also accompanied by two kunoichi, both of whom the Jinchuriki didn't recognize, at first. The one standing on the teen's right was a girl about the same height as Temari with long brown hair tied into a braided ponytail hanging over her shoulder, wearing a Konohagakure headband, green kimono with red trim and white flower patterns on it, a shinobi pouch on her back, and a utility case strapped to the side of her white obi. The other one standing on the teen's left had long, striking and unkempt red hair with red eyes, wearing brown glasses, a lavender uniform exposing her navel, short black shorts, and long black, thigh-high stockings with black sandals. She also had on her, unlike the rest of the people in the room, a Kusagakure headband. Blinking when he saw the blonde-haired young man standing in the middle of the office, Sasuke stared at him for a moment before a smirk crossed his lips. Heh. Well, look what the cat dragged in. Naruto chuckled, pleased to see me? In a manner of speaking, the Uchiha replied, his one good eye scanning the teen from head to toe, you're looking sharp. Well, 3 years traveling the world can do that to a person, Naruto answered with a grin and a shrug, showing off his new jacket. My love for the color hasn't changed. So I can tell. Though I see you've gone for leather on the jacket as opposed to polyester. Sasuke tilted his head and activated his Sharingan, the tomo spinning as he gave his former teammate another once-over. He grunted moments later when he was able to gauge the chakra flowing through the young adult's veins. Not bad. Is this the same Naruto from 3 years ago? The brown-haired girl next to the Uchiha asked, glancing across at her companion inquisitively. She received her answer in the form of a playful wave from said Jinchuriki. Blowing her hair out of her face, the redhead on the other side of the raven-haired shinobi adjusted her glasses and smiled. It's him all right. I recognize his chakra signature from the last time we met. Eyeing the girl in the brown-rimmed spectacles for a moment, Naruto squinted and leaned forward. He then balked when a new face appeared in his head, one he didn't think he'd remember so easily. Were it not for the red hair, her mug and profile would have gone completely over his head. Hey, aren't you that girl from the grass team that was standing across from us in the first stage of the Chunin exams? Yeah, the one that had been so nervous she couldn't even look him in the eye. Tucking some hair behind her ear, Karen smiled in his direction. Yeah, that was me. Heh. What a small world, Naruto mused, glancing across at Tayuya and Sakura to see them acknowledge his realization with a smile. It looks like I've got bucket load of catching up to do. When he turned back to his teammate, the Jinchuriki gestured to the kunoichi flanking the Uchiha on both sides. So who might these two lovely ladies be, if I may ask? Adjusting her posture to a more formal one, the one adorned in the green battle robe smiled. My name is Kurama. Yakumo Kurama. The redhead standing proudly with a hand on her hip, flicked her hair back and nodded in greeting. And I'm Karen. Naruto tilted his head towards the latter. I may be spitballing here, but I have to say you've got quite a bit of chakra on you for an ordinary kunoichi. It also feels kind of familiar. Why is that? Good eye closed, Sasuke let out a chuckle. That's because she's from the Uzumaki clan. Your kin. Ignoring the slightly stunned look she received from Sakura and the sort of surprised one from Jiraiya, the glasses-wearing newcomer gave the peace sign to the spiky-haired blonde staring back at her. What up, cuz? Not appearing as surprised as he should have been, the Jinchuriki merely smiled and saluted to her in return. Yo. Looking between the kunoichi, Naruto laughed. Wow. This is totally awesome. I'm meeting new friends and relatives on the same day. Who would have thought? He then turned to his best friend and rival. So what brings you guys here today? Are the three of you on a mission or something? The Jonin failed to spot the smirk from Tayuya and the roll of the eyes from Sakura, who looked away to shake her head. Raising an eyebrow, the Uchiha glanced from Yakumo to Karen a couple of times to see the shrugs and smiles they sent his way. Following the silent exchange, he turned back to face his friend. Actually, no. We just got up this morning and were about to hit the hot springs, but while we were on the way out we got a message from the Hokage telling us to come up here as soon as we were able. So we did. Batting his eyes a couple of times while staring at the trio momentarily, Naruto remained in dead silence as his mind processed what the Uchiha had just told him. While most of the people in the room watched in amusement to see what the Jinchuriki's ultimate response would be, Jiraiya also seemed to be working out the riddle in his head and, at the exact same time as his student, he eventually came to the same conclusion. Naruto leaned forward and pointed lamely. Wait, are you, like? He then started making random gestures in the air that were a cross between innocent and obscene, a sight that had Tayuya double over with silent laughter and Tsunade snicker in the corner. Karen, cheeks reddening, rested a hand against her cheek and gazed fondly across at the boy in the middle. At the same time Yakumo stepped towards the Uchiha and leaned against his shoulder, more or less. Every single person in the room then watched as Naruto's baffled expression transformed from bewildered to what could only be described as ecstatic. Then, with speed even the best shinobi could barely keep track of, the blonde Shunshined Sasuke out from between the two girls and over to a random corner in the office, his arm wrapped over the Uchiha's shoulders and bringing the two of them into a good, old-fashioned, bro-to-bro talk. Mona mano. You sly dog, you. I knew there was more to you than what you were letting on, Naruto whispered, grinning from ear to ear and rapping his knuckles against his friend's chest. Way to go, Sasuke. Frowning at the proximity with his friend, whom had just walked back into the village no more than an hour ago, the one-eyed shinobi glared at him. What's with you? Why are you acting so weird? Not that he already didn't. His quirky personality had always been his defining trait. Well, I'm just surprised. I mean, after months of traveling the world and saving countries from tyrants, the last thing I expected to find coming back was you in a relationship with two girls, let alone with one. You think I don't have the capacity to live a normal life outside of my responsibilities as a shinobi? Kind of, yeah. Naruto's immediate response from the dark-haired shinobi was a swift jab to the gut. PFT, scatterbrained as usual. Takes one to know one, the blonde shot back, earning a passive glare from the young male in return before returning it positively. But hey, congratulations man. You're finally starting to come out of that dark, unforgiving closet of yours and into the wide open air. Good for you. Thanks. A clearing of a person's throat drawing the pair's attention over their shoulders, the two boys saw the other people present in the room staring back at them quietly. Looking from the amused looks on Tayuya, Karen and Jiraiya's faces to the stern ones on the Hokage, Tsunade and Sakura's, the two boys promptly returned to proper standing positions. As happy as I am to see you two catching up, I think it would be best that we move this meeting along. There are still a lot of things that need to be sorted, Hiruzen spoke, closing his eyes and interlocking his fingers in front of him. Before you walked in, Sasuke-kun, I was just about to tell Naruto-kun and Sakura-san who their opponent for today's assessment was going to be. The Uchiha blinked. Opponent? Oh. I think I can guess who it is, Naruto said, his eyes cutting towards the line of windows to their left. He's been eavesdropping on this meeting the moment we got here. At this admission, everyone in the room soon found themselves looking in the same direction he was. Quietly, they watched the Jinchuriki approach the sill and slide it open. Poking his head out, the blonde leant against the frame and smirked along the roof's tiles. Hey, Kakashi-sensei. Your senses have certainly improved quite a lot, Naruto-kun, the familiar, masked face of Konoha's famous copy ninja spoke as he waved back at the Jinchuriki. What's up? Heh. Even after 3 years, you still haven't changed one bit. And here I was hoping you'd finally built up the confidence to take off that mask and show us all your real face. Chuckling, the blonde reached into his back pouch and yanked out a book. Though at first everyone appeared confused as to what book he'd been carrying this entire time, when he eventually dangled it in full view of the window, all those present knew exactly what it was in 2 seconds flat. It doesn't matter. I recognize you better with your face covered. Makes you easy to spot. Anyway, I got a little present for you, sensei. It's your favorite. And no way. Widening at the sight of the piece of literature, the silver-haired man wasted no time in leaping to his feet and rushing over to the open window. As if he were admiring a priceless artifact, Kakashi's hands suspended themselves anxiously in front of the novel. Is that what I think it is? Aha. It's the first new issue of the Ika Ika series in almost 3 years. Took a while for Ero Sennin to get the ball rolling on this one, but I'd say it turned out pretty well, the blonde exclaimed while handing it over to his stunned teacher, who gingerly took it from him. This is the only copy to have been printed so far, autographed, hardbound, and everything. Hope you like it. Like it? I love it, Kakashi stammered, running a hand over the hardcover and earning sweat drops from all the people staring at him from inside. The look on his face, as they could easily tell even with his mask on, was one of absolute longing and childlike excitement. It was almost pitiful. To add to the very pathetic air he was putting on, the Jonin gave the book a sniff. Oh, it still smells of hot press. Kakashi, if you don't mind. Hiruzen spoke, at the same time noticing the look of pride on Jiraiya's face and the disapproval on Tsunade's. Right, the silver-haired man chirped, clapping his book shut and hopping up onto the sill to look into the office. When he saw Naruto rejoin Sasuke and the others, he looked around the room momentarily and nodded his head towards his audience. It seems that we have a full house today, and with so many familiar faces. His eyes then landed on his former Kunoichi student, who was also standing by her teammates. It's been a long time, Sakura. The pink-haired girl beamed and tucked several bangs of her hair behind her ear. It certainly has, Kakashi-sensei. Beaming happily at Tsunade's apprentice, with an appreciative gaze also falling upon the Uchiha, the man then looked at Naruto to see the boy straighten up and stare right back at him confidently. As you've probably already guessed, I'm going to be your opponent for today. His gaze fell upon Sakura and Sasuke as well, both of whom fixed him with equal intensity. To all three of you. It's time to see how much you guys have improved. The excitement in the air was almost palpable. Oh, sometime later? Out on the streets. Following the end of their meeting with the Hokage and his heads of staff, Naruto was eager to get their contest on the road. Unfortunately, when the village leader finally dismissed them all from his office, Kakashi immediately used that opportunity to take off, saying that his student needed a few hours to rest and recuperate from his 3-day-long journey. While the blonde initially protested the man's declaration, he then realized moments after the Jonin's departure that his team instructor was probably heading off to try out his new present. Though it did satisfy Naruto that his teacher appreciated his gift, it did leave the Jinchuriki with a massive gap in his schedule. Upon seeing their teacher Shunshin out of sight, Naruto decided to break away from the office with his friends. Waving good day to the Hokage and making nice with Tsunade, who'd also been present for his arrival to the tower, the boy ambled away with his best mates in tow. Together, Naruto, Tayuya, Sakura, Sasuke, Karen and Yakumo vacated the Hokage tower as a unit, hitting the streets and going, wherever the hell it was they wanted to go. As far as they were concerned, they had an entire day to fill in. Fuck me. So you're saying this nut job was going to wipe the entire planet from existence just to defeat the 4 of you? Tayuya remarked upon listening to her boyfriend's story of his most epic battle ever, at the same time walking alongside him down the road in the direction of the training fields on the other side of town. Geez. Talk about flying off the handle. Yeah. No shit. The guy was ridiculously strong and he proved it more than once while we were trading hits. If it hadn't been for Xianchan, that psychotic bastard would have turned this entire ball of earth and water into a cloud of ash and moved on without a second thought, the Jinchuriki replied, exhaling sharply and giving an exasperated expression. I have no clue what he would have done afterwards. Make a new Earth, restart humanity from scratch, transport himself to another dimension to conquer it, the list is endless. Considering all the opponents you've fought in the past, I'm going to venture a guess that this Moryu prick must have been the strongest son of a bitch by far. Correct. Circle gets the square, Naruto answered with a grin, playfully poking his girlfriend in the nose before throwing his arms out to illustrate the scale of the conflict that had long since passed. This guy made the tailed beasts look like mice to a tiger. Hell, the Sage of Six Paths mother has nothing on this guy. I mean, what else can you expect from a demon god? In his initial larval state when he took the form of a multi-headed dragon monster, he was every bit as powerful as any one of the tailed beasts and none of our attacks had any effect on him. But then, when he ascended to his next form after we roasted the hell out of him, his power level just went through the roof. We know. The sensor division back at headquarters caught the whole thing on the projection globe, Sakura pointed out with an incredulous shake of her head. His chakra dwarfed the entire planet's. Yeah. And here's the kicker, the guy toyed with us the entire fight, Naruto informed, reaching up and massaging his shoulder to rid himself of a sudden phantom bruise. He could have killed all three of us any time he wanted to. Hell, he was even going to incinerate an entire country and split the continent in half just to make a point. Thank Kami I managed to body slam him before he could do that. I guess we can count our lucky stars that the guy was arrogant as fuck, Tayuya added with a smirk, nudging her boyfriend in the side playfully and drawing his gaze. And then the master of the impossible kicked his ass. Am I right? Well, I'm not one to brag but, yeah, you're damn right I did, Naruto nodded affirmatively, cheerful grin and everything. It was this response that earned a giggle from the redhead, who then threw her arms around his and huddled up close to him as they walked. Boy. I can't wait to get into something normal around here for a change. The last 3 years has just been one extreme after another. No kidding. Hearing this prompted the blonde to turn to his girlfriend and smile, so, enough about my adventures. How were things with the ANBU? Now this he was genuinely curious about. His girlfriend had spent the last 3 years training with the Black Ops division of their shinobi forces, going on tons of missions and protecting Konoha from Kami knows what. Surely there was bound to be a lot of classified stuff involved, as well as stuff she was willing to share. Tayuya smirked at him, you want the long version or the short version? The Jinchuriki shrugged, how about both? Alright. I'll start with the short version, the redhead began before her smile completely vanished, it was boring as hell. Seriously? The majority of the members in the ANBU were dudes, so I was surrounded by guys in masks most of the time, and any girls that were in the organization were just as stoic and unfeeling as the men. You try to have a conversation with them, but they're so information sensitive that they don't really talk about anything else except their next cafeteria visit, Tayuya replied before shaking her head. I mean, sure, you get all clammy and emotionless after finishing off opponents, torturing and killing enemy shinobi, but is that really so different from what other shinobi do? Well, aside from being more clandestine and under the table, I'd say not much, Naruto answered. Yeah. Not to mention a little bit dirty, but I guess that's just me talking from personal experience, the redhead added with certainty laced in her voice. Breathing out in relief, the girl then gazed fondly at her boyfriend, either way, I'm glad it's all over and we can finally go back to being our usual selves. Same here. Watching the pair laugh and hold on to one another as they strolled down the main street brought a smile to Sakura's face. A sense of nostalgia washed over her, bringing back memories of days long past in which the kunoichi was able to see her best friend in social situations, not just with his girlfriend, but with their comrades in general. The intimacy he had with the girl, who was the closest to him in his life, made the medic Nin feel a little bit out of place, like she was intruding on something important. However, if Naruto and Tayuya didn't mind sharing affections in front of them, then Sakura was content with the situation. She was just happy that her friend was back and that they could all be together again, her, Naruto and Sasuke. Team 7. Speaking of which, the raven-haired member of their team was currently keeping in step alongside them with Karen and Yakumo, all of whom were looking across at the blonde and watching his interactions with interest. Having remained silent for a majority of their trek, listening to the Jinchuriki and musician chatter away, the trio was then disrupted from their personal time when the pair they were observing sensed their eyes boring into the sides of their skulls. By the way Sasuke, how are things going for you? The Uchiha smiled and shrugged, okay, I guess. Everyone's been busy over the past couple years, so as far as I can tell, there's really nothing to complain about. I see. You and Sakura-chan must have been working your asses into the ground then, huh? The Jinchuriki remarked, seeing the pink-haired girl in question chuckle. Humph. You don't know the half of it, Sasuke replied, picking up the pace a little and moving across to better engage with his teammates. There's been so much going on we hardly ever got any time to see the other groups. Things died down a little after the Ghost Army incident, but then started to pick up a few weeks later. More missions? Yeah, Yakumo spoke up while walking in closer to join the group in conversation. After the stone armies vanished, it took several days for the highways to open up and the communication channels to be fixed. When the roads finally became accessible, villages from all over started sending in thousands of requests, from building repairs to escorts, Tayuya also added, cashing in the knowledge she was able to gain from her end of the board. In other words, it's been hectic, Karen said, earning a nod of agreement from Sakura. Has the boom settled down now or is it still going strong? Naruto asked, curious if he was going to be sent on any mission soon. It's gotten relatively quiet, Sakura said while moving into the blonde's line of sight when he looked across at her. The kunoichi smiled and brushed some hair behind her ear. We're all still pretty busy, especially with this upcoming Chunin exams. Chunin exams? Naruto repeated, looking at Tayuya for confirmation and seeing the girl nod in response. It's that time again? Man. I almost forgot about that. The redhead giggled at the incredulous look he now wore. You've been away for 3 years. Just give yourself a couple days to readjust to the shit going on around you. Yeah, I'll do that. At that, Sasuke snorted and shook his head at his counterpart. Obviously you'd forget about something important like that. It makes sense, considering you won't have to take that exam ever again, what with you being a jonin and all. His lip twitching upwards, the Jinchuriki then perked when he remembered something important and looked across at his friends curiously. Oh yeah. That reminds me. How are you guys doing in the ranking department? I already know that Temari-chan, Kankuro and Gaara have all been promoted to jonin, not to mention Kuratsuchi-chan, Shiratsuchi and Akatsuchi. What about the others? This line of inquiry immediately earned a round of smiles from his teammates and his girlfriend, all of whom looked between one another before deciding to make their big announcements. You wouldn't believe how much you've missed, Sakura informed, throwing the boy a look before giving him the peace sign. I've just been promoted to Tokubetsu Jonin. Naruto's eyes practically shone at the news. Whoa. For real? Aha. Medical specialist and combat efficient with Tsunade's seal of approval, the pink-haired girl added with a proud grin and a thump to her chest. Everyone else from our age group has been promoted to Chunin as well. Even Choji, the blonde asked in amazement, the new surge of information forcing him to a stop in the middle of the road. Yep. Even Choji, Tayuya chuckled, stepping back some and grinning at the astonished blonde next to her. And that's not even the half of it. Niji, Shino, Yakumo and Imo-san over here have gone 2 steps further. The 4 of them are all jonin now. While her announcement earned a scowl from the Uchiha behind her, the rest of the news brought an even wider smile to the Jinchuriki's face. It looks like you and I aren't the only exceptional parties anymore, shithead. That's great, Naruto said, stepping forward with positive rays wafting off of him as if he was the sun itself. Looking from one face to the next, he was now able to fully comprehend the number of changes that have taken place in his absence. His friends have truly grown. Oh. And there's one other thing I should probably mention, Tayuya continued, drawing the boy's attention over to her and winking at him. Kin and Isaribi are Chunin as well, she added to this by nodding towards the painter standing nearby. They were both put on a team with Yakumo, and took the Genin and Chunin exams together. Sakura, Sasuke, Karen and everybody else then had the privilege of watching the blonde stumble back a bit. When he recovered his footing seconds later, he brought a hand up and massaged his scalp, the shock from all the news shaking him from head to toe. Eyes wide, the boy gave a light chuckle and looked up again, hands returning to his sides and expression quickly showcasing his joy. Wow, that's amazing, Naruto murmured, looking around at his teammates and friends, before his gaze turned skywards. I can't believe how much time has actually passed. Things sure are different now. And he knew without a shadow of a doubt that he was going to enjoy getting reacquainted with all of it. Oh. Meanwhile, elsewhere? Somewhere in an unknown part of the continent, deep inside of a large underground cavern, the black-cloaked form of a man with a Venus flytrap growing out of his body could be seen looking up at the titanic frame of an enormous statue. Like some demonic creature from the darkest depths of the underworld, this seemingly lifeless edifice sat atop an enormous lotus flower-shaped platform, legs folded and assumed in a meditative position, stewing away while bathed in an eerie glow. Not only did it have strange markings tattooing its body, it also had multiple closed eyes and stumps growing out of its back. Needless to say, it was one of the most terrifying-looking statues anyone had ever seen. But the Akatsuki member staring up at it wasn't shaken in the least. With his yellow eyes looking the creature over, the silent, black and white figure of Zetsu remained standing in place and admiring the craftsmanship in interest. He stayed in this position for quite some time, until the feeling of an unsettling presence fell over him. Turning on the spot, the Akatsuki scout saw a whirlpool open up in the air behind him, before the familiar, mask-wearing form of his superior spilled out of it. Landing expertly upon the ground, the figure in the orange, spiral-patterned mask spoke up. Our melancholic associate tells me that preparations for the sealing process are just about ready. Oh. Wonderful, the white side of Zetsu chirped happily while his other half groaned. It's about damn time. All we need to do now is move the statue, rally the members and then we can begin removing the 6 tails from its host, the figure went on, stopping beside the man so that he too was looking up at the statue. Make sure that everyone is there for the ceremony. This statement had Zetsu smile. This will be our very first Jinchuriki. I'm sure that Pain will not want to leave anybody out. The masked man grunted and glanced toward his two-faced subordinate. But before all that, I need you to run a little errand for me. Expression tweaking, the spy glanced towards his boss. Where do you want us to go? I just received a tip that the group responsible for all the noise going on across the 5 great nations has some sort of mining operation going on in the south. I need you to go down there and check it out for me, the mysterious individual stated in a firm voice, one that had the Akatsuki member frown. You want us to record what we find? That's why I'm sending you instead of going down there myself. For some reason, the leader of the Shadow Organization has been concentrating a lot of his time and effort around that particular area. He's digging around for something that's not there, at least, not on the surface anyway. It must be incredibly important to their group for the air to be clogged up with so much chatter. The white half murmured uneasily, it sounds fishy. Those guys have been up to no good for a while now. Don't worry. We'll check it out, the other half of the plant man spoke. Good. The group's operation is located on the southernmost peninsula inside of the high mountains. Your extrasensory abilities should be able to do the rest, the masked man informed while looking back up at the demonic statue. Be quick about it. Will do, Zetsu replied, moments before his form sank into the ground. Within seconds, the spy was gone, leaving the masked leader glaring at the statue with his hands at his sides. Oh, Konohagakure? Sometime later? Finding themselves at the third training field following a delectable lunch, the members of Team 7 and their tagalongs formed up around the 3 tree stumps that served as the universal meeting point in that area. Scattering themselves across the area, Naruto and Tayuya spent the next hour continuing their previous conversation about the mysteries of the universe, both old and new, while Sakura had some FaceTime with Karen, and Yakumo and Sasuke stood off to the side chatting between themselves about their last joint mission together. So far, the day was proving to be quite enjoyable for all of them, especially after they'd been apart for so long. They'd spent that entire morning juggling time between one another. During the walk down the road, Naruto yammered away with Tayuya, Sakura and Sasuke simultaneously. At lunchtime the Jinchuriki spent chatting with the Uchiha over a plate of yakisoba and soup respectively, while the musician and medic conversed in the corner about their regular practices. And then when they decided to walk around the shops browsing the catalogs, Naruto spent time with his cousin Karen and Tayuya eavesdropping, at the same time Yakumo, Sasuke and Sakura walked side by side trading pleasantries. In the end, it all came down to this, the 6 of them split up into pairs and waiting for the challenger Kakashi to show himself. To put it into perspective, by this point in time, the competitors were getting a little bit antsy. Does that man always use the waitlist option? Karen asked in an exasperated tone of voice. Yep, Sakura groaned, looking thoroughly exhausted as the group stood around the 3 logs positioned in the clearing. You would think we would have learned by now. What? To get here 2 hours after the time he specified? Sasuke asked from his end of the line. I was going to say 3 hours, but sure, let's roll with that, the pink-haired girl replied, gritting her teeth and kicking at the ground, damn it. Don't worry, Sakura-chan. He's bound to show up eventually, Naruto murmured, leaning to the side and resting his head on top of Tayuya's, who had also taken the liberty of supporting herself on his shoulder. I mean, how long does it take for a person to get across town? 15, 20 minutes? If you're talking about Scarecrow, I'd say about as long as someone wearing a pair of cement shoes, the musician grumbled. Ha! The blonde chuckled while glancing down at his beloved roommate, wouldn't that be an interesting look for him? Beaming at her boyfriend, the musician then proceeded to lean against him with her eyes closed. Feeling at peace, the pair and the rest of the gang scattered around the space remained in silence. While Yagura went on to painting a picture of the blonde and his girlfriend across the way, Karen and Sakura then went on to discussing the supply of medicinal remedies between their villages. Their conversation was just beginning to kick off of the ground too, until a puff of smoke on the central stump alerted the teams to the ever-tardy Kakashi Hataki's arrival. Sorry I'm late, the silver-haired man chirped with book in hand while he gave the teenagers a cheerful wave. I was just on my way over when I saw this beautiful flock of cranes flying overhead. Watching them land on the distant rooftops, I sort of got a little caught up. Yeah right, liar. Naruto and Sakura shouted at him, while Sasuke rolled his eye and palmed his face. Chuckling nervously at the infuriated glares he received from the duo rounding on him, the silver-haired man hopped off of the stump and strolled out onto the field. I assume that you 3 have had enough time to rest and catch up? Glancing across the way toward Sasuke's end, he saw the raven-haired man standing there with his arms folded and a cool expression in play. Good. Taking the silence as his answer, the masked Jonin stopped in the middle of the clearing and turned to his team. I guess we can get this thing started then. His book shut with a snap. Watching the Jonin file it away into his pouch, the scattered group then saw the man smirk in their direction. At least, that's what they thought if the crease in his mask was anything to go by. The rules are the same as they were in the Chunin exam. However, instead of working as a team, I'll be fighting you 3-1 at a time. Your job is to come at me with everything you have. With the intent to kill, right sensei? Sakura inquired, stepping forward in anticipation. Exactly, Kakashi. I smiled back at the Kunoichi. Show no mercy. If you have any hope of succeeding against me, you have to give it your all. Otherwise, what would be the point of this assessment? He then proceeded to observe his 3 former students as they strolled forward, with Sakura pulling out a pair of fighting gloves and slipping them on, Sasuke nudging his Chikudo up his belt line, and Naruto setting his sword aside and adjusting his headband. Good to see that you're all psyched about this. Looking as eager as he'll ever be, the blonde Jonin chuckled. So, who gets to fight first? Naruto asked aloud. The Uchiha grunted, I guess that's up to us to decide. Turning to look across at his teammates, he saw them stop and glare back at him competitively. After a moment of looking between one another, the trio formed up and brought their fists to the center. Tayuya, Yakumo and Karen then proceeded to watch with great amusement as the members of Squad 7 had a game of Jankenpa, going through several rounds one after the other. When they began to concentrate and focus all of their attention on their combinations, there was eventually a break in the routine when one of them picked rock and the others predictably selected scissors. A grin appeared on the face of the victor followed by a triumphant exclamation. Yes! Naruto shouted, forming a fist while watching his Kunoichi teammate pull away miserably and Sasuke look at the scissors he'd formed with his fingers with disdain. Backing down, the raven-haired boy crossed his arms, lucky. Damn, and I wanted to get a shot in, Sakura also grumbled. Don't worry guys. I'll make sure Kakashi-sensei has enough juice left in him for a couple rounds with you, the Jinchuriki replied, rolling his shoulder and smirking. We'll make this a quick one. If we really wanted to, a fight between us would last for a whole day and night. But let's not get carried away. I agree, Kakashi answered, giving the blonde a smile and nodding towards the rest of Squad 7. I'll get to you two soon enough. While the Jinchuriki limbered up, the pink-haired Kunoichi beamed and stepped towards him, nudging him in the side and getting his attention. Good luck. Thanks. Gratitude given, Naruto turned back to his teacher. Once they were both certain the other two had stepped off of the pitch, the pair then made their final preparations. Knowing he wasn't going to need his sword, as he could compensate for its loss with his hands or kunai just as well, the blonde adjusted his jacket and slid into a stance. On your go, sensei. If you insist, Kakashi chirped, reaching up with his hand and gripping the underside of his headband. Remember, anything goes. Considering the circumstances, I'm going to have to work a little bit harder than last time. He then pushed his protective plate up, revealing the spinning tomos of his Sharingan, which he focused upon his student. Ready? Let's rock, Databeo, the Jinchuriki replied, beginning to bounce on his toes before stopping dead with his arms hanging at his sides in their typical fashion. Sasuke, Sakura, Yakumo, Karen and Tayuya kept their distance as they watched the pair stare one another down. Silence falling over the area, breath stilled when Kakashi and Naruto fell into defensive positions, sizing one another up and wondering who would make the first move. The tension escalated. Then, just as a gust blew a collection of leaves from a nearby tree across the pitch, the quiet of the moment was suddenly broken and the two shinobi's feet dug into the ground. In the blink of an eye, both Naruto and Kakashi shot towards one another in a dash and collided in the center of the prairie. A loud crack rang out when they exchanged blows, with the copy ninja throwing a right hook to intercept the roundhouse kick his opponent threw at him. Their blows pressing in, both Jonin glared hard at one another, moments before they both disappeared in a shunshin. While Karen and Sakura were astounded by the sheer speed being displayed, only Sasuke, Tayuya and Yakumo remained calm. Together, the three of them traced the field for several seconds until their eyes ventured towards the woods across the field. There, the brush became disturbed when two invisible blurs darted into the undergrowth, indicating the separate paths both opponents had decided to take. The Uchiha had to activate his Sharingan just to keep up with them. It looks like Kakashi has increased his speed over the last 3 years, Sasuke remarked, caught slightly off guard by the level of agility he'd just witnessed. A smirk appeared on Tayuya's lips. Old Scarecrow must have been training like hell for this fight. She could tell. His movements were much more precise and his takeoff speed was quite impressive. He must have taken a page out of Guy's book and worked on his close combat skills to accommodate himself for his students' growths. Shithead has him on the defensive. Smart. Let's see how long it'll stay that way, Yakumo spoke, also breaking out a smile. As of right now, the fight between Naruto and Kakashi had just begun. Oh, Hokage Tower? Hiruzen Sarutobi had the most intrigued smile on his face as he watched through his viewing orb the duel now taking place on Training Ground 3. With his hands behind his back and a pipe in his lips, the man stood beside his chair as the all-seeing eye that was the specter following Naruto and Kakashi through the forest relayed back to him every single moment of their battle. Switching between both fighters repeatedly, the man was given the full scope of what was taking place on the other side of his village. Needless to say, it was certainly off to an exciting start. To illustrate that point, not only was the leader of the Hidden Leaf looking on, but Jiraiya and Tsunade were also in attendance and gazing into the glass orb with equal enthusiasm. Watching the orb dart between the fast-moving Jinchuriki and his original team leader, Hiruzen chuckled, so they've decided to start the battle the good old-fashioned way. Off the field and in the shadows, Jiraiya remarked, noting how both Naruto and Kakashi were using the dense foliage of the forest to obscure their movements. Instead of fighting on open ground, they'd instead opted to take their battle into the trees to try and outwit the other. It was an engagement where they would pit their stealth and combat skills against one another and see who would come out on top, the basic of the basic of openings. Tsunade chuckled at the development as she watched Naruto and Kakashi make a pass at one another and lash out with a kunai. A shower of sparks scattered when they landed on opposite branches. That's a pretty slick first move. Kakashi knows his opponent won't be able to use his outrageous speed in a tight space, so he's decided to lead his student into an area where they'll both be hampered by their surroundings. Yes. But I bet Naruto-kun has already figured that strategy out, Hiruzen noted, looking up to see the widely grinning Jiraiya. I know your student. Considering his past battles, he's probably already filed out a lot of, if not all of his weaknesses. The white-haired Sannin nodded, that and more. The brat has added so many techniques to his arsenal that he's practically transformed himself into a one-man army, just like me and his old man. He then gestured towards the globe, where they saw Kakashi hiding behind a trunk and looking around wildly in alarm. Not only that, but his team leader has made his first big mistake. How so? Hiruzen asked, raising an eyebrow at the hermit. Jiraiya acknowledged the question with an immediate answer. The brat spent most of his earlier life growing up on the streets and inside forests with wild animals. If you've studied your first issue biology and psychology publications regarding impressionable youngsters, then you would know from this bit of info that his natural habitat is in fact the jungle. Upon hearing this news, Tsunade cringed. I wonder how long it will be before Kakashi remembers that about his most eccentric student? Oh, not long, I'm sure, Jiraiya shrugged, rocking back and forth on his heels and watching the copy ninja vanish in a shunshin to dodge the hail of kunai sent his way. Continuing to observe the battle for several minutes, Hiruzen and the rest of the audience remained in calm silence while the glass ball flashed and flickered with the excitement taking place on the training field. It was only after seeing Naruto and Kakashi exchange blows a few more times before the man looked up towards his students in interest. From your experience with the boy, Jiraiya, how strong would you say he is now? Tapping his finger a couple of times and seeing Tsunade look in his direction, the Toad Hermit exhaled. It's hard to say. The kid has made so many leaps and bounds in the last 3 years that it's been really tough trying to keep up with him and accurately gauge his power increase. Seeing their attention still set on him, Jiraiya continued. But I do know this, he's not only the fastest shinobi on this continent now, he's also the most powerful user of the wind element in history. No kidding, Tsunade exclaimed, raising an eyebrow. That would put him on our level then, wouldn't it? Yep. S rank, Jiraiya said with a proud smile appearing on his face. He's more than ready to take on the Akatsuki and Orochimaru. All he needs to do now is learn Sage Mode and go head to head with the Kyuubi. But those are lessons I think I'll reserve for another day. Hiruzen nodded, I agree. He then fixed his attention back on the viewing orb, where he saw Naruto fly through the woods and slide along the branches before coming to a stop inside the brush. For now, let's just focus on the assessment. Oh. Third training ground? Still standing out in the open, Sasuke and the others continued to stare into the surrounding forest as the battle between Naruto and Kakashi gradually unfolded. Of course, due to the fact that the pair had disappeared far into the undergrowth, it had become incredibly difficult for those without extrasensory abilities to keep track of them. The only one out of the entire group who'd lost sight of them completely was Sakura. Since she didn't have super hearing like Tayuya, keen eyesight like Sasuke and Yakumo, or a sixth sense like Karen, she was admittedly a bit lost on where the pair had disappeared. However, the one thing she did know for certain was that they were out there and chasing one another down in the shadows. Knowing exactly what her copy ninja of an instructor was capable of, she could only imagine how far Naruto had managed to push himself to be able to go toe-to-toe with the guy. So, how long is this game of hide-and-seek going to last? Karen asked no one in particular, her glasses flashing as she observed the pair through her other set of eyes. Good question, Tayuya also murmured, tapping her foot impatiently. Shinobi sneakiness was all well and good. After all, it was the cornerstone of the profession that the 5 of them practiced. However, what they really wanted to see was a good old scrap out in the open. What good was a show if the spectators weren't getting a thrill out of the performance? Don't worry. One of them is bound to break the ice sooner or later, Sasuke stated matter-of-factly, his one good eye narrowing on the shadows. For the next few minutes nothing happened, leaving the group in a period of suspense and boredom. But then, just when it seemed like this game of tag between master and student was going to drag on for the rest of the day, a massive explosion suddenly rocked the entire training field when, over the tops of the trees, a cloud of fire and smoke blasted into the air and scared dozens of birds from their roosts. The earth shaking under the force of the cataclysm, the group standing by the tree stumps perked up when they then saw a flash in the tree line, followed by a second explosion and a figure darting out into the open. Bingo! The red-haired musician smirked, it's about damn time. The group gave a collective nod of agreement when they saw Naruto's orange form spring across the field and stop close to the edge of the lake. Moments later, Kakashi appeared on the scene, leaping out of the trees and landing out in the open as well. When the group glanced at him, they saw he had a bruise on his face and a rip in his shirt, whereas his blonde opponent appeared slightly ruffled. This was probably due to the explosions that had hit the forest mere moments ago. Naruto grinned, nice moves. You've gotten a lot faster since the last time we met, Kakashi-sensei. The man with the gravity-defying hair smiled back, you too, Naruto-kun. I can see you've learned a few new tricks while you were away. Jiraiya-sama's training must have been pretty intense. Oh, you have no idea, the orange-wearing shinobi chuckled. I've broken more bones and collapsed from exhaustion more times than I can count. Sliding his foot forward, the masked shinobi then started to bring his hands up into another fighting stance. Of course, it takes a lot more than tricks and cunning to win a battle. A shinobi's ability to hide in the shadows, disguise themselves and conceal their movements is part 1 of today's assessment. Now it's time to move on to part 2. Taijutsu. A grin formed across Naruto's face. I thought you'd never ask. Cracking his neck, the young adult then slid his feet apart and, taking a solid horse riding stance, the blonde pulled his fists up to his sides and fixed all of his attention on the man standing in his line of sight. Aware that the others were now watching them even more closely, eager to see what was going to happen next, the slippery prankster decided to shed a little bit more light on the situation. Warm-ups are over. Let's do this. Yakumo raised an eyebrow in surprise, all that was just a warm-up? This certainly caught the Uchiha's attention, who kept his eye fixed solely upon the field. His Sharingan eye locking onto his student with his guard held high, the silver-haired shinobi began analyzing the young man's stance for any slight changes or shifts. Seeing his chakra levels were still registering normally for the Jinchuriki, given that it was always set at a grossly high level, the Jonin then figured he should test the waters a little. If his student was still hiding some cards inside of that sleeve of his, then he was determined to find them out. In a startling turn, the ground at Naruto's feet suddenly exploded upwards and a second Kakashi sprang up at him with a kunai in hand, which he aimed to impale the boy through the neck. However, just inches from hitting the teen, the blonde's hand shot up and caught the clone's wrist, stopping the Jonin from following through with his attack. This sudden lapse in attention gave the other Kakashi time to dash forward, a second kunai in hand which he aimed to run through the distracted Uzumaki. It was a maneuver that surprised the audience and brought a smirk to Naruto's face. In a blur of movement, the real Kakashi thrust towards his target, impaling his own Kage Bunshin and going straight through it to strike his opponent. But then, just when it seemed like he was going to hit, the Jinchuriki suddenly turned into an after-image and the Jonin's knife ended up running through nothing but air. The silver-haired warrior gasped and skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust and smoke, his gaze immediately shooting around wildly. The group on the sidelines also looked up in surprise, with Sakura's eyes widening in shock. Whoa, he's quick. She then glanced across at the others alongside her. Hey, did you guys see where he went? No. Not a clue, Yakumo murmured. Even Karen appeared stunned. He just disappeared. While the medic Nin was looking at the girls' confused faces, she quickly noticed that both Tayuya and Sasuke were looking off towards the right of the field, their eyes wide and teeth clenched in a clear sign of disbelief. Curious at their startled reactions, the pink-haired Kunoichi decided to look as well. It was at that point she and the rest of the gang got the biggest surprise of the day when they spotted Naruto standing on the other side of the lake a full kilometer away. The boy was just an orange speck on the horizon of the glistening surface of water. Whoa! What the dash? Karen choked out, shaking her head to see if she wasn't seeing things. Kakashi, who'd managed to spot him before the rest of them did, was also staring across the lake in shock. Wait, how did he? So there he is. Wow, Sakura gawked, before then glancing back at the Uchiha and the flute player nervously. Sasuke and Tayuya spotted him before the rest of us. They knew where Naruto was the whole time. Man, I don't want to know how strong those two are getting. It was a terrifying thought. If they could track the blonde at the speed he was traveling at, whereas the rest of them, including Kakashi, had managed to lose sight of him for 3 whole seconds, then that meant their strength and experience had gotten to a pretty high level as well. The silver-haired Jonin standing in the middle of the grass frowned and held his knife at the ready. His Shunshin no Jutsu is remarkable. I was right in front of him and I didn't even see him move. There's only one other person in the world I know who can move that fast. Kakashi then sweated nervously when he saw his student dash forward and spring across the lake. After several jumps and hops, the blonde was back on the shoreline, standing in the center of the grassy clearing smiling cheerfully, while at the same time keeping his eyes set firmly on his teacher. Alright, now! In a blur of movement, Kakashi reached behind him and drew a cluster of kunai, which he then hurled at the blonde. The second they were set loose, the man then disappeared in a burst of dust and reappeared charging at the teen from the side. He slowed down however, allowing the kunai he'd thrown to reach their target first, obviously as a decoy so that he could force his opponent to move. As expected, Naruto did move, but not in the manner Kakashi had anticipated. Instead of dodging the knives, the teen spun on the spot and kicked the kunai away from him and towards the approaching Jonin. The copy ninja had only a split second to react in alarm and sway to the side, with one of the blades slicing through his hair while the rest impaled the ground behind him. Watching his strands fall away, the older shinobi then sprang into the air and flipped down at the boy with a kick, which the Jinchuriki blocked and countered with one of his own. Spinning over it, the Sharingan user landed beside the boy and threw a right cross, which Naruto swiftly countered, their forearms colliding with a deafening thump. When the pair began to grapple, Kakashi attempted to hit his student with a left overhand, only to see the youngster catch it with the same forward arm he was grappling with and trap both his arms. This left the man wide open for Naruto to retaliate with a left uppercut directly under their lock. His knuckles slammed into the Jonin's chin and flipped him into the air. The audience looked on in amazement as Kakashi spiraled and hit the ground with his back before springing to his feet. The moment he slid to a stop, he failed to notice his opponent's form blur out and reappear directly behind him, a kunai drawn and swinging towards his back. Whoa! The copy ninja looked behind him in alarm to see his student right on top of him. However, just when it seemed like Naruto had the man at checkmate, the spiky-haired wild child then had his gaze snapped to his right when a green shadow suddenly darted out of the woods and shot towards him like a bullet. Dynamic entry. He stopped his attack mid-swing to parry the kick that immediately followed, the foot crashing into his arm sending him blasting across the field and through the air. Flipping into a quick recovery, Naruto landed several yards away with a numb forearm. Upon which he looked up to find himself staring at another familiar face. The sight of sparkling teeth and full body green brought a smile to his face. I knew I smelt protein powder somewhere nearby. Even the spectators were taken by surprise at the appearance of the newcomer. Dressed in a figure-hugging green spandex, complete with orange leg warmers, a red headband wrapped around his waist and wearing a green vest that all Jonin of Konohagakure were known to wear, Madogai made his presence on the training field known. Hand extended in its signature manner, with the other slipped comfortably behind his back, the grinning shinobi spoke, "You seem to be having a tough time keeping up with your old student, Kakashi. Are you having an off day today?" The masked shinobi crouching next to him chuckled in response, "Not really. But that last maneuver did catch me a little bit by surprise. Perhaps your legs are still a little bit worn out from the vigorous sparring session we had a few days ago." Maybe. That game of Jankenpa did last for quite some time. Perhaps standing on that bridge the entire afternoon wasn't such a good idea. Considering their matches usually lasted for days at a time, that was highly unlikely. Guy's teeth twinkled with excitement. "Well, fear not, my eternal rival, because the beautiful beast of Konohagakure is here to assist you. I'm positive that my flames of youth will be able to help reignite your own, dwindling passions and give you the extra boost you need to carry on with your assessment." There was something about what he said that not only had Kakashi sweat drop, but the others standing by as well. Strolling forward so that he stood by his companion's side, the silver-haired Jonin then turned his attention back to Naruto, who was now on his feet and watching the pair cautiously. Though I'm grateful for the last-second save, you didn't really have to jump in like that. I understand that you wanted to continue testing the youngling on your own terms, but after watching how well he was doing against you, I just couldn't hold myself back any longer, the other Jonin replied with an ever-widening grin. Your boy has come a long way since the last time I saw him, Kakashi. His taijutsu skills and his speed are absolutely sublime. He then glanced at his coworker eagerly. You wouldn't mind if I took him off your hands for a little while, would you? Kakashi smiled and shook his head, not at all. I did ask you to come by to help me out if things got a little bit hairy. By all means, have at it. Great. Upon hearing the conversation between the two adults subside, Naruto smiled. Long time no see, Bushibrao-sensei. How are you doing? The man in green nodded enthusiastically. I'm doing well, Naruto-kun. That's very king of you to ask. Judging from the look in your eyes and the smile on your face, you seem to be doing pretty well yourself. I can tell you've been training really hard on your trip away from the village. Guy then craned his head ever so slightly. Perhaps you've gotten strong enough to give even someone of my impressive caliber a challenge. Naruto responded to this with a more competitive air falling over him. We'll see. Since you've decided to jump in, I think it's about time I really started opening up the taps. Widening his feet and taking a firmer stance, the spiky-haired shinobi then brought his hands up and began focusing his chakra. The group observing from the sidelines looked on with even greater interest and excitement than before, with Tayuya making a quiet exclamation as a smile pulled across her lips. This fight just got a lot more interesting. How was Naruto going to pull himself out of this rut? Standing side by side, both Guy and Kakashi took defensive stances as they saw the blonde Jonin several yards away from them assume a battle-ready stance. But, unlike his previous forms, this one had his body crouching slightly lower to the ground with his arms positioned in an unusual way. Relaxed, with one hand held forward and the other suspended at his chin, the young man primed himself by taking a few deep breaths of air until his gaze narrowed in a harsh glare. At that exact moment, blue chakra started to waft off of Naruto's body and, when the aura started to take the form of steam, the ground started to tremble. With it, every single pebble, rock, grass and leaf that was not tied down to the ground started to levitate into the air all around him, a sight that had Kakashi and Guy look up in surprise. While Sasuke and the others blinked when the tremors in the ground started to increase, as did the amount of blue steam coming off of the blonde's body, Karen's eyes suddenly widened in shock when a loud ping went off in her head. His chakra level is growing fast. After several seconds of watching the atmosphere around the blonde alter under his increasing power output, a shockwave suddenly exploded from his body. The gust of wind generated by the force struck the two Jonin head-on and had the pair recoil in surprise. Upon knocking them off balance, Naruto dashed straight at them at blinding speed, clotheslining the pair with the force of a locomotive. Both Kakashi and Guy managed to guard against his attack just in time, but as soon as the blonde slammed into them and knocked them backwards, Naruto's form suddenly transformed into an afterimage and passed right through them. At first stunned when the blonde seemingly vanished, the pair failed to notice the Jinchuriki's afterimage solidify directly behind them and reverse directions, slamming simultaneous elbows into their backs. A loud crack rang out when Naruto struck the two shinobi, knocking both Kakashi and Guy flying forwards. Yelping in shock, the pair then quickly leapt into a recovery and, landing deftly, spun around with their guards up. It was a good thing that they did because the second their eyes landed on Naruto, the blonde already had his right fist cranked back and blue chakra wafting off of it. Futon, Keijo Ho. Wind release, coil gun. With a shout of effort, the Jinchuriki threw his hand forward and fired a flash of blinding white light at the pair. Both Jonin leapt out of the way just in time to avoid the shot striking the ground and causing a massive, geyser-like explosion that literally shook the entire area and sent a tidal wave across the lake. The entire audience had to brace themselves when the gust of wind and debris struck them, with only Sasuke and Tayuya managing to hold their ground and watch the blast die down. Having been separated by the attack, Kakashi and Guy looked towards the center of the cataclysm. Upon watching the smoke lift, both were stunned when they saw a massive, meteor-sized crater sitting in the place where an area of flat pristine field once lay. Most of the rubble had been incinerated in the blast, leaving only scattered debris lying in its center. Good Kami, Guy mouthed, what in the heck was that? That was way too close, Kakashi said before his eyes snapped towards Naruto, who was still standing in place with his hand extended. He supercharged his wind chakra to fire a hypervelocity, high-density round of air capable of traveling at the speed of light. The power put behind the attack gives the projectile an immense level of kinetic energy and an enormous amount of destructive power with only a small charge. A bead of sweat trickled down the side of his head. Damn. I couldn't even track the round with my Sharingan and he fired it at us almost instantaneously. Where in the world did he learn how to do that? It seemed like his student hadn't just gotten stronger. He'd also acquired some terrifying new jutsu along the way. Just as Naruto was moving out of the stance he'd used to execute the move, a green blur suddenly shot across the field towards him. Sprinting at him as fast as he could, Guy sprang upon the boy with his right fist cocked back and with a battle cry escaping his lips, before he uncorked the mother of all overhands upon the young Jonin. The second the Jinchuriki parried, the pair began exchanging thunderous blows in a blur of movement, gunshots ringing out in rapid succession as the pair struck at each other at a speed very few would be able to keep up with. Trading shots over and over again, both dodging and blocking respectively, the speedy man in spandex attempted to nail his opponent with a hook, only for Naruto to sway under it and counter with an uppercut, which Guy barely avoided and responded with an elbow. The Jinchuriki easily dodged the counter and came back with a right hook, which the older man ducked and retaliated with a rapid-fire chain of lefts, all of which Naruto head slipped before countering with a swift combination of punches. Guy blocked them and uncorked a roundhouse kick into the young man's head, only for the speedy blonde to catch it, kick the man's pivoting leg out and, with a yell, toss the shinobi into the air. As soon as Guy was sent spiraling into the sky, Naruto cocked his left back and threw a palm strike after him with a shout. The second he did so, a hien, flying swallow, round was fired from his hand and smacked the Jonin in the stomach, blasting him through the air and towards the lake, upon which Naruto then pursued. When the Jonin eventually bounced across the water surface and landed back on his feet several yards from the shore, he quickly wiped the trickle of blood from his lip and grinned. My, now this is what I'm talking about. Woo! What a rush. The flames of youth are burning brightly with this one. Quickly drawing a set of shuriken from his pouch, Guy pitched them at his fast-approaching opponent, who suddenly turned into an afterimage and allowed the projectiles to pass right through him. Kome! Attack me with everything you've got, Naruto. The taijutsu master then leapt out of the way in time to avoid the blonde reappearing behind him and burying a kunai into his back, the attack striking nothing but air. Eyes snapping right in pursuit of the Jonin, the blonde smiled. You asked for it, Guy-sensei. He then vanished with another crack of wind, as did his opponent. Spotting the two Jonin fighting it out in a blur across the pond, Kakashi quickly turned to join in. However, before he could gain any form of traction, a shadow falling over his position alerted the man to danger, prompting him to duck at the last second. He did so in time to avoid a spin kick from Sasuke, who suddenly appeared directly behind him. Upon dropping to the floor, the copy ninja drew a kunai and spun around, slicing up at his new attacker, who easily sprang off of the ground and drew his sword at the same time. With a speedy flip, the boy slashed up at his teacher, who managed to backflip away and avoid the deadly weapon's arc. Skidding to a stop, Kakashi watched his student land and, upon sheathing his sword, take a stance as well. 2-on-1? That's a little bit unfair, don't you think, Kakashi? The Uchiha asked with a small smile forming on his face. The silver-haired man gave the raven-haired teen his signature eye smile. What can I say? The circumstances of a battle will often change, sometimes in a way that you least expect it. This response also drew a chuckle from the one-eyed Avenger, more like you were worried you wouldn't be able to handle fighting the three of us on your own. Maybe, Kakashi replied, before then setting a serious gaze on the young shinobi now standing him down. But that all depends on how strong you've gotten. Let's see how much you've learned under my tutelage, Sasuke-kun. The raven-haired hawk of a shinobi narrowed his gaze. Gladly. Digging his feet in, the young Uchiha launched himself forward in a dash, kicking up dust in the process. His charge was matched by that of his teacher, who also rushed forward and, in a flash of light and a gust of wind, the pair passed one another with a swing of their respective weapons. A single clang rang out the instant they crossed, their Sharingan eyes locked ahead of them as two simultaneous slash marks appeared on their shoulders. When a small pinch of blood splattered to the ground and their sleeves ripped open, the pair glanced behind them to see the other Jujutsu user sporting the exact same wound. 7 slashes in one combo. Impressive speed, Sasuke-kun, Kakashi thought, before his eye once again narrowed. Let's see if you can keep it up. The two then spun around at the exact same time and charged, meeting each other in the center. As soon as they were in range, the pair engaged in a flurry of slashes and kicks, the sound of rapid clanging and thuds ringing out as the duo began fighting it out across the field. Traveling in a blur, Sasuke lashed out at his teacher with a series of superb kenjutsu attacks, his blade cutting through the air like a spinning top when he attempted to hit their group's instructor. But in spite of his great speed and ferocity, Kakashi was able to match him step for step, easily avoiding and parrying his hits, which sent sparks flying through the air. They began dancing across the field. Slipping and ducking hits, the copy ninja then countered with a series of his own attacks, only for Sasuke to block them effortlessly and, after spinning into the Jonin's range, kicked his kunai out of his hand. With the knife airborne, the silver-haired Jonin was forced onto the defensive, excessively blocking and dodging his student's blows. After avoiding a vicious upward kick and springing over the boy's shoulder when he lunged in with his sword, the Jonin caught his falling kunai and attempted to slash his student in the back. But Sasuke, quick as ever, managed to spin around and knock the man's arm away, countering with an elbow that caught the man in the face, a split second before a hook slammed into his own cheek. The simultaneous blows impacted with a deafening thud, sending both shinobi spiraling away from each other across the grass. Their feet digging into the soil and kicking up dust, the pair ended up glaring at one another and, upon shaking off the hits, dashed through the field side by side. Watching from a distance, Tayuya and a stunned Sakura, Karen and Yakumo looked on as the four men battled it out in separate areas of Training Ground 3. While it had been overwhelmingly impressive to see Naruto trading blows with Kakashi, things had now stepped up with Guy and Sasuke's intervention. After the four of them had selected their targets, they were now going at one another in a no-holds-barred scrap, with the entire area being caught up in the middle. While 3 of the audience members were completely stunned by the battle, the flute player was still maintaining her position with her arms folded and a smile on her face. Oh man, this is fucking great, the kunoichi thought, an ecstatic look in her eyes. I haven't seen a fight like this in ages. I wonder which of them will come out on top. Seeing Sasuke and Kakashi continue to trade shots with one another with their blades, her gaze then shifted towards the lake, where she could see dozens of depth charges exploding across its surface. Knowing that they were the result of Naruto and Guy having it out on the water, Tayuya could only look on and root for the team she wanted to win. Go shithead. Show me what you've learned. Oh. Gah. Letting out a yelp of surprise, Guy shut his eyes tightly when he unexpectedly found his face splattered with multicolored paint fired from Naruto's gauntlet. Stunned and blinded by the attack, which the teen had managed to launch while they were locked in a grappling match, the man backed away while lashing out randomly with his fists, at the same time attempting to clear his vision. Dodging the well-timed punches, Naruto dove in with a swinging right overhand, managing to avoid the man's left counter-cross and slammed his fist into his face. The blow connected with a thunderclap, the shockwave sending Guy spiraling across the lake like a rag doll. Bouncing across the water several times, the man slammed his feet into the surface and skidded to a stop, kicking up a massive spray and a tidal wave behind him. As soon as he stopped, Guy dipped his hand into the water and splashed it across his face, quickly clearing it of the sticky substance. His eyes blinking open, the Jonin could once again see the battlefield and the whole training ground ahead of him. Unfortunately, thanks to his foe's tricky maneuver, the shinobi had lost complete sight of him, which had the taijutsu master grit his teeth in frustration. I completely forgot he had that device, the black-haired man thought while a smirk formed on his face. Cheap move, but a clever one all the same. At that exact moment, Naruto, reappearing behind the man in an orange flash, spun at him like a top and slammed a kick into Guy's back. The blow connected with a deafening crack and knocked the Jonin off his feet, eliciting a loud shout of pain from the stunned fighter. Upon hitting his opponent and sending him flying in bullet time, Kurama could only sweat drop as he watched the battle play out through his friend's eyes. Did you just spin kick him? Naruto, grinning inwardly, watched Guy continue traveling across the lake's surface in slow motion. I know, right? I've always wanted to do that. Please don't do it again. While still in motion, the Jonin in the spandex slammed his hands and feet into the lake's surface and, emitting a burst of chakra, slid to a stop. As soon as his momentum ceased, Guy looked up, only for his eyes to widen when he saw the Jinchuriki teleport directly in front of him in a spin, a second kick primed and ready to fire. My body, my rules. Naruto shot back at the Kyuubi, before uncorking another roundhouse at Guy's head. The moment he threw it though, the Jonin managed to spring off of the lake and backpedal away as fast as he could, the blonde's foot missing him by an inch. Damn it. Moving across the lake in a blur, the winded Guy gritted his teeth and began working on putting as much distance between him and his opponent. The quicker he moved the better. What terrifying speed, and he only seems to be getting faster and faster the longer this drags out. Naruto clearly has me at a disadvantage here. The shinobi's eyes narrowed as he continued leaping backwards across the lake, keeping his eyes squarely on his opponent still standing in the same place he'd appeared. If I have any chance of beating him, I'm going to have to use the 8 gates. In one of his leaps, Guy reached down into his leg warmer and swiftly drew a nunchuck, which he then held out in front, but bam. The Jonin was punctually cut off when Naruto suddenly teleported directly behind him, covering half a kilometer in less than a second, and unbolted a kick straight into his back. The blow sent the man rocketing into the sky in a glorious arc before he began plummeting back towards the lake's surface several hundred meters away. Upon sending his opponent flying, Naruto took a sprinter stance and vanished in an orange flash. Reappearing on the other side of the lake with his fists loaded and ready, the Jinchuriki placed himself directly in the path of the falling Guy, who continued to spiral towards him. However, when he was only 2 meters away from hitting the water surface, the Jonin came to an abrupt and unexpected stop, an invisible blast of chakra exploding from his body. Arms and legs spread, the Jonin's form suspended itself in midair and, with his hair standing on end, glared down at the equally intense-looking Naruto. Kaimon. Gate of opening, utilizing the gate to seize his momentum, Guy then exploded from the lake's surface with a quick kick off of the water and flew backwards through the air at the speed of a bullet. He continued to climb to about 5 stories, by which point in time Naruto had crouched down and, with a yell of his own, exploded from the lake in pursuit of his foe. Guy spun his nunchuck around him stylishly, watching as the blonde rocketed towards his position with his wind jets propelling him all the way. Timing the young man's approach, the Jonin let out a yell and swung out with his primary weapon, aiming to hit the boy on a pass. But instead of connecting with him, the shinobi ended up striking a Naruto afterimage that passed right through his nunchuck and out the other side, prompting Guy to turn around in midair as his momentum slowed. The second he did, he once again found himself facing his opponent, who was hovering directly in front of him. He's going to kick me again, isn't he? Guy thought, a bead of sweat trickling down his head. Just as he prophesied, a loud clap of thunder echoed out when he was kicked squarely in the chin and sent blasting back down towards the lake, which he struck at breakneck speed. The splash he caused was massive, sending a towering spray a full story into the sky. When it eventually settled back into the water, Naruto gently set himself down as well. The second he dropped to the surface of the lake, the Jinchuriki saw Guy leap out of the water and land several yards away from him. The Jonin, despite having lost his weapon and was now sporting a massive bruise on his face, grinned pleasantly. Okay, Naruto. I'm going to need you to do me a solid and not kick me anymore. His request had the blonde grin right back at him, no promises. Guy rubbed at his wound momentarily. Well then, if that's how it's going to be. His expression then became deathly serious and, in the blink of an eye, summoned yet another surge of energy. Kyuumon. Gate of Rest, a burst of invisible chakra blasted off of him in the form of a visible ripple across the water, upon which he then vanished in the blink of an eye. Tracking his opponent's movements, Naruto clenched his teeth and threw both his arms into a cross-arm block. He reacted just in time to intercept a powerful kick that slammed into his guard from below and sent him lifting off of the lake, before another series of kicks began unbolting into him. One after the other, the blows crashed into his guard in a series of loud thuds, causing the blonde to wince painfully as he was literally pushed into the sky by his now more energized foe. Gritting his teeth under the pressure of forcing his opponent into the sky, Guy then swung up at him with a hook, which Naruto speedily avoided with a flip and countered with an elbow. Parrying it, the Jonin in green threw a spin kick, crashing it into the boy's guard, followed by another kick and a hook, both of which were deflected. The blonde then threw a butterfly kick as they began to fall, the two blows being blocked and resulting in the Jinchuriki receiving a spinning backfist across the face. Stunned by the hit, Naruto was unable to react in time when Guy slammed another kick into his chest, setting him up before the man unfurled 2 lengths of bandages from his sleeves. With terrific speed, the strips of white rushed out of his arms and coiled around the stricken Uzumaki, wrapping him up in a cocoon and binding his limbs together. Upon tightening the strips, the Jonin in green grabbed the restrained boy, held him upside down and, with a yell, began to spin like a drill. Omote Renge. Front Lotus, the pair started to plummet at an insane speed, their forms melding together into a multicolored blur. Traveling to the Earth's surface and picking up speed with every second, the audience from the ground initially believed Naruto was done for. Even Tayuya was looking up in alarm. But just when the group thought it was over, in the middle of the dive, the once stunned Naruto gave a smirk and, popping a blade out from his gauntlet arm, sliced through the bandages in one go. The second the strips were torn away by the speed of their corkscrew-like descent, the blonde freed himself from the surprised Guy's grip with 3 sharp kidney shots followed by an elbow to the man's face. Upon which the ever-flexible boy deftly flipped around his stunned foe and reversed their positions, trapping the man in an arm lock and slamming his hand into the back of his neck, locking him up. An excited grin appeared on Naruto's face while Guy freaked out, Banzai eighth. With a massive clap on impact, the pair pile-drive directly into the lake's surface with a splash that reached 3 stories into the air, causing all those looking on to wince. Whatever the outcome of that last maneuver was, there was no arguing that had to be one hell of a belly flop. Oh. Hokage Tower? Ouch. That must have hurt like a bitch, Tsunade commented, cringing at the counter Naruto had managed to deal his opponent. Hiruzen, chuckling in amusement at the collective reactions of his audience, looked up to see Jiraiya also wearing a similarly pained expression. I never thought I'd see the day someone would be able to successfully break out of the front lotus and reverse the body lock in the same move. Guess that shows you should never underestimate the most unpredictable shinobi in the village. The Hokage added to this with a quick puff of his pipe. Arms still folded as he watched the fight continue on in the viewing orb, the Toad Sannin smiled when he saw the lake's surface settle and calm return to the area. It seems my student has the #1 taijutsu master in the country on the ropes. That's quite the impressive feat actually, the blonde Kunoichi in the room said with her hands on her hips. His speed is so great that the only way Guy can possibly keep up with him is by activating the 8 gates. It's bad enough that the kid's taijutsu is ridiculous to fight against even at a basic level, but combined with that agility, it's just damn near impossible. Jiraiya chuckled at this. Oh, trust me. You haven't seen anything yet. Oh. Third training ground? Sparks flying as the 2 blurs darted across the field, Kakashi and Sasuke continued trading blows one after the other. Avoiding taking any debilitating hits to the sides, the pair eventually reappeared out of thin air in the center of the grass, blades crashing into each other before their free hands shot forward to grab the other's arm. This inevitably locked the pair in another heated grappling match, their weapons grinding into each other while their Sharingan eyes glared across at their opponent. Dripping sweat, both master and student dug their feet into the soil in an effort to try and throw the other person off. It was only until moments later that electricity started to crackle around one of them and, with a sly smile crossing his lips, Sasuke's back foot suddenly became enveloped in a sheath of lightning chakra. The sight of it had Kakashi look down in alarm. Chidori! 1,000 birds, with a shout, the Uchiha suddenly performed a backflip and thrust his foot straight up towards his teacher, forcing Kakashi to hastily break their lock to avoid having the front of his body sliced open. Leaping to about 15 yards away, the copy ninja eventually slid to a stop, his hand digging into the ground to slow his momentum. Before he could completely stop however, the Jonin then slapped his hands together and flew through seals at a damn near untraceable speed. A second later, his chest inflated and his head reared back. Katan, Gokakyu no Jutsu. Fire release, great fireball technique, with a gust of wind and a flash of orange light, Kakashi threw himself forward and unleashed an enormous ball of flames from his mouth. The projectile gushed out of his mouth and rocketed across the field towards its target, tearing and burning an enormous trench along the way. Rising to his feet, Sasuke watched carefully as the attack approached, the ground shaking as it drew closer and closer. Of course, instead of dodging the blast like any ordinary shinobi would, the one-eyed Avenger merely smiled at it and allowed the attack to hit him front on. In the blink of an eye, the teen was swallowed up by the attack and seemingly incinerated, a sight that had Sakura react in alarm. Sasuke! However, while the girl was busy covering up her scream, Tayuya smirked, and Karen and Yakumo smiled at one another. Watching his attack detonate, the blast sending rubble and debris pelting in all directions, Kakashi narrowed his Sharingan on the heart of the explosion. At first he believed his student had bailed out at the last second to try and throw him off his tail. But then, just as the Jonin was about to begin scanning the surrounding area for his opponent's whereabouts, he then got the shock of his life when he suddenly saw a second fireball rocket out of the wall of smoke and shoot towards him like a bolt of lightning. Before Kakashi could even move an inch, the massive fire cut right through him like a bullet and skidded to a stop on the other side, leaving a trail of flames in its wake. Stepping out of his running position, the mass of pulsing energy revealed itself to be none other than Sasuke. His body covered in an armor of fire, the boy turned on the spot and smirked towards his stunned foe, who he'd managed to disintegrate an entire half of. Katan, Ningen Suisei, fire release, human comet, the teen said, allowing the fire to continue burning as he faced his stunned instructor. You can cut the theatrics, Kakashi. I know that you managed to avoid it at the last second. Right on cue, the Kakashi copy went up in a puff of smoke, an event which was immediately followed up by the ground directly behind the Uchiha exploding and a literal bolt of lightning shooting up out of it. The flaming teenager followed the streak of electricity up into the sky, where he saw it arc over before beginning to dive straight towards him. The head of the attack quickly took the shape of a wild dog, which gave an artificial bark as it charged him down. Frowning as he saw it approaching, Sasuke waited for it to barrel down on him before vanishing in a blur of movement. The moment he disappeared, the lightning beast changed directions and shot off after him, pursuing the fireball across the field at insane speeds. Tayuya and the others watched the cat and mouse game crisscross the ruined field several times, one blur chasing the other. Eventually, the Uchiha grew tired of the game and, slamming his feet into the ground, spun about and drew his sword. Timing his counter just right, he sliced through the bolt of lightning and carved it in two. The two halves of the animal then shot off in different directions and impacted the ground safely out of range, where they detonated harmlessly. Upon dispersing the attack, Sasuke allowed the flames engulfing him to subside, leaving him standing normally once again. Spinning his Chikudo, the Uchiha then sheathed it behind him and narrowed his gaze on the ruined training ground. Glancing left and right, he waited silently, at the same time looking for any signs of his opponent. It wasn't long before his sneaky adversary decided to show himself. The ground directly in front of him cracked and, in a blast of smoke and debris, Kakashi came leaping out of it with a jumping uppercut. Moving back at the last second, the ever-calm Sasuke avoided the concussive blow and snapped his hand out, catching his teacher's wrist and dragging him back down to the floor. As soon as the man's feet touched down, the Jonin jabbed out at his student with his free hand, which the Uchiha head slipped and ended up grabbing the man's vest. As soon as he had a hold of him, the tomos of Sasuke's Sharingan spun, at the exact same time Kakashi's did as well. In that single instant, both student and teacher found themselves trapped in a genjutsu of their opponent's making, leaving the pair standing in place and locked in a two-way grappling match. While one battle was fought on the surface, another was now being fought in another plane altogether. Seeing her teammate grab and hold his opponent, Sakura gave the sight a deep frown before, bringing her hand up and adjusting her glove, the girl leant forward and dashed out onto the field, making a beeline straight towards the unsuspecting Kakashi. Oh. Meanwhile, on the other side of the training field, the once calm surface of the lake was soon broken by a series of depth charge-like explosions. Geysers of water blasting up across the glistening pool at random, the earth-shaking anomalies continued on for several more seconds. When the 15th one inevitably took place, a body of a person was also shot out of the geyser and sent spiraling across the lake, where he bounced several times before rolling to a stop on all fours. Panting heavily and dripping from head to toe, a slightly winded Naruto glared up from his crouched position and, with a noticeably bruised face, grinned across the battlefield. He chuckled and wiped the blood that trickled out of the corner of his mouth. Looks like he's finally starting to get serious. Man, what a hook. A split second later, his expression became serious once again. At that moment, the field of water directly in front of him burst upwards and a green blur shot towards him like a bullet. Reacting instantaneously, the Jinchuriki vanished in a crack of wind and avoided the swinging punch the blur threw at him, prompting the fast-moving attacker to skid to a stop. When he did, the haze revealed itself to be none other than Guy. Skin red, hair standing on end, and a blue aura blasting off of him like a flame, the Jonin frowned at his miss and spun around. His gaze fixing upon the sky, he saw Naruto hanging there with his wind jets rocketing off of the soles of his feet and keeping him suspended. Having managed to avoid the concussive hit from his now super-powered opponent, Naruto smirked down at him and rolled his neck. All right. Let's see you dance up here. He then waved for the man to bring it on. As you wish. Clenching his fists, the elite shinobi bared his teeth and, with a mighty howl, powered up even more. Shaman. Gate of Pain, with a blast of wind and a deafening thunderclap, the man launched himself from the lake and flew up towards his adversary in the form of a comet. Traveling at a speed very few could track, Guy barreled down on his foe with a roar and a punch. However, the instant he threw his attack, he saw the frowning Naruto vanish in a blur, his attack passing through an afterimage. Growling in frustration, the Jonin kicked off the air and changed directions, shooting back down towards the lake in pursuit of his opponent. Naruto, reappearing out of his light speed movement, curled up into a ball and spun with his descent. When Guy eventually caught up with him, the team once again vanished, avoiding yet another punch that had the Jonin balk in shock. Tracking him, the burning Jonin quickly changed directions once again and shot across the sky after his fast-moving target. Reappearing out of thin air, his wind jets propelling him backwards at an insane speed, Naruto frowned when he watched his adversary chase him down. He then shot up into the sky with a sonic boom, avoiding his opponent appearing in front of him and throwing a kick. Missing his mark yet again, Guy followed the boy with a glare. Damn. Alright. If that's how you want to play. Clenching his fists, his blue aura exploded off of him at an even fiercer rate and his chakra output increased once again. Taman. Gate of Limit, with yet another thunderclap, the man vanished and shot up after his adversary. Fuck. Naruto swore, gritting his teeth and slapping his hands together. Fine. You're it? With a yell, the blonde-haired shinobi put all the power he could into his thrusters and shot off at an even greater speed. Tearing across the sky, the high-flying Jinchuriki was pursued by the blue streak of light that was Guy. The two of them crossed paths several times, the man in spandex putting all the power he could into his own chakra bursts just to stay on the kid's tail. Eventually, after 2 minutes of extreme cat and mouse in the skies above the training grounds, in which the pair left a pair of vapor trails in their wake, the teen in orange soon became fed up and decided to fight back. After passing Guy one last time, forcing him to painfully change directions to continue his chase, Naruto took full advantage of his lapse in attention by performing a quick teleport and left behind an after image. While the man barreled down on his target, the blonde effortlessly blindsided him with a glorious, full-body check to the side. The blow literally knocked Guy out of his 8-gate state and sent him spiraling across the sky like a ragdoll. With his adversary stunned, the Jinchuriki then flew after him and intercepted the Jonin, appearing directly in his path and dropping a kick straight down onto the hapless Jonin. He smacked him out of the air and sent him plummeting towards the lake. As Guy fell, yelling out all the while, Naruto shot down to the lake surface after him and, cutting off his opponent, caught the Jonin with a jumping knee into his stomach. A loud crack rang out on impact, the blonde literally stopping the man dead. It was then Naruto laced his fingers overhead and drove a hammer blow straight into the taijutsu master's back, smashing him into the lake where he vanished in a splash. Panting from the rigorous chase, the Jinchuriki staggered away and glared down into the water. With sweat pouring down his head, the blonde chuckled, "Holy hell. I knew he was tough, but this is just insane. It's taking everything I've got just to lose him." Standing atop the water for several minutes, the teen spent whatever time he could to catch his breath and sense out his foe. Looking around with an intense glare in play, the blonde then sensed a disturbance on the surface and glanced to his left, where he saw a couple of bubbles pop into view. Moments later, the water around him started to boil and waves began kicking up into a storm. Knowing what was coming next, the Jinchuriki sprang out of the way and leapt to a safe distance. Upon stopping many yards out of reach, he then saw the area he'd previously been standing in go up in a massive geyser, which cleared seconds later and revealed Guy floating there, bathed in the exact same blue aura as before. This time though, the chakra he was radiating was far more intense and Naruto could sense a far more dramatic increase in his strength. The sight had him tense up nervously. "Came on. Gate of view," the man bellowed, before a grin formed on his face. "You've done well in this fight, Naruto-kun. But now it's time I ended it. Get ready." Bringing up his fists, Guy then took up a new stance, while at the same time effortlessly holding on to the new form he'd achieved. His own glare becoming more pronounced, the Jinchuriki slid into a stance and balled his hands. "Whatever you say, Bushibrow-sensei." At that exact moment, thick blue chakra exploded from both his arms and quickly transformed into 2 miniature tornadoes, with the points molding into drills around his hands. The force of their appearance kicked up the water behind the teen and began to twist around the blonde's body protectively, his teeth clenching as he focused all of his chakra into his fists and feet. In a matter of moments, he was done. "Let's do this!" A battle cry escaping the two shinobi, both Guy and Naruto then launched themselves across the water at blazing speeds. Covering the space of 6 yards between them in under a second, the two fighters, kicking up a massive spray of water behind them, met each other in the middle and swung at their opponent with their respective attacks. "Asa Kujaku! Morning Peacock!" Guy roared. "Tsubame Geishi! Swallow return!" Naruto bellowed in kind. Then, with a deafening thunderclap, their fists collided. The result was a massive shockwave that punched a crater into the lake beneath them all the way to the rocky bed, which literally split the ground under the tremendous force. Immediately after that, more and more shockwaves began ringing out as the pair laid into each other with an onslaught of lightning-fast blows. Their impacting fists and shins filled the air with the sound of a relentless artillery bombardment, the lake around them literally being parted all the way to the edges from the force. Soon enough, the shockwaves being generated by their attacks soon transformed into a raging inferno of multiple explosions going off one after the other. Tayuya, Karen and Yakumo looked on in awe and amazement as Naruto's taijutsu-based fight with Guy escalated to a whole other level. It was a sight that lasted for a whole, glorious minute, before all of it ended with one last, decisive explosion, which sent the water of the lake blasting in all directions in a tidal spray. Feeling the shockwave from the sphere-shaped blast pelt them with water, the audience on the shoreline watched through squinted eyes as the wind slowly settled. The heat from the clash caused the perspiration to evaporate, filling the training ground with a heavy mist. This left the girls blinded for several minutes. When it started to left, they saw an orange blur flicker into view and leap back onto dry land. Sliding to a stop as he turned around to face the lake, Naruto took a low fighting stance and panted. Sporting a number of new bruises and burns, along with a few wears in his jacket, the young man quickly sucked it up and fixed his eyes squarely on the shoreline, where he saw the mist part and reveal Guy standing on the edge in an equally battered and exhausted state. Both assumed in defensive positions, they smiled across at one another and nodded in respect. "Superb work, Naruto-kun. Your time training with Jiraiya-sensei has definitely paid off. You should feel proud." "Thanks. You've got some pretty awesome moves yourself, Bushibrow-sensei," the blonde replied, his fox-like grin returning to him full force. "Got any more tricks up your sleeve?" Before the teen could have his question answered, a figure dropping down next to Guy cut off the duo's confrontation and drew their attention to the newcomer. Quickly recognizing the person as Kakashi, Naruto then spared a glance to his right to see Sasuke take up position on his flank as well. The sight of the sweating Uchiha appearing next to him had the blonde smirk. "Tired?" The raven-haired shinobi scoffed back, as if, "You? Not at all. I'm still game, Naruto replied, straightening up and fixing his gaze back onto the two jonin standing several yards away from them. Despite the vicious beating both sides had received thus far, all four fighters were still pumped and raring to go. Man, I can't remember the last time I've had this much fun. What? Traveling across the continent wasn't satisfying enough for you? Sasuke asked. The blonde rolled his eyes. I'm talking about fighting, genius. Ah, the raven-haired teen replied, seconds before another figure appeared alongside them. When Naruto looked to his left, he saw his pink-haired teammate standing there with a smile of her own and covered in several scuffs that he knew she didn't have before. Oh? Have you decided to join us, Sakura-chan? A chuckle left the Kunoichi's lips. Did you honestly think I was going to let you and Sasuke-kun have all the fun while I stood by and watched? Adjusting the fighting glove on her right fist, the girl tugged on the back of it and clenched it tightly. This is my assessment too, ya no. Sasuke sighed as he glanced across at the girl. You didn't have to jump in like that, Sakura. I could have taken him. Realizing he was referring to the genjutsu battle he'd been having with Kakashi several minutes earlier, the pink-haired girl merely shrugged and slid into a stance of her own. I know. But like Gai-sensei said, I just couldn't help myself. From the grin that formed on her face, the two boys could tell that this girl was raring to show off just as much as they were. You guys aren't the only ones with a few new tricks up their sleeves. Glancing at his compatriot, Naruto stifled a laugh and retook his stance. Fair enough. I suppose this should even the odds a little. His shifting hand positions also prompted the Uchiha to take a stance as well. The moment all three of them set their crosshairs on their two jonin instructors, the bonds between them were officially sealed and approved. Well, it's been 3 years, but Team 7 is back in action. The blonde's proclamation had Sasuke snort and shake his head. Lame. Shut up. And, just like the good old days, the quick shoot-off between the two boys had Sakura giggle. Seeing the trio come to stand before them and assume battle-ready positions had Kakashi and Guy look across at each other. Sparing a smile and a nod, the two jonin then stretched out and took new stances as well. With the man in spandex extending his hand and the silver-haired shinobi setting his at his sides, the pair primed themselves for one last bout. You still got enough gas in the tank? Guy asked. Plenty, Kakashi replied, rolling his shoulder instinctively. What about you? Oh, enough to make even someone like you work, I'm sure, the taijutsu master replied, at the same time his eyes twinkled with excitement. So, ready for another round? The masked man nodded. You hit him high, I hit him low? That's the plan. Taking that as their cue to move, the two men sprang forward and separated. At about the same time Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura launched from their spots in kind. In a matter of seconds, the entire area was filled with the sounds of clashing blades and impacting fists, as the team of young go-getters squared off against two of Konohagakure's finest shinobi. Getting comfortable on the sidelines, Tayuya, Kurama and Karen watched on with enthusiasm and awe as the battle between the team and the instructors carried on into the afternoon. It wouldn't be until the sun started to set before the group decided to call it quits, and by that time almost all of Training Ground 3 had been permanently reshaped. Needless to say, for Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura, it was one hell of a welcome home party. Chapter 50, Post-Gap Arc, Tale of Two Blades. Naruto. Drifting. Tale of Two Blades. Later that day. Elsewhere? Many miles south of Konohagakure, somewhere on a large peninsula connected to the rest of the continent, a series of forest-covered mountain ranges could be seen stretching out in all directions. All across this small part of the Land of Fire, on the surface at least, the area was tranquil, peaceful, with nothing but clear blue skies hanging overhead and a handful of villages scattered across the countryside. However, on the far side of one of the smaller edifices, inside the ruins of what looked to be the remains of an ancient village, dark shadows were hard at work. Moving through the streets of the forgotten community, hundreds of men and women dressed in blue and purple shinobi uniforms, masks and battle armor could be seen excavating the area. While half of them focused on the archaeology and labor-intensive part of the job, the other half stood guard in all the other key areas, armed with specially designed gliders and automatic kunai launchers. They were also accompanied by large, hulking men in dark, knight-like battle armor, all of whom were armed with maces, swords, clubs and spears. Needless to say, despite being in such a secluded area, the operation they had going on here was massive. Hell, they even had tents, watchtowers and cranes put in place, making it look like some sort of village restoration project. While something like this would have tricked anybody else into believing it was an innocent little project taking place, it only raised alarm bells for the black and white man poking his head out of a nearby oak. Murmuring uneasily, the ever-stealthy Zetsu, shielded by the jaws of his Venus flytrap growth, looked about the area with a frown. There are so many of them. Wow. Keep a lid on it, you idiot, the black half snapped irritably under his voice, their head craning about to scan the mountains further. Remember what we came for. Yeah, I hear ya, the slow, white half replied lazily, allowing his other half to take control of the situation. The jaws of the flytrap closed around them, allowing the Akatsuki member to wiggle back into the tree's branch and vanish. Deciding to get a closer look, the sleuth of a man tunneled his way further into the village and skillfully made his way through without running into any obstacles or potholes. Navigating using his extrasensory capabilities, the spy soon found himself burying into the mountain behind the village's massive shrine, moving through the dark for a couple minutes and eventually sticking his head out in what could only be described as the Temple of Doom from Indiana Jones. Finding himself perched on a ledge close to the ceiling, Zetsu blinked several times as he looked about the enormous chamber, which was obviously the heart of the sinister organization's operation. With dozens of shinobi and armored guards walking around, either standing watch or helping out with the dig, the Akatsuki member began taking stock of what he was up against. Not only were there statues all over the place, but there were also walkways, beautifully carved pillars, wall paintings, platforms and altars, all of which seemed to predate any and all architecture or society the spy was familiar with. It definitely came as a surprise to the black and white digger, who chose to remain where he was so as to not attract any unwanted attention. While scanning the massive room from his balcony's position, his head poking out of the earth like a half-buried victim, the man then spotted a figure dressed differently from the rest of the workers making their way up the stairs at the back end of the cave. Visually following the woman in the cape and blue armor, he saw the female guard approach the huge altar guarded by two ruined statues representing ancient deities. It was there a group of men in purple shinobi uniforms were working tirelessly on trying to get the door open. Unfortunately, much to their annoyance and desperation, they just couldn't get the thing to budge. The sight of them struggling to crack open the stone shell had the female newcomer scowl impatiently. "What are you idiots doing? We've been stuck out here for 2 days digging through rock and limestone. Haven't you gotten that thing open yet?" the blonde knight asked with a growl. The squad leader watching from the sidelines turned to the woman with a nervous expression in play. "We're trying, Lady Fugai. But the gate is sealed tighter than a steel trap. We think it's being held down by a seal of some kind." The news had the visiting lieutenant groan. "Oh, that's just perfect. Now what are we going to do? Sing to it? Perform some sort of super-secret, ninja mumbo-jumbo crap to get it open?" Her exasperation drew the attention of all the shinobi working in that area and had their anxious gazes quickly settle upon her. "The boss said he would be dropping in to check on our progress. If he gets here and this thing isn't opened yet, he's going to dash." "I'm going to what, Fugai?" Tirade cut short by the emergence of the soft and calm voice, the knight froze up and robotically turned around. When she did, her fear-filled eyes instantly fell upon the small, cloaked form of her boss, decked in all white, ambling up the stairs accompanied by his two trusted lieutenants Temujin and Dosu. The bodyguard stopping at the top of the stairs behind the man, they watched on carefully as their leader strolled across the altar floor plan and halted in front of the problem in question. Almost instantly, every single man and woman in the area, including Fugai, dropped to their knees and bowed. "Hirako-sama," the woman greeted, with her head held low. Acknowledging his subordinate's greeting, as well as the collective of workers on station, the boss marched forward. "So," the man in bandages exclaimed, looking upon the large, ancient door with interest, "is this the pesky, little barrier that's preventing you from accessing the contents inside?" "Yes, my lord. We've been trying to open it for hours, but we can't get the doors to budge. Not even our most powerful explosives and equipment can crack it," the nervous crusader replied. "The men think that it's being held shut by a powerful sealing technique." "I see," Hirako chuckled, raising his arm up and allowing his sleeve to fall away, revealing his ghostly pale hand. "No matter. Doorways such as these simply require a key to open them, and I believe I have just the tool necessary for this task." As soon as he said that, his hand suddenly became encased in black metal and a sickly green glow, which wafted off of his arm like smoke from a pyre. The soldiers and workers surrounding the small shinobi looked on nervously as their boss approached the barrier, unsure of what he was planning to do. But, just before anybody could ask him exactly what his intentions were, the masked man simply cranked his fist back and slammed it into the gate, his knuckles colliding with a pinkish barrier, which took the form of a wall of writing, which then shattered under the force of his blow, enabling his fist to carve through the rock underneath. In a massive blast of debris and dust, the obstacle was swiftly removed. Watching the commotion from up high, Zetsu raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Ooh, nice punch." "That was no ordinary seal," the black half whispered, also narrowing his gaze upon the boss. "What the hell is inside that thing?" When the explosion eventually settled, the group of startled onlookers found themselves staring at what looked like an empty casket and cupboard with only a single shelf, decorated in carvings of ancient warriors and demons. While the artwork was indeed impressive, they weren't what Hirako was interested in, nor were they the relics that he was after. It was the katana in the black scabbard sitting on the frame in front of him that was his ultimate goal. Smiling at the sight of the beautiful weapon, the boss wasted no time in extending a hand towards it and picking it up. Not even caring if the ancient storage unit was booby-trapped, Hirako promptly removed the sword and turned around, holding it in both hands like it were the most delicate thing in the world. Heck, the weapon was so unique and flawless in its design that it even had Temujin and Dosu's full and undivided attention. All caution was thrown spectacularly onto the wind when Hirako gripped the handle of the weapon and drew it from its sheath, the metallic chime it gave bouncing off every wall inside the cave. The sword was truly magnetic. Not only bearing a decorated golden pommel, guard, and pegs holding in the black, velvet material of the handle itself, the blade was also one to be admired. However, unlike the specially polished silver you often saw on swords of a similar design, the blade was pure black, sucking in all the light breaking into the chamber as opposed to reflecting it. What's more, the metal gave a very ominous hum as it was held out by the organization's leader, who spent the next several seconds admiring its craftsmanship. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Hirako asked to no one in particular. Swallowing nervously, Fugai stood up from her post to get a better look, at the same time her mentor rotated the blade around and ran his finger along the back of its curved spine. "What kind of sword is it, master?" She asked this because the weapon was giving off a very strange and unnatural vibe. It made the knight feel very uncomfortable, something she didn't normally get from merely gazing upon a tool meant purely for battle. Hirako chuckled and held the weapon out for everyone in the area to see, including the workers, all of whom started to rise to their feet. This, my dear, is the last blade created by one of the two greatest swordsmiths of the old world, Sengo Muramasa. The man then pointed it downward so that the tip touched the ground and its steel bent the light as it cut around it. Forged during the final years of the samurai, this weapon was designed with one purpose and one purpose only, to be the great destroyer. Blinking as she gazed at it, Fugai was soon joined by Temujin and Dosu, the two warriors having become drawn to the legendary weapon that their master had drawn from its crypt. How is this sword different from all of the others we've seen? This question from his nervous subordinate had the boss grin excitedly. This one is different, because it was made by the one person who came closest to wiping out all life in this world. Watching his audience of many blink as they gathered around him, the man in the high collar coat took a deep breath and turned to the side. Let me tell you all a story. Thousands of years ago, before the time of the Sage of Six Paths, the founder of the shinobi world, there were two swordsmiths, Masamune and Muramasa. Both undisputed masters of their craft and considered the greatest weapon makers in history, Muramasa one day challenged his friend to see who could make a finer sword. They both worked tirelessly for months over furnaces of hot coals and anvils, and eventually, when both swords were completed, they decided to test the results. The contest was for each to suspend their blade in a small creek, with the cutting edge facing the current. Dosu, processing his master's words, then looked up in surprise. Hang on. I think I've heard this story before. The legend of Masamune and Muramasa, right? Yes. But the version you're about to hear is probably a little bit different from the one you probably know, Hirako continued, smiling as he continued to admire the weapon in his grip. While the original duel was said to be a private contest between the two swordsmiths, the actual competition was judged and recorded by the immortal High Priestess Maruko and High Priest Moryu, the latter of whom would become responsible for the Ghost Army incident half a year ago. Though this revelation astonished most of the people there, the leader wasn't shaken in the least by the words of his tale, and moved on. When the contest began, Muramasa dipped his sword into the creek and cut everything that passed its way, fish, leaves flowing down the river, and the very air that blew against it. Highly impressed by his friend's work, Masamune then lowered his sword, the Yawarakaite, tender hands, into the creek next to his colleagues. Instead of cutting anything, it refused the leaves, the fish, and the air that Muramasa's blade had sliced in two. Wow, Fugai murmured. That's actually quite impressive. Indeed. Though the swords were both designed similarly and were perfect in almost every way possible, they both differed from each other in one particular respect. While Muramasa's blade was indiscriminate in who or what it cut, Masamune's blade refused to cut anything undeserving, repaired everything that was damaged by Muramasa's sword, and was considered the better of the two weapons. It was a result that the priest and priestess unanimously agreed upon, and Masamune's blade was dubbed the finest sword of its kind, Hirako informed, smiling as he then swung the katana through the air before then holding it up as he looked down its middle and into the distance. Though the former had emerged victorious that day, both Masamune and Muramasa remained the best of friends and, satisfied with the outcome, returned home. But then, half a year later, Muramasa's life was suddenly turned upside down by a sick and unexpected tragedy. You see, a few months prior to their contest by the creek, the smith had been tasked with forging a sword for the daimyo of their nation, a man who believed would be able to gain ultimate power and enlightenment from wielding a blade crafted by the great architect. Consumed by the idea that he'd become invincible after receiving the weapon from Muramasa, the daimyo decided to pay the good smith's family a visit. When Muramasa returned home that afternoon from an extended shopping trip, he found his children dead and the daimyo having fun with his wife. As soon as he walked into his room, the Lord declared his invincibility and killed her right in front of him, Hirako stated, glancing across at his disciples and seeing most of them shiver at the look in his gaze. Hearing this for himself, the normally silent Temujin frowned deeply, whereas Dosu cringed. Ignoring their reactions, Hirako proceeded onwards. In a rage, Muramasa butchered the daimyo, and fell into a pit of misery and despair. Masamune and his friends tried to console him over the loss of his family, but he rejected them and closed himself off from the world. Then, after several months of solitude, he left his homeland and wandered aimlessly across the continent. The man in white then faced his lieutenants fully and lowered the sword to his side. Consumed by grief and loss, Muramasa drowned his sorrows with delusions and madness, the memories of his wife and children sending him into a downward spiral. He soon came to the radical conclusion that humanity and its perfect civilization was a cancer upon the universe, and after judging the world for what it was, he sought to wipe the entire slate clean of every single one of them. Hirako then held the weapon in front of him and smiled down at its cutting edge. Muramasa took up his sword and went on a bloody crusade. In just one night, he brutally massacred an entire country and erased it completely from existence, killing everything from humans to demons. This led to him naming the sword, the same one he'd competed with against Masamune's, Juchi Yasamu, 10,000 Cold Nights. It was a name that had the closely listening Zetsu's eyes widen where he sat, his upper body protruding from the ground over the dig site. Fugai tilted her head at the weapon. He conquered an entire country by himself? Yes. And that's not all, Hirako said with an eager grin. In his travels across the world, Muramasa stumbled across the creator of the Box of Ultimate Bliss, the same one that we currently have in our possession, and used the entity inside the box to enslave the entire world's population. Every country and army fell before his might, until only his best friend Masamune and a handful of deities were the only ones left to challenge him. A great battle was fought between Muramasa and Masamune, a fight that distorted the entire Earth's surface, crossed space and time, and reshaped whole continents. Their battle lasted an entire week, and when it was finally over, their world was forever changed. Nations had been toppled, thousands had died in the conflict, stars had been realigned, and all the gods and demons of the world had been wiped out, save for only a handful. Muramasa died that day, and when he did, Masamune took his friend's sword and sealed it away, here, never to be seen again. Well, the man eyed the sword once more, until today of course. Processing his words carefully, Temujin then noticed a small gap in his story and glanced towards his master curiously. What about Masamune's sword? What happened to it? Hirako shrugged, some say he destroyed it. The man shook his head. No. I don't think he would do something like that. Records from the old temple actually say Masamune wrapped his katana tender hands in black metal from the far north and gave his sword to a crow demon, and sent him to wander the earth as a vagrant. He then chuckled at that little snippet from the tale. Unless you can find a man with a crow on his shoulder moving from country to country, then the sword may as well be considered lost to the ages. While everybody awed the weapon in amazement, Dosu stepped forward with an inquisitive look in play. With such a legendary weapon in your grasp, will you finally be able to defeat the Akatsuki and the 5 great nations, master? The question drew a headshake from the leader. Sadly, no. This sword and its missing counterpart don't grant the users any special powers or abilities. It is only an enchanted blade meant to slay spirits, gods, and demons alike, the full capacity of which is only determined by the skill of the wielder. Hirako's eyes then twinkled with delight. However, there is one advantage to this weapon. Because it was made by a legendary swordsmith of a now bygone era, the metal used in this blade is of the finest quality imaginable. It is unbreakable. Well, I suppose that's one advantage, Dosu exclaimed, smirking across at the sword as it gleamed before their eyes. There is no question about it. Master certainly knows what he wants, Fugai also spoke, grinning wolfishly at the same time. While admiring the blade from top to bottom and rotating it ever so slightly to get a full scope of its design, Hirako's eyes then narrowed when, in the steel's reflection, he spotted something out of place in the cave system behind him. Extending and focusing his senses, the leader then picked up the signature of the uninvited presence in the area and, smirking underneath the bandages covering his mouth, kept his back turned to it, even as the grip he had of his weapon tightened. It was an action that caught the ever-sharp Temujin's attention. After the war that nearly saw the destruction of the entire planet, every single one of Muramasa's works was labeled as evil. Stories soon spread of how his blades drove their wielders to madness should anyone ever attempt to use them, and that prolonged exposure to any one of his creations would lead to the user committing suicide. But of course, those are merely myths concocted by the people who actually fought against him during the final war. A sickly grin then formed on the boss's face as he adjusted his hold with a quick flex of his fingers. Oh, and because the strength of the sword is determined by the strength of the user, in my hands. Hirako began in a low voice, before a strange, radioactive green chakra started to radiate off of his arm. The sight of the Jelal aura had everyone in the area look up in alarm before, in a single, fluid motion, the man in white spun around and slashed outwards in an upward, diagonal fashion. In a flash of blinding light, a massive, green, blade-shaped crescent blast was launched from the sword, which shot up towards the cave wall at blinding speed and sliced right into it like butter. Zetsu didn't even have time to react when his body was unexpectedly cleaved in two where the chakra attack struck the cave wall, and sent him toppling to the ground with the rubble. The entire chamber shook as the section of stone collapsed under the precision force of the blast, sending debris and dust flying everywhere. When the shaking eventually stopped, it left an enormous pile of rock lying at the base of the damaged edifice, and a wounded spy along with it. While the sudden attack baffled all those in the area, Hirako merely chuckled at his success. It becomes the ultimate weapon, the albino male finished proudly. When the smoke finally settled, the full result of the attack was revealed. Lying amidst the pile of boulders, the top half of Zetsu's body, Venus flytrap, cloak and all could be seen lying sprawled out under the debris and trembling from head to toe. The white half gave a pained cry as he clawed at the ground, seconds before the two of them choked up blood. While the white one coughed of white blood, the black one coughed up blood of its respective color, leaving a dual-colored pool lying on the floor in front of them. Gah! What the hell was that? The white Zetsu yelled out, unable to stop the shooting pains from reaching him. How did he know we were here? He saw us, the black half replied, before coughing up more bodily fluids and snarling in agony. He actually wounded me? As he lay there, digging at the ground with his black fingers, only one thought went through the man's head. So it is true. That is the blade of the great Sengo Muramasa. And here he'd thought that man was merely a legend. However, many legends of their time had been born from truth, and judging from how he was now bleeding out over the floor at the bottom of a chasm, Zetsu was convinced that this legend was as true as they came. Before the two-man warrior could do anything to try and get out of their situation, a sharp pain struck them in the spine and pinned them to the floor when Hirako teleported directly beside the crippled spy and buried the blade into their back. Earning another yelp from the Akatsuki spy, the boss then leered down at the odd-looking assassin and tilted his head curiously. My, what do we have here? The white-haired individual spoke, a smile creasing through the bandages wrapped over his mouth while his subordinates, Temujin, Dosu and Fugai included, gathered behind him. Akatsuki Zetsu, is it? The group's #1 spy and information gatherer? Haydn told me a great deal about you. Still holding the katana tightly, the man in the trench coat knelt down beside the wounded individual and smirked at him. What could a man as cautious, slick, and reclusive as you possibly be doing all the way down here? The black one growled, that's none of your business dash. Just as he was beginning to croak out his words, Hirako twisted the blade a little, causing the plant person to yelp out in pain. I suppose that doesn't matter. Now that I have you in my grasp, I can carry on with the next stage of my experiments without fear, Hirako informed, giving his opponent, now captive, a very cruel smile. Considering how unique a person you are, I'm sure you and your friend have some very interesting secrets hidden in your DNA that I would like to salvage for my own purposes. A chuckle shortly escaped his lips as the two-person spy glared hatefully up at the organization's boss. This is so exciting. I can't wait to get started. Chapter 51, Three Tails Arc, SOS. Naruto. Drifting. SOS. Evening. Konohagakure? Naruto inhaled and exhaled deeply as he stepped over the all-too-familiar threshold of his apartment. Hearing the familiar creak of the floorboards of the entrance to his corridor echo off of the walls, the young man stopped, stretched his arms out, and basked in the cool air that welcomed him with a sweet, warm embrace. Daddy's home, the blonde whispered fondly. Ah, apartment. How I've missed you so. The moldy wallpaper. The cracked ceiling. The peaceful hum of much-wanted privacy. And the smell. After taking a big whiff through his nose, Naruto suddenly stopped and dropped his arms in surprise. Wait, what happened to the manly musk of spirited adolescence? Tayuya snickered at the odd look slapped across her boyfriend's face, at the same time kicking off her sandals to leave on the wallside rack. There have been 3 girls and no Naruto living in this apartment for the last couple of years. That's given us more than enough time for our respective womanly aromas to overpower and dispel your youthful presence. Honestly, it's a bit of a bummer. In the time of the Jinchuriki's absence, she'd grown to miss her crush's boyish tang and scent. Well, I guess now that I'm here. Pulling a can of tiger deodorant out of his pocket, the boy then gave a long spray of his armpits, chest, and then the air in front of him. Waving his arms around, he then took another sniff of the area and nodded in satisfaction. That should get the ball rolling. Naruto then marched in, leaving his sandals on the rack and an amused Tayuya in his wake as he began the thorough process of refamiliarizing himself with his surroundings. With each step he took into his almost forgotten home started filling Naruto's head with memories of time long past. His venture through the living room reminded him of all the peaceful and chaotic times he'd spent with his roommates there. The stop-off at the bathroom and the chipped door with the broken lock gave him flashbacks of the numerous awkward moments he'd unexpectedly walked in on Tayuya getting out of the shower and the string of beatings that would follow. And his trip through the kitchen filled his nostrils with the nostalgic scent of meals they used to have around that very cozy table. And then finally, after surveying the hallways and running his fingers over the walls and light switches, Naruto finally came to the one room he missed the most. Unlike the other chambers, there had been very few changes made to this one. From wall to wall, the entire floor was covered with dozens of newly purchased and freshly cleaned futons, mattresses and hug pillows, all of which were arranged into a kingly surface of 5-star heavenly comfort. The memory foam surface of course was punctuated by the natural light of the setting sun cutting in through the closed window, breathing life to this otherwise lifeless scene. And then, following the cupboards and closets around to the back and over the rarely used bed, there sat Naruto's collections of trinkets he'd collected over his years as a delinquent and a shinobi. Though the surface had been dusted, everything else from the two-pronged kunai of his first encounter with enemy Kunoichi from another village to the panties he had hanging from the wall remained completely untouched. Ah, yeah. It's all starting to come back to me now, Naruto murmured, slowly stepping into the room and immersing himself into the environment. Rolling open the cupboard and finding it to no surprise to be filled predominantly with girls' clothing, the young jonin gave an affirmative nod and stepped over to the window. It may be small, it may be crowded, and it may have fallen apart more times than I can count, but damn it, have I missed this. Tayuya's chuckle echoed in from the doorway as the former ANBU officer leaned against the frame with her arms crossed. I'm pretty sure your room feels the same way. It just hasn't been our apartment without its resident blonde idiot and caretaker knocking around every hour or so. After checking out one of his old paintball gauntlets he had left on the sill, Naruto set it down, opened up his window, and threw it open. From there a cool breeze drifted into his midst, swelling his chest as he looked out over the familiar view of his beloved village. While he was caught up in looking over the rooftops of his old neighborhood, he completely missed the sight of Tayuya checking him out from behind and, after ogling his rear for a moment, licked her lips and slowly pushed herself off of the door frame. A sigh slipped out of Naruto's lips as he took in his scenery and burned it in with the rest of his memories. I don't know about you, but I've got a lot of lost time to make up for around here. It's been way too long. I couldn't agree more. The sound of the door slamming shut suddenly had Naruto perk up and turn around, where he quickly noticed a half-lidded and rather fired-up Tayuya ambling towards him. You and I have a lot more catching up to do. Her feet patting softly over the cushions and mattresses across the floor, the young redhead slowly reached up, slipped the khaki kimono top she was wearing gently down her shoulders, and allowed it to slide off to pool on the floor behind her. A blink marked Naruto's immediate confusion. Ah, Tayuya-chan? What are you? He then straightened up sharply when the Jonin Kunoichi stopped directly in front of him, her hands placed behind her back and chest pushed forward in a showy manner. Okay. Is there something wrong? What's up? Seeing the nervous look appear on the Jinchuriki's face gave Tayuya a bit more of a confidence boost. A smile tugged at the soft lips of her own red face as she then leaned forward and pressed her aforementioned bosom into her boyfriend's bare stomach. The act of which not only sent a pleasurable chill up her spine when she felt his abs tighten out of reflex, but also the warmth she felt emanating from his center. It was a sensation that she'd never felt before, but also one that she welcomed gladly. "You've been gone for 3 whole years, Naruto-kun," Tayuya said, her voice gentle yet firm at the same time, giving her a sense of power as she gazed back up into the Jinchuriki's sky-blue eyes. "That's 3 whole years we were unable to see each other, and 3 years we couldn't spend growing up together. In all the months I'd spent working my ass off in the ANBU, going on deep cover missions, assassination runs, and personal errands for the Hokage, all I could think about was you and what kind of assignments you were doing for the princess." The girl then frowned, keeping her cool as she kept the calm yet slightly nervous-looking blonde pinned against the cupboard. "But more importantly, I couldn't stop thinking about how much you were going to change. Not being able to see any photos of you, except the hinged forms you used to star in Koyuki's movies, it came as a big shock to me when I finally saw you today and exactly how much you'd grown up." Tentatively, the young woman then placed a hand against the boy's muscular chest. Running her fingers down, she couldn't help but let a gasp leave her lips when she felt her digits graze over his hard, powerful muscles. "Damn, next time give me a bloody warning before you come back all hot and sexy like this. I almost ended up jumping you right there in the middle of the street." She practically had when the two of them made out in the middle of the road, much to the shock of all those present. Naruto cracked a smile of his own when he heard the girl say this. Feeling the girl trace her fingers up and down his chest and stomach, the Jinchuriki did his best to stop his heart from racing as he felt the warmth of his girlfriend and longtime crush starting to increase rapidly against his bare skin. "I felt the same way when I first saw you as well," the blonde informed, drawing the girl's gaze back up to him. "When you appeared in front of me back on that road, I could hardly believe that I was looking at the same red-headed girl I grew up with in this small, downtown apartment block all those years ago. After not seeing you for so long and then suddenly seeing you standing in front of me in all your kunoichi glory, it was almost like you'd transformed into a completely different person." Reaching up, the blonde slid his hand up the girl's neck to cup her cheek, which he felt was hot against his palm. "You're no longer just a cute, spunky girl with a good head on her shoulders and a song in her heart. Right now, you've grown into a strong, powerful, and beautiful woman that would easily be considered the center of any man's dreams." His expression then softened as his cheeks heated up. "Especially mine." Her breathing quickening at the same rate as her own hammering heart, Tayuya slowly ran her hands up his chest and laid them there. Leaning in closer, she then felt Naruto wrap his other arm around her and rest his hand on her hip, drawing her in closer and bringing their burning centers together. Now that they could feel much more of each other, both of them knew instantly how hot and fired up the other person was, and it was now starting to drive them crazy. After the events that had transpired that day as well, it was making it incredibly hard for them not to lose it. "Kami, I want to do it with you," Tayuya whispered, her voice trembling slightly when she felt Naruto's other hand run down her side to caress her. The way she could feel his muscles jumping under her smallest of touches was making her insides quiver and legs tremble anxiously. "So badly." "I know. Me too," Naruto replied, unable to hide his own excitement which he knew was now pressing against the girl's stomach. When he felt Tayuya rub up against him in a testing manner, the boy hissed and shook his head. "But we can't. Not yet." "Yeah," Tayuya nodded, looking up at him and reaching up to run a hand over the boy's whiskered cheek. "I don't want to rush this. If we do, we might end up ruining it, and not just for us." She then smiled when she saw her boyfriend was in full agreement with her. "I want to do this properly, when the time is right." The Jinchuriki's eyes shimmered when he felt the level of emotion in the girl's voice, and inhaled deeply. "I'll wait for as long as you want me to, even if it kills me. I'll take your word for it." Grinning mischievously, Tayuya then ran a hand down and edged her fingers across his pant line. "Of course, that doesn't mean I'm going to make it easy on you, stud. You're going to have to work for this one." When she straddled his leg and lifted her calf to rub against his, a sense of satisfaction flooded through her when she heard the boy groan again. "You make sure you keep it in your pants, especially since you have 2 other girls living in this apartment who are also out for your goods. Remember? I've called first dibs." Sweat breaking out on his forehead, Naruto then gave his teasing girlfriend a smile. Noted. When the flute player stopped rubbing up against him, causing parts of his anatomy to stop filling up with blood, the blonde youngster then raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "By the way, where are Kinchan and Isaribi-chan anyway?" Pausing for a moment and stepping away from her man, whom she'd left in a rather uncomfortable state of readiness, Tayuya then smiled and shrugged. "They were both sent on B-rank missions a couple of days ago, but..." Just before the redhead could finish, the pair suddenly heard the sound of the front door of the apartment being unbolted and the light patter of footsteps echo into their midst. Turning towards the door to the bedroom, both the Jinchuriki and Genjutsu specialist watched and waited, listening as the voices of 2 individuals drew closer and closer. "You think Tayuya is in yet?" the soft voice of a chipper young woman asked. "Or do you think she's still up in the administration building doing paperwork from yesterday's assignment? She has to be home. Didn't you see her sandals sitting over on the rack?" Another more sharp voice spoke up, indicating a second girl. "Yeah. I noticed them. But who does the other pair belong to? Did she invite someone over? Probably Tenten or Sakura. They must be playing shogi in the room again." With the voices right outside, the door was promptly swung open seconds later, and in stepped the 2 familiar, yet noticeably older, figures. Sighing, the woman with long, raven black hair that grew down to her ankles, wearing a pair of gray camouflage pants, fishnet shirt, white armored vest, and a collapsible bow on her back, glanced across the room to where she expected to find her roommate and guest. Hey Tayuya. Girlfriend. How was your day today? She then stopped dead in her tracks, a stunned expression appearing on her face as she inadvertently dropped the plastic bag she was carrying. Oi, Kin. Be careful. There's sauce in there. The purple-haired girl with the soft face, hazel eyes, and wearing black spats, blue kimono top, and green chunin vest exclaimed, at the same time glaring across at her friend. Geez girl. What the heck has gotten into you? Isaribi trailed off as well, as she too had spotted the reason why Kin had dropped their shopping. Knowing what was to come, Tayuya took a few steps back, leaving Naruto standing out in the open for both girls to ogle. From their silence dominated the room, with the Jinchuriki grinning across at the pair of newcomers, whose eyes had widened to that of saucers while their jaws hung slack. When several seconds of nothing eventually passed, the blonde wisely figured it was time to break the ice, and marched forward while setting his katana down on the desk behind him. Hey, Kin-chan. Isaribi-chan, he greeted, waving to the girls who've yet to respond. Honestly, it was starting to get a little bit scary. Were they even breathing? I'm back. Damn, look at how much you girls have grown up. Naruto whistled at the end while placing his hands on his hips, at the same time missing the sight of the hybrid's face twisting into one of abject delight. Holy crap, did everyone in this village just hit their growth spurts at the exact same time or what? Databeo. I can barely recognize WHOA. Naruto Kun, both girls suddenly cried out in unison, before the teen was unexpectedly tackled by two bodies jumping on him at once. With Isaribi getting his head and Kin going for his waist, Naruto was effortlessly floored by the pair, who sent him straight into the mattresses, leaving Tayuya laughing from the sidelines. Straddling the boy's neck and beaming down at him with a practically glowing face, Isaribi was simply beside herself. You're back. When did you get back? Oh my god, this is crazy. Cammy, look at how much you've changed. Your jacket, your pants, your headband, your build. You're so tall now. And your muscles, what the hell happened to you? The girls' exclamations came a mile a minute, leaving Naruto in a daze if the surprise tackle didn't already do that. Isaribi was so caught up in spitfiring her questions and observations that she barely left any room for Kin to speak. Peering over her fellow Chunin's shoulder, the raven-haired girl with the bow grinned down at the blonde, who was at that moment spinning from practically being showered with questions by the purple-haired aquatic ninja. Damn, Whiskers. You've really toned yourself up since the last time we saw you. Where'd all that baby fat go? Kin asked, at the same time remaining straddled where she was. Naruto laughed and shook his head, don't know. Guess it all just turned into muscle. You can say that again, Kin said, grinning as she folded her arms and proceeded to admire the blonde hunk from where she sat, while also continuing to mess with him by keeping him pinned to the futon. After sharing another grin with her, Naruto then focused all of his attention on the purple-haired girl beaming down at him. When he then did a double take when he immediately noticed something different about the girl in front of him and gaped. Isaribi-chan, your bandages? Realizing he'd noticed, the purple-haired beauty brushed a hand through one of her pigtails and gave the boy an inviting look. She even posed for extra measure. Cool, huh? Tsunade-sama performed the operation on me a couple days after you left. While I was under, she was able to remove all of the excess scales and fins left behind after the experiment. Now I look just like a normal girl again. Crossing her arms over her stomach, the girl then puffed out her significantly larger chest. What do you think? Her act was then cut off when she suddenly felt Naruto's hand on her cheek and she froze. Gazing warmly up at the chimera, the spiky-haired Jonin admired her for a moment before smiling. You look amazing, Isaribi-chan. But, even if you still had those scales, you would still be beautiful to me. Gasping at the boy's compliment, the Chunin Kunoichi was unable to stop the flush of red from reaching her cheeks, which led to her leaning into the boy's hand and cupping it with her own. As tears of happiness brimmed at the corners of her eyes, the girl gave a soft sob as she slowly allowed her body to collapse forward onto his, and she practically hugged his head. I've missed you, Naruto-kun. Wrapping his arms around the girl from below, an equally receptive Naruto smiled into the girl's vest while her hand softly caressed and stroked his golden locks. I've missed you too, Isaribi-chan. His interaction with her drew warm smiles from both Tayuya and Kin, both of whom proceeded to watch as the duo hugged it out in the middle of their bedroom. It would be a little while until they eventually separated. By the time they did, the sun had already completely set over the horizon, leaving a gorgeous orange hue hanging in the sky. XXX. A few days later. In the week to follow, Naruto enjoyed a nice moment of reprieve following his journey back down south with Jiraiya. With his master taking some time off to enjoy the sights and sounds of Konohagakure that he missed so much, these being the hot springs and the lovely ladies bathing within them, the blonde decided to take a page out of his book and got down for some R&R. He started this off by catching up with the main ladies in his life, Tayuya, Isaribi and Kin. Obviously the three had missed him something fierce, and so he spent the following days hanging with them, going out for lunch, hitting the bowling alleys, and shopping. In that time he was able to catch up with the other two and learn what they'd gotten up to in the time he'd been away. Aside from having her operation, Isaribi had spent a great deal of her time improving her ninjutsu skills and control over her water element. Thanks to some much-needed training from Anko, who'd taken the liberty of training her and Kin leading up to their Chunin exams, the Chimera could now manipulate her transformation ability with greater flexibility and speed, allowing her to activate her amphibious traits on individual parts of her body, instead of just everywhere at once. She'd also taken some time to receive some medical ninjutsu lessons from Shizun, which gave her an extra set of assets to fall back on outside of combat. Kin had also taken some interesting turns in her development as well. Besides improving her sound ninjutsu through use of her bells, she'd also trained herself in the use of the bow and arrow. By mixing in her sound waves with her use of the projectile, she'd increased the power and range of her abilities to a phenomenal level. She'd even implemented these skills into her CQC skill set, which would give her an extra leg up over conventional opponents. Since Naruto had taken it upon himself to train himself to reach monstrous levels of strength, the girls had also opted to improve their skills to keep up with him, and to provide him support should he ever require it. This put a big smile on the Jinchuriki's face, as he was really keen to see what the two of them could do out on the field. But of course, just before Naruto could really start enjoying his first real break in a while, the blonde soon realized that the responsibilities of a Jonin of Konohagakure were not to be taken lightly. And so, after only a few days of rest, the blonde and the other members of Team 7 were soon called up to the Hokage Tower for an important meeting. Arranged into a row in front of the village leader's desk, Naruto, Sakura and Sasuke, all adorned in their respective signature uniforms, watched patiently as Hiruzen Sarutobi pulled out a scroll and set it in front of him. When their eyes turned to it, the village elder's expression steeled. "That looks like the Mizuki's signature," Sakura observed, spotting the seal of Mei Terumi's inscribed upon the surface of the rolled-up document. "Am I to assume that this message came straight from Kirigakure, Gigi?" Naruto asked, hands in his pockets as he turned his attention to the old man. The third nodded gravely. "Yes." Lacing his fingers in front of him, the man in the wide-brimmed hat leant forward and gave them a rundown on the situation. "It appears that our hidden mist allies have run into a bit of a problem. Several days ago, their village's current Jinchuriki and host of the Six Tails was reported missing after he and his squad were sent on a mission to deliver an important message to Kumogakure. When none of them made it to the rendezvous point or to any of Kirigakure's outposts on their expected check-in times, the village immediately sent out retrieval and hunter nin squads to try and find them." Naruto looked up with a start. "Utakata has gone missing?" "That's not all," Hiruzen informed, lowering one hand and using it to open the scroll. Once the document was unfurled, the elder looked down at it and skimmed over the contents for what he felt like was the 10th time that morning. "One of the two-man teams dispatched to track them down, a party led by Jonin captains Tsubaki and Haku, has also up and vanished." This news was more than enough to put shocked looks on the faces of all three members of Team 7, who knew the former of the two to be an incredibly capable kunoichi. To hear that she, along with a second party member, had disappeared on a search and rescue mission, didn't bode well with them. Reports from the vicinity says that the two kunoichi got into a fight with a pair of incredibly powerful shinobi, which took place in a vicinity very close to the area where you and the teams from Kumogakure and Kirigakure ran into Otogakure forces 3 years ago, the Hokage informed, causing Naruto's expression to harden as memories of that encounter quickly flooded back into his head. There was an incredible amount of damage done to the region as well. Yet after hours of combing over all the islands in the district, not a single trace of either the retrieval team or their opponents could be found. As Naruto took a moment to deeply consider the information, Sakura, noticing the troubled look fall over her teammate, quickly looked towards their village leader and spoke up. "What does the Mizuki request of us, Hokage-sama?" the pinkette asked. Hiruzen straightened up and promptly rolled up the scroll in front of him. "Since you have strong ties with the people involved in these disappearances and have ventured through those areas before, the Mizuki has personally asked for Naruto-kun and a handful of other Konoha shinobi to be dispatched to the islands to assist with the searches." He then held the document forward, watching as Sasuke moved forward and took it. "Because one of you has just returned from an extended assignment away from the Hidden Leaf and is still readapting to the system, I would like the three of you to pick out a squad and head out to Mizu no Kuni as quickly as possible." When Naruto moved over and collected the scroll from Sasuke, the one-eyed Uchiha glanced back at the Hokage suspiciously. "What exactly are we expected to run into out there, sir?" "I'm not sure," the elder answered, resting his hands on the desk as a bead of sweat appeared on his brow. The sight of his aggravated expression caused the three youngsters in front of him to firm up as well. "That is why I suggest you choose your teammates wisely. The last thing we want is to have a repeat of the last incident." Hiruzen looked across at the Jinchuriki with an especially serious look on his face. "Can I trust you to take care of this one, Naruto?" At this, Naruto nodded in understanding and, clenching the scroll tightly, smirked broadly. "Don't worry, Hokage Gigi. You can count on me. As it turned out, I have just the people in mind I want to bring along on this assignment." Oh. Meanwhile, many miles away, in an undisclosed location somewhere in the land of water, a large island with a mountain in its center could be seen jutting out of the ocean. Covered in a heavy patch of forest, this mass of earth, rock and foliage served as an ideal base of operations for anyone wanting to keep out of sight of the authorities. Not only was the place incredibly secluded and away from any large villages or settlements, but the general layout of the island and its placement amongst the others made it the perfect lair for rent. As it turns out, one particular group had already taken up post here. Deep within the cave system of the landmass, inside the mountain where a large, underground reservoir was sitting, a tall, purple-haired woman in a green battle dress with a white fur collar, brown gloves and calf-high sandal boots, was currently glaring into the basin below. Standing beside her was a young, skinny boy with long pale green hair and magenta-colored eyes, and was wearing a gray kimono that was jade green on the inside, cadet blue pants and bandages wrapped down to his ankles. As the pair stared down into the glowing lake at the bottom of the circular cavern, the small boy then spoke up in a soft voice. "So this is where the Three Tails comes to rest after one of its journeys across the ocean?" His question immediately drew an affirmative nod from the purple-haired woman beside him. That's right. And you're saying that Orochimaru-sama would like me to restrain the beast when it comes to nest here? Or when it's nearby, the woman identified as Giran added, upon which she then glanced across at the child. Remember Yukimaru, your special chakra gives you a great deal of control over the beast. As long as you remain calm and focused, you will be able to trap the beast in its lair and keep it calm, which will then allow the sealing team to imprison it inside your body. From there, the rest will be up to you. It was at that moment the kunoichi suddenly noticed the boy standing next to her stiffen up a little, his body starting to tremble a little. Immediately feeling concern for him, the purple-haired jonin reached forward and rested a hand on his shoulder. Hey, there's no need to be afraid. Even though the demon seems powerful, your power is even greater than it. Taking a deep breath at feeling the woman's hand on him, the young man then turned and smiled warmly up at the woman beside him. As long as you are there with me, Giran-san, I know I'll be able to do anything. His remark had the purple-haired female recoil, as she didn't expect the child to say something like that. After a moment of taking in his kind smile and gentle face, Giran beamed back at Yukimaru and nodded. Yeah. Promise you'll stay with me. Yukimaru said, turning into the woman's arm and taking hold of the scruff of her dress. This action had the kunoichi step back a little in surprise. Promise you'll be there with me when I have to take control of the three tails. Stuttering a little, the woman quickly shook herself out of her daze and took the boy's hand in hers. She then knelt down in front of him and looked him right in the eyes. I promise I'll be there to protect you. You have my word, Yukimaru. Feeling so much better, the child then didn't hesitate in moving forward and wrapping his arms around the woman's neck in a hug. But just before the kunoichi could respond, the pair were suddenly interrupted by a figure appearing at the entrance to the cave and the person clearing their throat. When Giran stood up and Yukimaru turned around, they saw the unmistakable form of the pale-skinned, white-haired form of Kimimaro standing there. Flanked by two other sound ninja as well as the large, hulking form of another ninja with brown hair, a rugged chin, and wearing a brown battle vest and pants, the imposing form of the young Kagaya seemed to tower over the pair with his shadow alone. When he saw that he had their full and undivided attention, the white-haired boy nodded towards them. It's almost time. Could you please come with me, Yukimaru-kun? We have to make sure you and everybody else are ready for the ritual. After sharing a worried look with Giran, who then gestured to him that everything was going to be okay, the boy wandered over to where Kimimaro was, where he was then promptly led away by the two sound nin. Upon seeing the boy vanish from sight, the leader of the Elite Sound 5 turned and shot a glare towards Giran. Don't forget why we're here. We have orders to capture the three-tailed beast using Yukimaru's body as the vessel, and to eliminate any and all obstacles that threaten to intervene. Once we have sealed the monster inside of him, we are then required to bring the boy and the demon back to Orochimaru-sama for further study. When he saw Giran lower her head under his fierce glare, Kimimaro pressed onwards. Do not let your attachment to Yukimaru-kun cloud your judgment and compromise the sanctity of this mission. If you try to interfere with the procedure in any way I won't, came Giran's firm response as she glared back at the man who was easily recognized as Orochimaru's best. My loyalty to our master is as firm and unshakable as yours. I am merely Yukimaru's caretaker and nothing more, so you can count on me to see this job through to the end. Kimimaro narrowed his eyes suspiciously on the woman for a moment, before then turning heel and marching past the hulking ninja standing next to him, even managing to knock him aside with his shoulder. We'll see. He then disappeared down the tunnel. Hearing Giran breathe a heavy sigh after sensing Kimimaro vacate the premises, the man with the massive arms and chin turned his stoic eyes towards the woman and spoke in a deep voice. Are you okay, Giran-san? Looking back up at her subordinate briefly, the kunoichi then turned away and huffed. I'm fine, Gozu. Leave me be. Yes, ma'am, the giant of a man replied, giving a courteous bow to his superior before slowly edging out of the chamber. When the towering shinobi exited the chamber, a deathly silence fell over the still-present Giran, whose eyes once again had found their way towards the water. Though the expression on her face conveyed a sense of fierce determination and resolve, the rest of her body reflected nothing but frustration and anger. Her hands clenching tightly into fists and her muscles in her fingers popping as a result, the woman did her best to try and remain calm, and to not let the confrontation that had just taken place stir her up even further. As much as she hated Kimimaro and resented his command in this situation, she knew that she still had a job to do for Orochimaru. Being given the honor of watching over the boy that would supposedly take the three-tailed giant turtle into his body for transportation, she knew that if this mission were to be a success, she would be rewarded handsomely by her master. However, she also knew the fate that the man had in store for Yukimaru. Since Orochimaru desired the power of the three tails and that the boy showed an extreme talent for controlling the beast's chakra, Giran knew that once they seal the monster inside of him, the Sannin would then modify the child's body through doping and drugging, before possessing him through assimilation. Through this method, not only would he be achieving a new form, but also gain full control of the three tails. It was a grim fate what awaited Yukimaru, and it was this very aspect that was now filling Giran's heart with doubt and fear. Leading into this mission, she knew that there was going to be many obstacles to overcome. What the kunoichi didn't know, however, that she would form an attachment to the child, one whom she shared a deep history of pain and regret with. Damn it, Giran thought, gritting her teeth as her fists clenched from a clear battle of internal conflict. Why, does it have to be like this? If it hadn't been for that child worming his way into her cold heart, she wouldn't be having this problem. Not to mention it was starting to bring back a number of other issues too, particularly a certain incident on a beach many years ago. Oh, Meanwhile, many islands away, Sharingan eyes cracking open, a previously meditating Itachi released his hands from their seal and stood up from the boulder he was sitting beside. He was immediately joined by his partner who, having perched himself atop the rock, hopped down to join him on the grass. The sounds of bones cracking and popping filled the air as Kisame leaned to the side and stretched his lower back. Upon which he gave a satisfied sigh. Well, that was a time and a half, sealing Rokubi inside the Geto Mazo. Now it's time for us to do some legwork again. The blue-skinned warrior said as he sifted the massive, bandaged mass of his sword over his shoulder and turned towards his silent partner. Looks like I was right on the money. We're going after the Sanbai next. It certainly seems that way, the Uchiha replied, adjusting the high collar of his cloak and beginning to walk in a random direction through the forest they were in. Kisame took this as his cue to follow and quickly fell in step with him. Sasori said that it is hiding somewhere in our vicinity, so let's get out onto the water and track it down. Easier said than done, Kisame said, reaching up to grab the handle of his battle partner Samahata, which jittered the moment he came into contact with it. I may be a good hunter, but even with my skill set, finding that giant turtle is going to be a bit of a challenge. After all, it was a big ocean and there were so many places that lumbering beast could pop up. Chances are it could be anywhere. We'll start by investigating the most obvious places, the caves and inlets dotting the surrounding isles, Itachi informed as the pair continued on through the dense undergrowth and towards the coast. Orochimaru has set up a number of outposts around the area, all in places that the Three Tails has been known to frequent. If the beast is going to show up anywhere, it will likely be around one of these points. It was from this analysis that put a wide, murderous grin on the former Seven Ninja Swordsman's shark-like face. Am I to assume that we're going to be scouting out these places personally? Yes, Itachi replied, glancing across to see the excitement brimming on his partner's face. The manner in which I will leave in your capable hands. Ah, now that's just what I wanted to hear, the rogue ninja chuckled, craning his head back and taking a deep breath of air. Even though we're likely going to end up fighting a gigantic death turtle capable of sinking islands with a single swipe of its tails, I'm still looking forward to dicing up some of Orochimaru's cronies and turning them into chum. It was then realization struck Kisame, which led to the shinobi glancing across at his younger partner. Hey, if the stars align correctly, do you think we'll end up taking a crack at the snake as well? Maybe, the Uchiha replied. Though the man had his fangs sunk into the island chain, considering how close to the action this was and how crafty the boss was, the likelihood of running into Orochimaru on this mission in person was quite low. The Sannin was especially careful that way.